When the world of the shinobi was still young and still growing. To show that they had power, the people of the elemental nations would call upon great beings of power and destruction. But after centuries of seeing the humans fighting in war after war after war, until one day the Eons finally stopped helping the humans in their battles and began to ignore their prayers altogether, and when the humans began to realize they couldn't call upon the Eons anymore, they were soon forgotten and lost their name to legends and were soon called demons. One such Eon was called the Kyuubi no Kitsune, a powerful being that never really liked serving under humans, it believing that humans were lower than it and that they should serve the Eons, not the other way around. So it set forth to prove that its power was to be recognized its power and set its sights on a human village. That village was the all-hidden leaf village. In the village hidden in the leaves, things were peaceful and people were happy. The war with the hidden rock was over. Their new Hokage, the fourth, was leading them into a golden age with a bright future. In the office of the fourth Hokage we could see the fourth sighing loudly as he was to take on the most hated of all enemies, the dreaded and foul paperwork. After signing the last document, the fourth looked onto the stack of paperwork that still was unfinished and began to glare at it. I hate you so much, you do know that, right? The paper just stood there doing nothing. Stop fucking mocking me, you goddamned bastard, the fourth shouted at the pile of papers. Just about when the secretary for the Hokage walked in carrying a whole new pile of paperwork that had to be filled out. Hokage-sama, these reports have to be filled out and taken care of by tomorrow, the secretary replied in a cheerful tone of voice, not noticing the death glare that was being sent towards her. When she finally did notice the Hokage glaring at her and holding a handful of shuriken and pointing them towards her, she makes a run for it, barely dodging most of them. After seeing that he missed, the fourth began his work on the bastard that was paperwork. Soon night fell and the last document was cinched and the fourth was finished and just about to return home when a mass wave of killer intent was felt all over the entire village. Even the most youngest of ninja felt it and saw it. The creature looked like it could overpass the Hokage tower. It had the body of a fox and blood-red eyes that glowed dangerously in the dark, and it was towards the village. After the fourth got over his shock, he began to call all the village ninjas to be ready to defend their home and charged towards the beast, hoping to stall it till the fourth arrived. As the night went on, many ninja fought valiantly, but it didn't seem to matter as many were wiped out like there were mere insects. Bodies littered the ground and blood was everywhere, and men and women who were not so lucky to receive an instant death were forced to be unbelievable agony as parts of their bodies were torn off and sent flying somewhere. Screams filled the night and everything seemed hopeless, but the ninja of the hidden leaf had faced impossible odds before and won. Keep the monster at bay, the Hokage gets here, screamed one ninja just before he suddenly burst into flames and fell towards the ground, and laughter could be heard from the Kyuubi. At Konoha's hospital, a woman had just given birth to a healthy blonde-haired boy with blue eyes and was being held by the Hokage. I'm sorry Naruto, but this is for the future of the leaf. I hope that someday you will understand, the fourth replied to the small boy who was just smiling at him. The fourth was leaving when he ran into Sarutobi Sandame. The fourth just smiled at the old man. Hey old man, come to say goodbye. The fourth replied, but Sarutobi just looked at him with a sad simile. So you're going to use that seal in order to defeat this demon? The old man replied, looking at the small boy in the fourth's arms. Is this the boy you will use? The fourth nodded and began to walk away. Sarutobi, the fourth called. This thing that we're fighting is not a monster, it's an ancient being called an Eon. Sarutobi just looked at him. An Eon? The old man asked. It's all the book I left in your office, have fun with the paperwork. And with that the fourth used the Hiraishin no Jutsu and was gone in a yellow flash. Once the fourth was close to the battlefield, he began the signs for what would be his end. At the end he shouted out, Huan Fukoku, and after saying it he soon felt the tug onto his soul as the death god began pull his soul out of his body. Got to act fast, he replied in short breath as he cut his thumb and prepared the blood he needed and did the signs and shouted, Kuchio's no Jutsu, and smoke appeared and there stood the toad boss summoned Gamabunta. Gamabunta looked around at first and saw the fourth on top of him. Hey brat, what is the meaning of summoning me? The fourth just pointed to the Kyuubi and Gamabunta eyes widened with shock. The fallen Eon, fallen, the fourth asked. Yeah, he was kicked out of the Eon's little group due to his power-hungry ways. I see, replied the fourth. How close do you think you can get me to it? The fourth replied. Gamabunta just looked at him like he was crazy. Why the fucking hell would I want to do something that fucking crazy? Gamabunta shouted before he saw the fourth in pain holding on to what looked like an infant and was holding onto his stomach. Gamabunta saw this and figured out what was going on. Yubaka, how could you even think to use that seal? Gamabunta shouted. Less talking, more moving, I'm running. Out of time, the fourth replied. Gamabunta nodded and leapt towards the battlefield and was now right in front of the Kyuubi. The Kyuubi was just about to attack the giant frog when it looked towards the being behind it that put fear into the fox, for there stood the death god itself right behind the fourth, slowly draining his soul, and all was silent until one was said by the fourth. Seal. and in a bright light everything stopped. The Kyuubi stood there for a moment until its body fell over. Soon whites could be seen glowing around the corpse. Its body started to fade away into nothing, and the fourth, the most powerful ninja of his time, began to fall, hitting the head of Gamabunta. Taking one last look at the boy he had just cursed, Naruto, good, bye, and that was his final breath. The fourth was dead. 5 years later. It was October the 10th and the day of the Kyuubi festival, a day of food, games and mourning the dead. It was a time to be happy and for the children to be reminded of all the heroes that fought and died defending the village hidden in the leaves. Everyone was happy and getting drunk and enjoying the events. Except for a large group of people, men and women, and one child was receiving a severe beating from the adults. The 5-year-old was able to get away most of the time and was very good at hiding for his age, but was caught by the adults this year and were holding him down and beating on him with pipes and clubs and other things. Some people were using broken bottles and knives and kunai and shuriken, whatever sharp objects, each one taking turns into stabbing the boy in the chest. Blood was pouring out of his wounds and blood was all over the ground. Tears were pouring of the young boy's eyes, and cry for them to stop were felt out dear ears. The boy kept pleading for his life and the mob kept on beating him, screaming for his death for all the lives he took 5 years ago. The mob kept saying things like, fox bastard, demon spawn, murder, filthy murder, and they on beating him until one man came forth holding a sword. Let's end this little monster's life once and for all. But first, the man then took a slash on the boy's chest over and over again. Blood was flowing everywhere and the boy screaming for his life. Then the man with the sword held up the blade towards the boy's head and was going to take the last swing and ending the boy's life once and for all. As the man was bringing the sword towards the head, and then the boy closed his eyes waiting for the end. But felt nothing happen to him. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw the man with the sword, and the mob and the onlookers were just frozen in place. The boy was able to struggle out of the grasp of the villagers that were holding him and noticed all his wounds were healed. As he began to walk away from the mob, he noticed a boy in front of him with brown skin, purple clothing that covered most of his face. All the boy could do is stare, trying to see his eyes, thinking that he was frozen as well, until he did close. Hi, the brown-skinned boy replied, frightening the other boy, causing him to fall to the ground. He soon got up and replied, hello, what's your name? Mine's Uzumaki Naruto. The boy named Naruto, replied the boy with the purple hood, who just stood there, and replied, I know who you are. Naruto just stood there. How do you know who I am? Are you going to hurt me as well? Naruto said in fear of another attempt on his life. Do not worry, Naruto, we are not here to hurt you, we are to offer you power beyond your wildest dreams. The hooded figure replied, and Naruto just looked at him and then looked down at the ground. I don't want power, I just want someone to care about me, that all. The hooded figure just looked at him. You do not wish power to be given you just want people to care about you. The hooded figure replied, clearly shocked by an answer like that by someone so young. Naruto just looked at him and smiled. That's right, I want to be strong and so I can protect all that is important to me, Naruto said again, shocking the hooded figure, which caused him to smirk. You have shown great promise in you, Naruto, and I'm sure that the others will agree with me. Naruto just looked at him in wonder to what he was talking about. Go to your Hokage and ask him about begins called the Ians, then when the time is right I will come for you. And with that the boy disappeared, leaving Naruto to wonder just what the hell he was talking about, but he decided to go and ask the old man about these Eon things and ran straight to the Hokage tower. Naruto ran straight for the Hokage tower, hoping to get some answers as to what the hooded figure was talking about and why the people of the village seemed to hate him so much. Looking around, he could see that the villagers were still frozen, and that made getting to the tower easier. Upon arriving to the tower and getting past the Chunin that were guarding the place, even they were frozen as well. When Naruto finally came to the Hokage's office, pushing the door open and seeing that the old man was frozen as well while signing a document in the process, Naruto walked up to the old man, waving his hand in front of the old man, hoping to get a reaction out of him. But nothing seemed to happen. Naruto just stared at the old man. What's going on? Of course, after Naruto said that, the old man finally moved and saw Naruto there and felt his heart skip a beat as Naruto just suddenly appear and jumped straight of his chair, screaming and falling to the ground. When Naruto noticed that the old man was moving, he peered over the desk and saw the old man laying on the ground and holding his chest where his heart was. What are you doing down there, old man? Sarutobi just looked up to the blonde-haired boy that had just appeared out of nowhere and given him a heart attack. Naruto, how in the world did you just suddenly appear out of thin air like that? Just appear? I've been here for like 5 minutes and you were frozen, and then you just suddenly move like nothing happened. Naruto finished explaining to the Hokage. Frozen? Sarutobi looked at him questioningly. Naruto, what are you talking about? I believe that I can explain. Naruto and Sarutobi turned to the new voice and saw the same hooded figure that told Naruto to come to the Hokage's office. He was still wearing the same purple clothing and had the same hood on that covered most his face. Sarutobi felt it odd that he never felt this boy's chakra. It was like he appeared out of nowhere like Naruto did. He studied the boy, trying to figure out if he was a threat or not. "Who are you?" The hooded figure just stood there, not saying it first before turning to Naruto. "Did you ask him, Naruto?" Naruto just stood there at first. "Oh right, hey old man, what's an eon? That kid in the hood told me to ask you about it." Sarutobi just stood there in shock, thinking that he would never hear about those beings unless in history books. He looked towards the hooded figure and demanded to know how the hooded child knew of such things. "How do you know of those beings? What is your name? What village are you from? Answer me now." Naruto just stood there in shock. He had never the old man like this before, and it scared him. He then looked at the hooded figure to see that he was not even bothered by this. At the end of the old man's ranting, all was quiet. No one moved until finally the boy replied. "My name is Bahamut." At this the Hokage felt as if he was going to have another heart attack. "Bahamut, the Eon of Destruction, is here in my village. Is he here to finish what the Kyuubi had started 5 years ago?" Sarutobi got over his shock and barely able to form the words needed. "What do you want? Hasn't our village suffered enough from your kind already? What do you want with us now?" Sarutobi spoke with fear in his voice before feeling the killer intent from the Eon. "Do not compare us with the fallen Eon. He was a weak-minded fool that never deserved that kind of power in the first place. But that is not why I'm here." He looked towards Naruto. "The reason that I am here is for him." He then pointed towards Naruto. Naruto just blinked. "Why me?" "We have chosen you because we believe that after so many centuries it is time that we have a summoner call for our power and aid you mortals once again." Sarutobi was astonished that not only the Eons were willing to help humans again but had chosen Naruto of all people as a summoner for them. However, there was something that was still bothering him. "Is there another reason that you have chosen Naruto in particular?" Bahamut looked down at the floor. "Yes, there is another reason we have chosen him. It was our fault that this village suffered so much loss and that Naruto was put into a world of pain and suffering." Naruto and Sarutobi just kept looking at Bahamut. "You see, we had the ability to stop Kyuubi all along, but we chose not to, thinking that we had no reason to interfere. We should have stepped in and done something, but we didn't, and because of that mistake Naruto suffered greatly because of it." Naruto just stood there in complete confusion as to what was going on and finally decided to voice his opinion. "What the fucking hell are you two fucking talking about? What the fuck does the fucking Kyuubi have to do with this shit? Why the fuck do the villagers fucking hate me so much, and what in the fucking hell is a goddamn Eon anyway?" Naruto shouted, surprising both the old man and the Eon that a 5-year could swear like that. Once Sarutobi had gotten over the what had just happened, he looked straight at Naruto and finally sat down in his chair and got his pipe ready, for this wasn't going to be easy. Taking a deep breath, Sarutobi began to explain what really happened on the night of the Kyuubi, of how it was too powerful to be killed by normal human abilities, so the Yondaime had to use a sealing technique to seal it into a newborn child, and that child was Naruto. Naruto just stood there with tears in his eyes. "So I really am the demon everyone says I am?" "No, you're not, Naruto." Naruto looked over at Bahamut. "You are not a demon, Naruto, nor have you ever held a demon inside of you. The Kyuubi was an Eon just like me, but was a danger to everything, so we stripped him of the title of Eon and gave him the title of Fallen and took away most of his power." Sarutobi was shocked to find out that the Kyuubi was not an Eon when it attacked the village, but what really bothered him was the fact that Bahamut had said the Kyuubi was not sealed into him. "What do you mean the Kyuubi was not sealed into him? I've seen the seal myself." Bahamut just looked at him. "What I said is the truth. The seal is empty and the Kyuubi is dead and has been dead for 5 years. Sarutobi was overwhelmed at this information and was getting a migraine from all this. Was just too much to handle. In one night he needed a bottle of sake and some sleep. So now we are back to the beginning. "So Naruto, how do you feel about becoming the first summoner after centuries?" Naruto just looked at him and began to weigh the options of what could happen. Soon 2 questions came to mind that need to ask. "Hey Bahamut-sama, I have some questions about this whole summoner thing." "And what would they be?" 1. Is it possible that I could take someone with me if I hate to travel? And 2. Could I still become a ninja if I were a summoner? Bahamut just stared at Naruto, wondering where those thoughts came from before answering. "Yes, Naruto, you could still be ninja and a summoner, but I'm afraid you cannot bring anyone with you on your pilgrimage unless you are a master summoner and bringing them along to be your apprentice." Naruto looked happy and disappointed at the same time. "So when can I get started, Bahamut-sensei?" "Anytime you're ready to leave the village, but you should ask for the Hokage's permission first, for you will need to leave the village in order to acquire the rest of the Eon's power." Naruto looked over at the Hokage, about ready to beg for the chance to do something like this. "All right Naruto, if that is what you want, then I will allow you to leave the village as long as you make contact with me every now and then to show that you are alright." Naruto just smiled at the old man. "Thank you, old man. Well, now that everything has been settled, I will take my leave, but before I go, take this, Naruto." Bahamut had given Naruto a scroll that had said wind on it and looked inside to see a map of elemental nations. One particular area in Wind Country was glowing. That is the location of the first Eon you must earn the respect of. However, I must warn you that some Eons will not accept you. Some will have you passed a test to earn their power, but in the end you will be grateful for it. And after saying that, Bahamut vanished into thin air. Sarutobi looked at Naruto to see that he was about to fall asleep. Naruto, why don't I walk you home and tomorrow we will gather everything you will need, okay Naruto? Naruto. Sarutobi looked done at Naruto, so see that he was asleep, so he picked him and took the small boy home so that he could be rested for tomorrow. Well, the winner is Heavy Blade 9, that will be the weapon for Naruto. Naruto awoke to a new day in his apartment after getting breakfast, which was 3 cups of instant ramen, and then he left to go to the park to see if he could maybe play with the other kids before he left the village to begin his trip. After locking the door to his home, Naruto ran through the village ignoring the usual glares that were being sent towards him, but he didn't care. Today he was going to make some friends, whether these fucking villagers like it or not. The not be the key word, but he didn't care. Today was going to be a good day, he could feel it. Once he arrived at the park, he saw many children playing around and laughing at the small things that children do. That is, at least until they saw him, and then they began to whisper, "That's the demon kid, what's he doing here? This isn't a place for monsters like him. Why doesn't that freak just die?" Each adding their own 2 cents, and each one felt like a knife in his heart. He was about to leave when he heard someone crying. Naruto turned his head and saw 3 boys that were making fun of some little girl with pink hair. Now, from what the old man had told him, boys weren't supposed to things like that to girls. "Hey, leave her alone, you bastards." The 3 boys looked over to the voice to see Naruto. "What are you going to do to stop us, you little brat?" one boy said before feeling a hard punch to the jaw. The other 2 boys looked shocked and were about to take revenge for their fallen comrade until they saw the whisker marks on Naruto's face, recognizing him. "It's the demon kid," one of the boys said. "Let's get out of here." Soon all 3 boys were gone and all that was left was Naruto and the pink-haired girl. "Thank you for helping me," the girl said after she finished crying. "My name's Haruno Sakura." Naruto just looked at her. "My name's Uzumaki Naruto," Naruto said while grinning like a fox, causing Sakura to giggle until they both heard "Sakura," and saw a blonde-haired girl running towards them. "Sakura, where were you? I've been looking everywhere for you. And who's this?" Ino looked over at Naruto and starting to glare at him. "Where you picking on my friend Fox Boy?" Naruto was a little scared of this girl until Sakura said, "Talk to the blonde girl." "Ino." He stopped some boys who were teasing and making fun of me. "Please be nice to him." Ino looked at her friend, then at Naruto and back to Sakura. "Okay, name's Yamanaka Ino, nice to meet you." Naruto and Sakura just sweat dropped. Soon the 3 kids were just talking about things they wanted to be in the future. Ino wanted to be a great kunoichi like her father and maybe have a family. Sakura wanted to be a great medic nin like her mother, and Naruto wanted the greatest shinobi ever and summoner there was. At this, the 2 girls just stared at him, about to ask him what a summoner was, until they noticed a huge beetle on Naruto's shoulder and started screaming. Naruto saw this and just picked the bug up, and seeing a boy with a large trench coat and sunglasses and another boy with red markings below his eyes and a puppy near his feet. "Is this your bug?" Naruto asked the boy after giving him the bug. "Yes." The 2 just stared at each other until Aburame Shino. He looked over to the boy with the dog. "This is Inuzuka Kiba and Akamaru." "Hi, Bark." The 2 replied. "Uzumaki Naruto, and this is Sakura and Ino." The 2 waved at the other boys. It didn't take long for the kids to get along with one another. Soon the kids were playing a game of tag with Akamaru until Naruto stumbled over someone by accident. "Sorry," Naruto said to the kid with a pineapple-shaped haircut. "Watch where you're going, troublesome." Naruto just looked at him. "My name's Naruto." The boy looked at him and replied, "Nara Shikamaru," and went back to watching the sky. Naruto then noticed another boy eating a bag of chips. "Akamichi Choji." Naruto just looked at the boy. "Akamichi. Hey, I think I seen you guys at Ichiraku." Choji looked at him. "You like ramen?" "Like it, it's the food of the gods." After hearing this, Choji offered Naruto a chip, which shocked Shikamaru because Choji never offered anyone his chips, not even him. Naruto just looked at what Shikamaru was staring at. "What are you looking at anyway?" Naruto asked. "The clouds." Naruto stared at the clouds. "What's so great about them?" Shikamaru just looked at him. "They just float there, they don't have to worry about anything, nothing bothers them, I envy them." After hearing this, Naruto got on ground and started cloud watching, so the others joined them, and this caught the eye of Uchiha Sasuke as he walked over to them. "What are you all doing?" They all just looked at Sasuke. "Cloud watching." Sasuke just asked the truth. "Why?" To which they all replied, "To troublesome, so explain." At this, Sasuke just shrugged his shoulders and joined in. "Sasuke Uchiha." Naruto looked over at him. Uzumaki Naruto. After a while they got bored and Naruto began play fetch with Akamaru. It was then that Naruto noticed someone hiding behind a tree. Naruto looked over and saw a girl about his age with blue hair, pale skin and white pupils eyes. He then noticed the ball. Hey, can we have our ball back? The girl noticed the ball and gave it to him. Thanks, what's your name? Soon the girl began to blush. Hyuga H Hinata. The girl said with a blush and with her head down, that's a nice name, mine's Uzumaki Naruto. Do you want to join us? Hinata just stared into his blue eyes, unsure of what to do. Will why your friends L like me? Of course they will, you seem nice and you got cool eye. At this Hinata blushed and wanted to run away until Naruto held out his hand. Come with me, and Hinata did just that. Once Naruto got back to everyone he introduced Hinata to them. Hey guys, this is Hyuga Hinata, he said while Hinata hid behind Naruto. She a little shy. He then turned to Hinata, go on, say hello. Hinata got in the open and spoke. It's a pleasure to meet you all. She stuttered and then bowed to everyone. They all gave their greetings and began to play around some more, tell jokes and even get Hinata to stop stuttering and tell Hinata-sama. Everyone soon saw a boy about a year older than them with the same eye color as Hinata but didn't look too friendly. Then they noticed a girl with her hair in two buns wearing a pink Chinese clothing and a boy with huge eyebrows that looked to moving on their own. Nage-ne-san, Ten-ten-san, Lee-san, what are you doing here? Hinata seemed nervous and Naruto didn't like it. You were supposed to come home an hour ago, what have you been doing? He asked with some anger and some concern. I was playing with my new friends and lost track of time, I'm sorry Ne-san. Neji and his two friends were shocked that Hinata had been playing with friends and hadn't stuttered once and didn't blush. That's nice Hinata, I'm happy for you, Ten-ten said to the girl who she considered a little sister. Well, aren't you going to introduce us? Hinata nodded and stared to name off everyone and got to Naruto. And this is Naruto-kun, she said with a blush that go unnoticed by everyone, especially Ten-ten who just had teased her. Naruto Kuun huh, well I think you two would make a cute couple. At this Naruto and Hinata both blush a deep red. Ten-ten walked over to Naruto. Hi, I'm Ten-ten, the white eye guy is Neji and the other guy is Lee, he doesn't really talk that much. Neji then stepped forward. Hinata-san, it's time to go home. Hinata just looked at him. But I don't want to go home, I want to stay with my friends a little longer please Ne-san. Hinata gave the puppy eye look and Neji just couldn't resist it. Alright, just a little while longer then we get you home. Hey guys, look at the sunset, said Naruto. They all turned towards his direction and saw the orange sky as the sun began to disappear. It's beautiful, Sakura said and everyone agreed it was. Then Ino asked, hey Naruto, you never told us what a summoner was. Naruto just looked at her. I forgot all about it. So what is it already? Ino said a little annoyed. Well, I'm not real sure, but do you guys know about the summoning jutsus that ninjas perform? Everyone nodded due to the fact they all were going ninjas one day, so they all nodded. Well, a summoner is able to summon these things called Ians, which are like stronger than the Kyuubi no Kitsune. At that comment everyone was speechless until Kiba voiced his opinion. Naruto, how can these Ians be more powerful than the Kyuubi no Kitsune? Naruto looked at him, because the Kyuubi used to be one, but they didn't like him and they kicked him out and took away most of his power. At this everyone's jaws hit the ground. They wanted to ask more but they realized what time it was and had to leave soon. Well, I have to get home, let's play again tomorrow guys, Sakura said happily until they noticed Naruto looking down. Hey Naruto, what's wrong? Sakura asked worried. I can't be here tomorrow, I have to leave on my pilgrimage for the Ians tomorrow, he said with sadness in his voice. Everyone looked sad after hearing this. So when will you be back? Hinata asked. Naruto stared at his friends. I don't know, it could take years. What? Was everyone's reply except for Hinata's. No, you can't leave, she said and held on to him tightly. To Naruto this was a new experience, he had never been hugged before and he didn't know why it felt nice when Hinata did it. Hinata-chan, I'll come back someday and when I do I'll be really strong and I want you to be strong as well, so don't be sad, okay? Hinata just looked at him, did her best not to cry but nodded. So this is where you all are? Everyone looked to see his and her parents looking at them. Just what are you doing here this late at night? Said the woman with pink hair who was most likely Sakura's mother. What are you doing with this thing? She said pointing at Naruto. Most as the kids were confused as to what she meant but their confusion turned to anger. Naruto is not a demon, screamed all the kids, even Hinata, which surprised her mother and father. Naruto is funny, and kind, nice and, the list went on as each child said something good about him, leaving the adults to wonder if they were wrong about the boy, but soon they had enough. Alright, we get the picture, the woman who looked like Hinata, but it's time to go home. Alright, the kids agreed and each gave Naruto a handshake or a hug goodbye. Soon almost everyone was about to leave until Hinata did something that would affect Naruto and herself for years to come. She kissed him on the cheek, shocking Naruto, herself, and her parents. No words were said but they knew that their future would revolve around them someday. Hinata, Neji. As the Hyugas were nearing the compound, Hinata's mother looked at her daughter. So when can we start the wedding? Hinata blushed a full tomato red. Kasen, Hinata yelled, causing her father to chuckle and Neji to smirk. Ino. With Ino and her parents, they were thinking of ways to make sure their daughter never went near the demon child. Ino, honey, we need to talk to you about that boy you were playing with today. Ino just looked at her parents. What's wrong, Kasen? Ino's parents looked at each other and sighed. We don't want you going near that boy ever again, Ino, he's dangerous and we just want you to be safe, that's all. Ino just stared at her parents in shock. Why, Naruto's my friend, I spent a whole day with him and nothing happened, so what makes him so dangerous, huh? Inos just stared at one another trying to come up with an answer but couldn't. See, you insult my friend without any good reason, he's a great person and he's going to be a summoner. Ino said with tears in her eyes and ran to her run, slamming the door. Ino's parents just stared at each other. A summoner, him. Sakura. With Sakura and her parents it was somewhat similar. Sakura, you are never to go near that monster ever again. Do you understand me, young lady? Sakura's mother said to her. But why, Kasen, he was nice and he helped me when some mean boys were picking on me again. Sakura explained, but her voice fell on deaf ears. Were you talking back to me? Sakura's mother yelled, making Sakura flinch. Sakura, you must understand that boy is a bad influence, he will distract you from your studies and you won't make any friends. Sakura's father explained. But that's not true, it's because of him that I meet Hinata, Tenten, Choji, Kiba, Lee, Shino, Shikamaru, Neji, and Sasuke. Sakura said, doing her best to catch her breath. Her parents were in shock that because of one boy their daughter had become friends with so many people and had stood up to them as they could do was sigh. Alright Sakura, we understand he's your friend, but give us one good reason why we should give him respect and then go to bed. Sakura pondered for a moment, then thought of what Naruto had said earlier. He's going to be a great ninja and a summoner, and with that Sakura left her parents who were gawking at the news. A summoner of the Eons, him. Kiba. At the Inuzuka home, Kiba's mother was ranting about why he shouldn't go near the fox boy while his sister Hana was sitting by watching the whole thing. What do you have to say for yourself, Kiba? Why are you trying to disgrace our clan's name by being around that fox boy? Do you know what kind of social damage you'll get by being near him? Kiba just looked at his mother, then at his sister for support. Kasen, that's going too far, you're making a big deal out of two kids playing with each other and Akamaru seems to like him as well. Kiba's mother just looked at her daughter. It is a big deal, Hana, we can't let a fox boy ruin our clan name. Kiba stood up. Stop it, stop calling him fox boy, his name is Naruto and he's my friend and deserves our respect because he's going to be a summoner. Kiba's mother just looked at him. Kiba will talk about this in the morning. Kiba noticed the change in her voice and just did as he was told. Hana just looked at her mother. Kasen, what wrong? Kiba's mother just stood there. A summoner that can't be. Sasuke. With the Uchiha brothers, Sasuke looked towards his older brother, Oni-san. Itachi looked down to his brother. What is it, Odoto? Itachi said in a cold manner. What's a summoner anyway? Sasuke asked like it was no big deal. Itachi looked at him with shocked. Why do you ask? Well, that Naruto kid said tomorrow he would leave to become a summoner, so what is it anyway? Itachi looked at his brother, still unable to believe what he was hearing. Sasuke, I'll explain it to you tomorrow, we need to get home before dinner gets cold. Sasuke just nodded his head. I'll have to explain this to Otusan, he may not like this, but as long as Sasuke has a friend and a powerful one at that. Itachi thought to himself. Tenten, Lee. At the Rakuan weapon shop, Tenten and Lee, who sometimes stay with them rather than going back to the orphanage aka fucking rat hole. Tenten parents asking why they went to see Naruto. They didn't hate the boy, but they knew if Lee or Tenten were seen near the boy, the villagers would take their anger out on them. They didn't want to see their only daughter hurt and a boy they considered a son hurt. Lee, Tenten's father looked down at the children. At first they thought they were in trouble for something until. I'm very proud of both of you. Now the two kids were confused. What did we do? Tenten asked, clearly confused, until her mother stepped in. You made friends with that Naruto boy, which is great because he doesn't have many friends other than the group you were with today. Tenten was confused. Naruto seemed like an okay guy. Why's that, Kasen? Is it because he's a summoner? A moment of silence filled the room until both parents gave a whaat. A summoner, him are. You sure? Tenten's father asked. All Tenten and Lee could do was just nod their heads. When does he leave for his pilgrimage? Tenten fathers asked. Tomorrow, I think. Tenten father rushed into the back of the shop where the rare weapons were kept and special scrolls, and then Tenten father came out with a scroll with the word guardian on it. Shikamaru, Choji. With Shikamaru and Choji and their fathers, who knew better than to lecture them about being around the wrong people, since Shikamaru wouldn't care, saying it would be too troublesome to find a reason not to be friends with Naruto. And Choji could always see the good in people, so their fathers didn't push the issue, but something kept bugging Shikamaru, so he asked his father, Otosan, can you explain what a summoner is? Both fathers looked surprised at this. Where did you learn that? Choji then spoke. Well, we heard that Naruto was going to be a summoner, so we want to know more about it. Naruto a summoner? Man, that kid is troublesome, Shikamaru's father said. Well, explain tomorrow. Okay, the boys agreed and went their separate ways. As for our newest summoner, who most would think would be packing for the long trip ahead, was instead at Ichiraku ramen eating bowl after bowl. So Naruto, what's with all the ramen so far? You leaving on a long trip or something? Naruto just looked up from his bowl, yes, and went back to eating. Of course the old man didn't take it so well, crying about his best costumer leaving and causing his daughter to shake her head at his antics and looking over to Naruto. So when are you leaving, Naruto-kun? She asked politely. Tomorrow I leave to go on my pilgrimage to become a summoner. Naruto boosted, leaving the two ramen workers confused. They had heard of summoning jutsus from other ninja but never a summoner. So Naruto, what's a summoner do anyway? Iyame asked. Well, a summoner is a person who summons the things called ians that are stronger than the Kyuubi no Yoko. This caused both ramen workers' jaws to drop to the floor. Soon Naruto finished his last bowl and looked at Iyame, who was like a sister to him and one of the few people he felt like he could trust. Iyame-nichan, could I ask you about something? Iyame looked down at Naruto. What is it, Naruto-kun? She then noticed Naruto was starting to blush. Well, can I ask you about girls? Iyame just smiled. So little Naruto-kun has himself a girlfriend, huh? Naruto suddenly blushed a deeper shade of red while Iyame kept smiling. So what's her name? Naruto finally got over the blush. Well, she's pretty, has blue hair, white eyes, and her name is Hyuga Hinata. After hearing this, both ramen workers' jaws for the second time hit the ground. The Hyuga Hinata, heir to the Hyuga clan, one of the most famous clan in Konoha. That Hyuga Hinata. Iyame just stood there with shocked at this little bit of information, then asked Naruto in a stern voice. Naruto, do you like this girl because she comes from a very wealthy family, or do you really like her? Naruto could tell by her voice she was serious, and then thought back he liked Hinata and he didn't even know she was rich. Not that it mattered, she was nice, and then he thought back to the kiss she gave him and how nice it felt. I guess I like her for who she is. I didn't even know she was rich, but that doesn't matter. Iyame liked that answer. That's good, Naruto, I'm proud of you answer and hope I get to meet her soon. Okay, Nichan, thanks, Naruto said and left for his apartment to get some sleep. Hokage Tower. Sarutobi was in his office speaking, so a man who was dressed in all dark red with a bottle of sake hanging and a heavy sword to his side and a pair of sunglasses. So you're going to be helping Naruto to become a summoner and teach how to use swords as well? Sarutobi asked while taking a puff from his pipe. Yes, I will teach him the many roads of life, but it is his story, he has to choose which road to follow. I see, here are the directions to his apartment. Sarutobi gave him a slip of paper with some writing on it. Please take care of him. The figure looked at him. I will. This chapter has been read. And on a final note, fucking reviews new fucking chapters. Thank you for reading. Naruto awoke to the sound of someone beating on his front door. Just a minute, Naruto opened the door to find a man dressed in all black wearing a mask of a dog on his face. Hokage-sama wishes me to bring you to him, get dressed. Naruto just stared at the man. What? The man asked, noticing how Naruto just kept staring at him. Cool mask, Naruto said before closing the door to get dressed. After putting on a white shirt with the village symbol on it, blue shorts and shoes, walked out of his home, ready to go. As Naruto and the man with the dog mask were walking through the village, ignoring the villagers' glares towards Naruto, who just put on a smirk while walking next to the dog-face man. Hey dog man, said Naruto to the man with the mask, why do you wear that weird mask anyway? The man just looked at him. I'm Anbu. Naruto just looked at him. What's that? The man just sighed. Anbu, Black Ops are ninja that do the most dangerous of missions, understand? Naruto just nodded his head, then began to pull around his backpack for something until pulling out a map scroll. The Anbu member just looked at him out of curiosity. So you've been all over the place, can you tell me about this place? Naruto said while pointing at Wind Country where the X was. The Anbu member looked at him, wondering why this kid want to go to Wind Country in the first place. After all, there was nothing there but sand and the scorching sun. Why on earth would you want to go to that place like that? There's nothing there but sun and sand and enemy ninja, that's about it, replied the Anbu member. Well, I have to start my pilgrimage today to become a summoner and I have to go there first, Naruto replied like it was no big deal. But the Anbu member didn't believe him. He knew what this kid was talking about, and that was nothing more than myths and legends, nothing more, nothing less. Sorry kid, but what you're talking about is not real, is just a bunch of legends that people made up to pass the time. Naruto just looked at him until, what the fuck do you know, asshole? You think that just because you some big fucking high class ninja that you know every fucking thing about the world? Well, you're dead wrong, you bastard, because I will become a fucking summoner, and if you don't fucking believe me, ask the fucking Hokage. and with that Naruto raced off towards the Hokage tower, leaving a shocked Anbu member and civilian member to wonder, where did that kid learn to talk like that? Naruto ran straight to the Hokage tower, ignoring all the people. He was bumbling into everyone and bursting through the doors of the Hokage right into the old man's office. "Hey old man," screamed Naruto as he entered the office of the village leader. "Naruto, glad you could make. We have some things to discuss before you set out, but where is you escort? That fucking prick bastard. Who cares, let's just talk about my pilgrimage already," Naruto said, annoyed until a poof of smoke suddenly with the dog-masked Anbu member. "Greetings Hokage-sama, go to see you Kakashi, but why didn't you show up with Naruto?" Kakashi replied, "Well, he said he was going to be a summoner and I tried to explain that as was just old stories, but he started swearing and ran off." The Hokage looked at him. "Kakashi, why would you tell a child something like when you don't even know if it's true or not?" Kakashi was speechless. "But Hokage-sama, what are you saying? Of course it's not true. The summoners and the eons are nothing but old legends, nothing more." The Hokage just took a puff of smoke from his pipe and breathed out. "Kakashi, yes Hokage-sama," Kakashi said, a bit nervous. "I'll have you know that the boy sitting right in front of you happens to be the next summoner, and as for the eons, one was here last night." Kakashi was stunned by what he was hearing. "There's more. We have in fact met an eon before. It was 5 years ago." After hearing this, memories of when the Kyuubi no Kitsune attacking the village, killing many of his friends and taking the life of his sensei. "What a minute, are you saying that the Kyuubi no Kitsune was an eon?" The Hokage nodded his head. "But there is more. It seems that we were wrong about the eon being sealed with Naruto. It was in fact destroyed by the Yondaime. He did manage to kill it." Kakashi's jaw would have hit the ground if his mask weren't in the way. Hours went by with Naruto and the Hokage talking about all the information that was on the eons. Explained that each eon represented an element or a human spirit, like wind, fire, thunder, ice, destruction, honor, darkness, and trust. There was also the fact that with each eon that Naruto summoned and grew stronger, they would become stronger as well. However, there was also the fact there would be a main summon for a summoner, make it the summoner and the eon 10 times more power when summoned. This astonished the young boy, who just couldn't contain his excitement. "Sweet," Naruto screamed. After going over all the information that was on the eons, the Hokage decided to give Naruto his gift. "Naruto, there is something I want to give you before you leave. Think of it as a birthday present." "Is it ramen?" The Hokage sweat dropped. "No Naruto, it is something for you to protect not only yourself but those precious to you as well." Naruto just looked at the old man. "People who are precious to me?" Naruto asked, wondering who that could be, until images of all his new friends came to mind. But the one to really get his attention was the image of Hinata, and that made his heart flutter at the mere thought of her. "Old man, I swear that I will always protect all the people that are precious. That's the promise of a lifetime." The Hokage smiled at hearing this and held out a long sword and gave it to Naruto. Naruto took a hold of the sword, or at least tried to. The thing was bigger than him in length and he could barely hold on the thing and eventually fell to the ground, sword and all. "Hey old man, what the fuck with this sword? I can barely lift the fucking thing," Naruto said while glaring at the Hokage. "That sword was specifically chosen by your guardian for you to learn how to use and defend yourself on your pilgrimage." Naruto was speechless. "Guardian? What the hell do I need a guardian for? I can take care of myself." "Can you?" a deep voice said behind Naruto. Naruto looked behind him, wondering how he didn't sense before even standing before him. Now Naruto felt nothing but a hollow shell. "Who are you?" "Orin, your guardian." Naruto stared at him, noticing that man was tall, old, wore mostly red, kept his left arm in his coat and had a shoulder armor on and carried a sword just like his but bigger. He also had on sunglasses and could see a small bottle around his waist and could smell sake coming from, meaning he was a drunk. Naruto then looked at the Hokage. "You're kidding me, right?" The Hokage just shook his head back and forth. "No Naruto, he is your guardian. In the past the summoners had guardians to protect them when they needed it, or high summoners who had more experience and could take care of their followers, understand?" Naruto looked at the old man, knowing that he couldn't get out of this. "All right old man." He then looked towards his guardian. "When do we leave?" Orin looked at the boy. "Tomorrow near sundown, so you can say goodbye to your friends and collect whatever you may need." Naruto nodded his head and left the office. The Hokage looked at Orin. "That boy has long road ahead of him. His father and mother would be proud." Then Hokage said with a tear rolling down his face, "Yes, his story is just starting, and yet I expect many great things for him." A new day had appeared over the Hidden Leaf village, and Naruto was up early packing his things, getting ready for the long trip ahead after cleaning his apartment and deciding to go to Ichiraku for one last meal before he left his home. It wasn't long before Naruto was finishing his 5th bowl of ramen in under 3 minutes, but he usually finished a lot quicker than that, and the ramen stand owners knew that. "Hey Naruto-kun, what's wrong? You usually finish off your 10th bowl by now." Naruto looked up from his bowl and stared at Ayame, who was like an older sister, and her father, who was always kind to him. "Well, I have to leave the village to start my pilgrimage to become a summoner." "Well, that's nice." "What?" The old man shouted, hearing that his best customer would be leaving the village. You can't leave the village, I won't let you. I chain you to the seat so that you can't leave and will have to keep buying ramen over and over again. Ha 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 uff. Naruto was a little creeped out by the old man's crazy behavior until he saw his daughter standing over him was a bedded pan in her hand. Ignore him, Naruto, whatever you do will make us proud, and remember that you are always welcome here. The Yame smiled at him, then noticed someone hiding behind a building looking at Naruto. Hey, do you need something? Naruto turned around and saw someone in the shadows and felt something familiar about the aura she was giving off. Then he recognized it. Hey, Hinata-chan. Hinata stepped out of the shadows with a blush on her face. Hello Naruto-kun. Come on and sit here, Hinata-chan, have some ramen with me. Hinata nodded her head. Okay. She sat next to Naruto and ordered one shrimp ramen, but as she was eating it, Naruto was looking at her, noticing that her aura was almost the same as Bahamut-sama. Hinata-chan, are you okay? Naruto reached over to her, and when he touched her hand and suddenly bright began to fill the area like fireflies, and then there was a burning sensation on both Hinata and Naruto's hand, forming a symbol. On Hinata's hand there was the symbol for darkness, and for Naruto there was the symbol for destruction. Then there was the singing. Iui no Bamanu Renmiri Yojuyogo Hasatekane Kudame. Soon a crowd began to form around the ramen stand, wondering what was happening. Soon the lights began to shape and then women appeared from the lights. The problem was everyone could see right through her. Naruto looked at her, having an idea of what she was, but Hinata was scared of this woman. The women looked at her. Hello young one. Hinata could tell she was addressing and was nervous. Hello, who are you? My name young summoner is Anima, the Eon of Darkness. This shocked both kids. MEAS summoner, you must be mistaken, you want Naruto-kun. Hinata explained, trying hard not to sound offensive. No, I mean you Hinata-sama or a summoner like Naruto-sama, but your time as summoner is not near. I am just informing you of what is ahead of you, so until the time comes I shall bid you farewell. Soon Anima faded away, leaving a stunned Naruto and Hinata. Naruto looked at Hinata and could say one thing to fit the situation. Fucking sweet Hinata-chan, you're a summoner just like me, this is so cool, maybe when we become genin we could be put on the same team and totally kick ass. As Naruto ranted on while Hinata just kept thinking of the possibilities of her and Naruto on the same team, it wasn't long before she stared to blush and look like a tomato. Soon Naruto was done ranting and noticed how late it was. Hey Hinata-chan, do you mind if I walk you home? Hinata just turned into a darker shade of red. SSS sure Naruto-kun. The kids began walking towards the Hyuga compound, not even noticing that they were walking hand in hand. Once the two kids got to the compound, they were both greeted by the very dangerous Hyuga Aki and Hyuga Hiyashi, aka two very pissed off parents were standing right at the very entrance of compound waiting to chew their daughter out for leaving the compound and without an escort. Hinata's mother stepped forward. Hinata, where have you been? Do you know how worried we were that something could have happened to you, and what is that on your hand? Hinata tried to hide it, but she couldn't hide it from her father. Is that a tattoo on your hand? Hiyashi screamed at the top of his lungs. Hinata's mother was in a different mood. Why Kami-sama, where have I gone wrong in raising my daughter? Hinata's mother was sobbing while Hinata herself was pure red from embarrassment she was receiving from her parents in front of Naruto. Naruto found a way to end this. Hinata-chan's a summoner. At hearing this, both parents were frozen in place until, what? It's true, I got the same type of mark when Hinata-chan's main summon appeared. This made both parents' eyes grow to the size of dinner plates. So my little Hinata is going to be a summoner, Aki replied with tear of joy ruining down her face. Hiyashi was proud of Hinata, expecting her to be something great, but this would far better than he could have hoped for, and hugged his daughter, telling her how proud he was of her. Naruto saw this as a good time to leave since this was a family moment, something he didn't want to. He turned around and began to leave until two strong arms wrapped around him. Where are you going, Naruto-kun? You can stay here for the night if you want, after all you're one of Hinata's friends, Aki said in a gentle voice. But, not buts, Naruto-kun, you're staying here for the night and that's final, Aki said, but Naruto noticed something, the same type of aura Hinata. Aki-sama, can I see something? Sure Naruto-kun, what is it? Naruto didn't answer, he just placed his hands on her stomach and closed his eyes and began to sense the power from within Aki, who was getting nervous. What are you doing, Naruto-kun? Naruto took his hand off of Aki and smiled at her. It looks like the Hyuga family are going to have two children that are summoners. This shocked everyone that was nearby. Hinata walked over to Naruto. Naruto-kun, are you sure that my Okasan is going to have a baby? Am I going to really be a Oni-san? I'm sure, Hinata-chan. At this, Hinata hugged Naruto while Aki was bursting with tears of joy. I'm going to have another baby, isn't that wonderful, Hiyashi? Hiyashi. Aki looked over to see that her husband had fainted. Not again, this is just like when he found out about Hinata. Aki ground while rubbing her eyes. Okay everyone, it's time for bed. Naruto-kun, you'll sleep in Hinata's room, a servant will bring you something to wear to sleep. Soon everyone was fast asleep waiting for the big day tomorrow. Naruto had woken up know that this was the day of his pilgrimage and to become a summoner he eat with the Hyuga family and saw that they had given him a few things for his trip such as food, maps, scrolls and other things to help survive and the family even went with him to send him off even some branch members went growing attached to the boy manly Nage. They soon arrived at the East End Gate where Naruto and all his friends the people of the ramen shop and the Hokage were all there. What are you guys doing here? They all looked at him. Just wishing you good luck and to come back soon. Naruto was speechless for once in his life people actually gave a fuck about him. Soon Oren showed up with his and Naruto's sword. Are you ready to go? Naruto nodded his head. Well goodbye everyone by Hinata-chan. Goodbye Naruto-kun, Hinata said while giving Naruto a kiss on the cheek causing him no nearly faint. Right, I just wish I could be there to see the new kid, Naruto said a bit disappointed. We just might, Oren said. Naruto just looked at him. What do you mean? Well if we can the Eon that is in Fire Country in time we just might make it back in time for the birth. Right, thank you Oren sensei, and with one final hug from all the girls and goodbyes from all the guys Uzumaki Naruto the future summoner began his pilgrimage to become a summoner. Naruto and Oren were walking to the end of Fire Country and nearing the border of Wind Country and Oren was about ready to bury his sword into Naruto's chest just to get him to shut up. When Naruto did manage to shut up which Oren silently thanked Kami for it Naruto asked the question that was bothering him. Hey Oren-sensei how do you know so much about the Eons and summoners anyway? Oren looked at the boy and answered, I guided summoners on their pilgrimages before that's how I know where the temples are, he answered plainly. Naruto looked at him and processed the information and then came up with one thing and shouted out, holy fucking shit zombie, and he tried to make run for it but was being held in place by Oren who was holding onto him by the back of his shirt. Once Naruto figured out that he wasn't moving and saw that Oren was holding onto his shirt. Naruto began to sweat in fear and asked, you're not going to eat my brain are you? As Naruto said this Oren's left eye began to twitch and he answered, no. Once Naruto calmed down and turned his back to Oren he was soon hit on the back of the head with something he turned around and saw that Oren had used the other side of his sword to hit him. Soon Naruto got pissed, what the fuck was that for you Heberiki swordsman? Naruto shouted to which Oren replied, because you're a baka, and walked away. Hours went by and the two travelers passed over the border of Fire Country and were now in Wind Country which Naruto couldn't understand because there was no wind just desert and heat that was about it. It wasn't long in the desert that the two had made contact with two sand ninja. Halt you are in Wind Country state your name and business here and speak carefully. Oren answered them, I am a traveler with my apprentice here the Wind Temple so that he may become a summoner. At hearing this the sand ninja looked at each other started at Naruto and each other and began laughing while trying to speak. Ha 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 this kid ha is summoner ha ha come on. Naruto was just getting plain pissed at this while Oren just stood there in a clam before answering, I'm not joking. The two looked at each other and could see that he wasn't joking. One of them answered, you need to see the Kazekage-sama and get his permission before entering the Temple of the Wind. It is a scared place for our village. Oren looked at them and agreed to go with them to the sand village. When they finally arrived at the village hidden in the sand to say Naruto was shocked to see that the buildings were all made of sand truly living up to its name even the Kazekage Tower was made of sand. Once they arrived to the door to the Kazekage they waited for the sign to be let in and when they were give it they walked into the office of the Wind Cage. They entered and saw a man sitting at a desk while working on paperwork. Evil Naruto looked at the man. He was younger than old man Hokage and had scars to show his years of battle but in his eyes Naruto could see nothing but greed and a lust for power. Naruto didn't like this man. When the Kazekage looked at the two he could tell something was different about the manly the boy whose power seemed to be cage level. He then turned to the man, what do you want in my village? The Kazekage said in an arrogant tone of voice which is another reason Naruto didn't like him. Oren could tell Naruto didn't like the man and wanted to end this quickly and stepped forward. Lord Kazekage, I would like to request that you would allow us to enter the wind so that my apprentice here can obtain the Eon of the Wind and become a step closer to being a high summoner. The Kazekage just looked at them and spoke, if this is a joke it's not funny. The Eons are nothing but legends as well as the summoners they don't exist for if they did then I would like proof of them. Oren was about to say something but he noticed something. It was Naruto. He was clenching his hand where the symbol of destruction was glowing and it also looked to be burning Naruto's hand. Naruto looked at his sensei explain what he thinks is happening. Oren sensei there's one here there's a summoner here in the village, Naruto said in pain. It wasn't long before a boy a year older than Naruto barged into the office. Kazekage-sama, he shouted to the village leader. The Kazekage looked at the boy with anger. Kankuro, what do you think you're doing? The boy named Kankuro looked at the Kazekage a bit nervous. It's Tamari sir. She was just walking and her hand started hurting and then these weird lights started appearing out of nowhere and the symbol for wind appeared on her hand. At hearing this, the case cage was stunned. This boy hand stared to burn at same time as Tamari, and just before he said that there was a summoner in the village, the case cage looked at Kankuro and said, "Bring her to me now." Kankuro nodded and left soon after and was back soon with a girl who was also older than him, had blonde hair and green hair, and was clenching her hand. Next to her was a boy with red hair and green eyes and dark marks under his eyes showing he didn't sleep a lot. The case cage looked at the girl. "Tamari, you will show the blonde boy your hand." Tamari did as she was told. While she was doing this, the case cage looked at the redhead with disgust. "Gaara, what are you doing here? You should be training to be a ninja." Gaara looked at the case cage and answered, "I was worried about Nae-san." Case cage-sama, what's happening to her? Naruto was looking at the symbol for wind that was glowing bright blue on Tamari's hand. He held it like he did with Hinata and waited to see what happened. Once he did that, Tamari felt the pain vanish and the symbol didn't glow anymore, but it was still there. Gaara saw this and didn't like it. From what he could tell, this stranger was able to help his Nae-san while he couldn't do a thing. He wanted to help her, but he did nothing. Soon the voice of the monster inside him began to stir and it called for the blood of the blonde boy, and Gaara did as he was told. Soon as Naruto let go of Tamari's hand, he began to feel something around his body. He looked to see sand cover him, keeping him from moving at all, and he was soon encased in sand and he was floating in the air. The case cage looked at Gaara in anger. "Gaara, put him down now. I order you to put him down this instant." But the case cage's words fell on deaf ears. As Gaara wanted blood, nothing could stop him, nothing, until Gaara heard her voice. "Gaara, stop please." Gaara turned to the voice to see his Nae-chan crying her eyes because of what he was doing. His bloodlust was gone and only pain was left, the pain that he once again hurt someone and hurt the only person who cared about him. Soon the sand around Naruto disappeared and he fell to ground and stared, gasping for, and then to everyone's surprise he stared to laugh. He stared to slowly get off the ground, gasping for air, and turned to Tamari and smiled. "You're lucky, Tamari-sama, to have such caring siblings that worry about you like that." This confused everyone, especially Tamari and Gaara. Why would he be laughing at nearly being killed by Gaara? Tamari looked at Naruto and asked him, "What are you talking about?" Naruto just looked at Tamari and began to explain what he meant. "Well, Gaara brought you in here looking worried that you were in pain and he could do nothing to help, and then I show up and heal your hand like it nothing. I guess he became a little jealous that I did something he couldn't to someone he cares about." At hearing this, Tamari was shocked that Gaara did all this just because he was jealous that he couldn't help her. She turned to her younger and asked him, "Gaara, was that the reason you tried to kill?" Gaara nodded his head. Tamari was surprised and smiled. She got close to him and hugged him and said, "Thank you, Oto." As soon as Tamari said that, lights began to fill the room swarming around her and the sound of some singing could be heard. "Iui no Bamanu Renmiri Yojuyogo Hasatekane Kudame." Soon a ghostly figure soon appeared in front of Tamari. Tamari looked at the figure. It was a tall man in Suna clothing. He looked at her and began to talk to her. "Greetings, Teamari-sama." Tamari just looked at him. Hello, who are you anyway?" Tamari asked. The man just looked at her and smiled. "I am the Aeon Valafor, the Aeon of the Wind, and your main summon." Tamari looked confused. "What do you mean, my main summon?" That's when Naruto stepped forward. "That I can explain. You see, a summoner can summon eons to help them in battle, but a summoner summons a certain eon. That eon will be more powerful because that eons reflects the symbol on your hand." Naruto explained, surprising Orin that the blonde baka could come up with that. Valafor looked at Naruto and replied, "Very thought out, Naruto-sama. That is exactly how things work, and I must say that it is an honor to meet you so soon, and I thank you for finding my summoner so soon too." Naruto just scratched the back of his and gave a fox grin, and then Valafor looked at Gaara with disgust and turned to Tamari. "Tamari-sama, I regret to inform you that the day you become a summoner you cannot take your brother with you on your pilgrimage." Tamari looked at Valafor and got pissed. "Why the hell can't take my brother with me? What's wrong with Gaara?" The Eon looked at Tamari and answered, "He is the container of the fallen Eon Shukaku, that is why." Everyone was shocked at hearing this. Valafor somehow knew about Shukaku and that Gaara was the container for it. At hearing this, Naruto looked at Gaara. He was in way like himself. He was most likely just as lonely as he was before he gained his friends, and he had the old man to look after him, but Gaara looked like he didn't have anyone. Even his own sister was a little afraid of him, and the case cage didn't to give a flying fuck about him either. Naruto was about to speak up, but Tamari beat him to it by shouting at Valafor, "I will not abounded my Oto. I don't much about summoners and I don't care. I will not abounded the ones I love." Valafor just looked at her and smiled. "I was hoping you would say something like that, Tamari-sama, and that is why I respect you." He then turned to Naruto. "Naruto-sama, I will be waiting for you in the temple. Don't take too long." And with that he vanished, leaving everyone gawking until Orin turned to the case cage and said, "Now do you believe us?" After seeing this, the case cage wasn't sure what to believe. After what he had just seen, anything was possible. He sighed in defeat and responded, "All right, you may enter the temple." He then turned to Tamari. Tamari give her guest a tour of the village, show them a hotel, and tomorrow you will show them the temple, understand? Tamari nodded her head and led them out of the office. As the small group walked around the village, Naruto saw this as a great opportunity to ask Tamari something only she could answer. Naruto looked at Tamari and nervously asked her, Tamari. She looked at the boy wondering what he could want. No, what is it, Naruto? Naruto started to blush and looked at the ground before mumbling, could I ask you for advice on girls? Tamari just looked at him and gave an evil smirk, so little Naruto has a girlfriend back home, is she cute? Naruto blushed a deeper shade of red, she's not my girlfriend but she is cute. When Naruto said this everybody had a different reaction. Oren did nothing, Kankuro envied him, Gaara was confused, and Tamari was squealing like a schoolgirl, and this creeped her brothers out. Tamari just looked at Naruto and began asking him random questions, so what's she like, is she pretty, does she want to be a ninja, how did you two meet? Naruto decided to answer each question one at a time. Well, she is nice and kind of bit shy, she is very pretty and has these beautiful white eyes, I think she'll become a ninja, and we meet one day at the park. She was alone and I decided to ask if she wanted to play with us. Tamari hung on every word and asked him, so what's this girl's name? Naruto answered, her name is Hyuga Hinata. At hearing this everything went silent until Kankuro and Tamari screamed, what, you've got a thing for the Hyuga hire? Naruto wasn't expecting that reaction. He knew Hinata-chan's family was big in his village, but here in the Sand Village as well. Naruto began to wonder about that and asked like it was no big deal, what's the big deal, her family anyway? Tamari just stood there with her mouth open and shouted, what's the big, you have a thing for one of the oldest and most wealthiest clans know in history and you say what's the big deal? Naruto wasn't sure, he might have been deaf and got back to what he was saying earlier, yeah, do you think you could help me come up with a way to impress her? Tamari looked at him and squealed again, for if there was one thing women liked to do it was play matchmaker. She looked at Naruto, sure, I'll help you. Now tell me, is there anything big going on with her back in your village? Naruto took on a thinking pose and then it hit him, her mother is going to have a baby soon and the baby is going to be the summoner like me and her. This shocked everyone, but Tamari began to wonder what Naruto could do to impress her, and then Oren spoke, Naruto, I might have a way for you to impress her. Naruto looked at his sensei, really, tell me, Oren sensei. Oren looked at Naruto, Naruto, he said, just leaving everyone in suspense, you must become a midwife for Hinata's mother. Naruto looked at him, what's a midwife? Tamari answered, Naruto, a midwife is someone who helps a woman give birth to a baby. Naruto still didn't get it and Tamari could tell and asked him, you do know how was her made, don't you? Naruto just moved his head left to right and Tamari just nervously chuckled. Gaara looked at his sister and began to wonder the same thing, Nei-chan, where do babies come from? At hearing this Tamari began to panic, it, why the hell do I have to be the one to do this? She thought to herself before it hit her, Yashimaru, she thought to herself and turned to the others, follow me. They all followed the blonde until they were at the house of Gaara's caretaker. Gaara looked at his sister and asked her, Nei-chan, why are we at Yashimaru's house? Tamari looked at her brother, Yashimaru Otoji is a medic nin, he can better explain this type of stuff than I can, she said, lying through her teeth. The group entered the building to see a blonde-haired man cooking something. Not once everyone steeped in, he turned around. Gaara, what are you doing home so early? He then noticed the others behind him, Tamari, Kankuro, it's been a while, he smiled at them. Gaara stepped forward, Yashimaru Otoji, can I ask you something? Gaara said nervously. Yashimaru looked at him with a smile, what is it, Gaara? Gaara looked at him and innocently asked, where do babies come from? At hearing this Yashimaru turned pale white before asking, gee Gaara, why would you want to know that? That's when Oren stepped forward, maybe I can explain. Yashimaru was a bit startled, he didn't even notice the other two until now and asked in a bit of anger of the poetical enemy, who are you? Gaara stepped forward, Yashimaru Otoji, please, the blonde one is Naruto, my friend, right? Gaara said the last part nervously. Naruto looked at Gaara and gave him a fox grin, of course we're friends Gaara, I mean just because you tried to kill me doesn't mean we're not friends. Yashimaru looked scared for a moment and looked at Gaara, Gaara, you attacked someone, why? Gaara looked sad but Naruto stepped forward, I can explain that. So Naruto explained what happened when they entered into the village, talked to the cage and Tamari finding out she was a summoner and how Gaara was jealous that he couldn't help his sister while Naruto could, and how Tamari would have given up being a summoner if she had to give up on her brother. Yashimaru was speechless, he never expected something this to happen to Gaara, all because of one kid. Just who is this Naruto anyway? Yashimaru wondered. He would have to find out later, first he had to answer the boy's question. Yashimaru looked at the kids and spoke, so you kids want to know where babies come from? The two kids nodded their heads. Yoshimaru just sighed and sat in a nearby chair. Well, when a man and women want children, they. Hours went by and Yoshimaru had finished explaining how childbirth was done and how to be a midwife for Naruto. The two boys looked like they were going to throw up. After hearing all this, Naruto got the worst of it. He turned to Oren, asking him in a nervous tone of voice, "You expect me to do that to Hinata-chan's mother?" Oren just looked at him and plainly said, "Hi," and left and like it was nothing. Gaara, on the other hand, was reacting differently. He looked at Yoshimaru and asked, "Does that mean someone is going to try that on Nei-chan someday?" he asked while a bright red Tamari stood behind. Yoshimaru nodded his head in answering, and Gaara then began to become angry. "I'll kill them first." When he said that, Kankuro came next to him and asked him, "Mind if I join you?" Tamari was embarrassed by her brother's actions but a bit happy they would care for like that. Yoshimaru looked at the clock and saw what time it was and looked to Naruto. "Naruto-sama, would you like to spend the night?" Naruto agreed and slept in the spare room for the night. When morning came, Naruto was greeted by Gaara and his siblings. They had breakfast and left for the Wind Temple. The Sand siblings and Naruto walked into the desert for about an hour and soon reached a tower with the symbol for wind on it. This was what they needed. They entered the temple and saw 4 statues around the room. One of them was the current cage. There was also rooms full of wind jutsu and a large door in the middle of the room. Oren looked at Naruto. "This is it, Naruto. You must enter the cloister of trials to prove that you have what it takes to be a summoner. Also, I must tell that the cloister is a puzzle you must solve and there is an item you must find in there to obtain a special eon." Naruto looked at him. "I understand, Oren-sensei," and he entered the door to the cloister of trials. "Tell me what you think and leave reviews. Until next time." Naruto had entered the cloister of trials along with Oren and the others. They looked around and found nothing, just a room with 2 green glowing glyphs, one on 2 of the walls. Naruto looked at Oren a little pissed. "Hey Baka swordsman, what the hell, there's nothing here, damn it," Naruto said while Oren just ignored him. At this, Naruto knew he wasn't going to get an answer, so he thought back to what Oren had said earlier. "Naruto, you must remember that the cloister is a puzzle you must solve." Naruto walked over to the wall with a glyph and touched it. After that, the second glyph went into the floor and revealed a staircase leading down. As the others were walking down, they looked to see Kankuro standing at the entrance in fear. Gaara looked at this older brother and asked, "What's wrong?" Kankuro looked down at Gaara. "Nothing, except that this is just like in those horror movies where dead people are walking around the bottom of dungeons and stuff." Gaara looked at Kankuro confused as to what kind of people he was talking and turned to Tamari, who gladly answered, "Gaara, think about those movies you watch like Dawn of the Dead, Resident Evil and Return of the Living Dead." Gaara then began to understand while Naruto decided to have some fun as he grabbed the glyph sphere. "I don't see why you're so afraid of zombies, for we've been with one the whole time." At this, everyone looked at him and Naruto smiled. "Oren there is dead and walking." At this, everyone turned to Aruan, who replied, "It's true." At this, everyone had a different reaction. Kankuro screamed in a high-pitched kind of way while Gaara and Tamari just kept poking him to see if he was dead. While they were doing this, Naruto went ahead. As Naruto descended down the stairs, he noticed a small overhang on the wall and looked to see what it was. As he approached it, he noticed some writing next to the glyph in red. It explained everything he needed to know about the sphere and what their purpose was. After he had finished reading, he looked at the glyph sphere and took it. Naruto continued down the stairs and saw a door at the bottom of the stairs to see a big iron door with a hole in the center of it. Naruto looked at the sphere in hands and placed it in the center. At first nothing happened until the door suddenly opened up to reveal a hallway. Naruto looked around the hallway and had to agree with Kankuro, this place was real creepy. But that didn't stop him, he needed to know he had to do this. He grabbed the sphere in the doorway and continued on. Naruto walked down the hall seeing nothing until he noticed more symbols on a wall and also a hole in the wall. This could be like the door, Naruto thought out loud as he placed the sphere in the hole and waited to see what would happen. The symbols disappeared and the wall raised up to reveal another room with another sphere called the Destruction Sphere. Naruto would have taken the sphere, but he decided to check out more of the cloister. Walking down the hallway, finding more glyphs on walls, but these felt different, he went over to the wall and touched it. Once he had done that, and Naruto then heard something from around the corner. Naruto ran over to where the noise had come from and found a wall had opened up again, this time revealing a room with a sphere in the center with a bunch of lights going in and out of it. Naruto stepped forward to see the sphere was called the Wind Sphere and took it. Once he did that, all the lights stopped flowing and disappeared. After that, Naruto went over to where he saw the pedestal he passed by earlier and placed the Wind Sphere in it and pushed it to the wall with the symbol for wind on it. Once he got there, Naruto looked around and saw nothing. There was nothing left to do and there was nowhere to go, and that pissed him off. What the fuck, there's nothing left that I can fucking do, damn it. After Naruto had finished his little rant, he looked at the pedestal and kicked it, causing it to move forward. While that was happening, Naruto glared at it. That's what you get for doing nothing, you fucking statue bastard. Fuck, that hurt, Naruto screamed as he jumped up and down while holding one foot, mostly likely due to the pain. He would have continued if not for the fact that the pedestal he kicked didn't hit a wall but ran into it and caused a bright light to flash. At this, Naruto had to close his eyes due to the brightness, and when he looked at it, the light started to fade and the wall was gone. Naruto looked and saw another room with the pedestal in it, and behind it was the symbol for wind and a light was in the center of it. Naruto would have gone farther, but he then remembered the other sphere he passed earlier. Naruto looked back to where he left the sphere and examined it. Naruto looked at its name. It was the destruction sphere, and Naruto thought to himself, who comes up with these names? For all I know, this thing will blow up. Naruto gulped and reached for sphere slowly, hoping that nothing would happen. He was just about to reach for the sphere, holding his breath before slowly wrapping his hand around it and lifting it up slowly. Once he had brought it to his chest, Naruto let out his held breath and wiped the sweat off his head. He looked down at the sphere and said to himself, that's it, I was expecting some kind of boulder to come at me or something. Once Naruto's heart rate had slowed down, aloud, he Naruto came from behind him. Naruto turned around to see a laughing Temari and everyone else. Naruto got pissed at this. What was that for? You nearly gave me a heart attack. Temari just looked at Naruto with an innocent smile. I don't know what you're talking about. But Gaara looked at his sister confused. But Ne-chan, you said you wanted to scare Naruto. Temari, laughing, turned into a nervous and sweat dropped. While walking to the room with all the lights, Naruto looked at everyone asking, what exactly took you guys so long to come down here anyway? Temari looked at Naruto, we had to convince my scared baby Otudo nothing would happen. Kankuro looked at his sister, shut up Temari, I was not scared. Naruto just sighed, thanking the kamis that he was an only child and didn't have to put up with stuff like this, and went ahead of the group. Once everyone had reached the room with the lights, Naruto placed a sphere in the wall to see what would happen. He then saw one light leave the sphere and follow the wall into a corner, disappearing, leaving behind a loud explosion from around the corner. At hearing this, everyone ran to where the noise had come from and see a wall had been destroyed, and they saw a bit of the light from the other room was leading to it. Of course, what caught Naruto's attention was the treasure chest in the room behind the wall. Treasure, he shouted and made a dash for the chest, opening it to see a symbol for wind appear and the chest disappear and then reappear on Naruto's body. Naruto looked down the symbol that appeared on his body and looked to Oren. Hey Oren-sensei, what the hell is this? Naruto said, showing the symbol to Oren. Oren just looked at Naruto and explained, I told you that there was an item hidden at the end of the puzzle and this is it. At hearing this, Naruto looked down, a bit disappointed at what he was hearing. I thought it was going to be something cool. Oren looked at the boy and just sighed. If it makes you feel better, the symbol is just one of many you will need to get in order to obtain anima. At hearing this, Naruto broke into a smile. That means with this I get the Eon Hinata-chan's supposed to get right. Oren nodded. When hearing this, Naruto stared to jump up and down. Alright, I can really impress Hinata-chan. Temari saw this as something good for a laugh and said, and ask her out on a date. At hearing this, Naruto repeated, and ask her out on a date. At this, Naruto covered his mouth and turned red as Temari burst out laughing. While this was going on, Gaara looked confused and asked his sister, Ne-chan, what's going on? Why is Naruto all red and what's a date? Temari looked at her brother, deciding that he needed to get out more, and began explaining what she was talking about. Gaara, a date is something you do with a girl you like. Gaara nodded his head and Temari explained more, and the reason Naruto is red is because most guys won't admit they like a girl. Gaara still didn't understand but just went on with what was going on. After all this, Kankuro had enough. Can we get moving? All the romance in this room is going to make me lose by breakfast. They all agreed and went back to where the pedestal was. Once they arrived, Naruto pushed the pedestal into the symbol to see it sink into the ground. Once the pedestal had completely fallen into the ground, another white light had appeared, blinding everyone except Naruto, who saw it coming, and Oren, who was wearing sunglasses. Once the light was gone, everyone looked to see what looked like an old-fashioned elevator system. Naruto looked at everyone a little nervous, as he was a little nervous as to what was going to happen next. Oren saw this and placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder. The decision to go forward is yours. This is your story, only you can write it. Naruto looked at his sensei with new courage in his heart. Arigato sensei, Naruto said, and moved onto the elevator. Once the elevator had reached the ground, the group had entered a small room with a flight of stairs leading to a door. Oren looked down at Naruto. That door leads to Chamber of the Faith, the resting place of the Eon of the Wind. Naruto looked at the door nervous. Oren could see this and reassured him that he would be okay. The Eon will judge you to see if you are worthy of being its summoner, but don't worry, you wouldn't be summoner if you weren't meant for it. Naruto took a deep breath and walked forward towards the door. He stood there, his heart pounding against his ribcage as the thought of being a summoner was actually going to happen. The door had opened and Naruto walked in, looking back at the other and putting on a fox grin. Wish me luck. And the door closed. Everyone looked at Oren and Temari asked, "He's not going to die in there, is he?" Oren just looked at her and replied, "No, but he is going to be needing some sleep." Naruto had entered the chamber of the faith and looked around to see a big glass dome in the floor. Naruto went over to look at it and could see a statue of a large bird in it, and then he could hear someone singing. Soon after, a figure appeared in front, the Eon from yesterday. The Eon looked at Naruto. "Greetings, Summoner Naruto, I see that the time has come." Naruto just nodded his and asked, "So what is going to happen? Is there a dance of a chant I have to do?" The Eon just smiled at the small boy. "No Naruto, all you must do is stand there, I will do the rest." Looking at the Eon, Naruto stood there ready for anything. Valifor looked at Naruto. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Naruto? Once you do this there will be no turning back." Naruto just looked right at the Eon. "I know I'm ready, I have to be ready, I need to be strong enough to protect the ones that I consider precious to me." At saying this, hinata had appeared in Naruto's mind. Valifor looked down at Naruto and smiled. "Very well Naruto, you have earned this." At that, Valifor flew straight at Naruto, entering him. Once that had happened, Naruto fell to his knees and began gasping for air, feeling the power of the Eon run through him. Once Naruto had gotten to his feet, he heard Valifor's voice again. "Naruto, you have taken the first step, but a time of darkness is coming. You must find all the summoners before the time of sin arises." At that, Naruto walked out the door to see everyone looking at him. "I did it, I have become a summoner," and he passed out. 3 days later. In the Suna hospital, our young hero lay sleeping in the hospital bed looking half dead. Every day Gaara would come and visit Naruto to see if he had gotten better, but nothing changed. There was also the fact that most of staff sometimes refused to care for Naruto due to him being friends with Gaara. After the third visit, most people would have given up, and until Naruto finally opened his eyes. Naruto looked around the room, squinting his eyes due to the brightness of the lights in the room. "Oh good, you're awake," said a voice. Naruto turned his head to see a nurse looking at him. "Your friends were worried about you, they have been here every day to see if you're okay," the nurse said in a pleasant, "I will get Gaara-kun and his siblings, you just rest," and she left. Soon after she left, Naruto just looked around the room to see get well cards and flowers next to his bed. Not long after, Naruto began to hear footsteps coming to his room and saw the door fly of the hinges with a loud, "Naruto," following it. Naruto looked to see Gaara and his siblings bursting through the door and leaping at him. Once they reached him, they each hugged him slowly, causing Naruto to turn blue in the face. "Guys, let go, can't breath," Naruto managed to say just barely. Once the Sand siblings figured out what he had said and let go. Gaara was the first to speak. "Naruto, are you okay? You've been out for 3 days straight and we were worried." Naruto looked at Gaara and smiled. "No problem Gaara, I've been in hospitals for longer times than 3 days, so don't worry." Everyone looked at Naruto, a little stunned at what Naruto was saying, and Temari had to ask, "Naruto, what are you talking about?" Naruto looked at Temari, a little sad at what he had said. "Well, in my village people thought I was the container of the Kyuubi no Yoko." At hearing this, everyone gasped, and Gaara looked at his blonde-haired friend and asked, "Did they hurt you and try to kill you?" Naruto looked at Gaara. He knew lying wouldn't get him anywhere. "Hi, Gaara, they did, but they had their reasons. They looked at me for an outlet for the lost loved ones, but they were just afraid, that's all." Gaara looked at Naruto and pondered what he had said. They were just afraid, that's all. Gaara began to wonder if the people weren't afraid of him, would he be accepted? While Gaara was pondering at this, Yoshimaru had entered the room. "Hello Naruto-sama." Naruto looked at Gaara's uncle and waved. "Hello Yoshimaru-sama, I hope you're well." Yoshimaru smiled at the boy. "I am fine Naruto, I came here to check on you and to tell you that you will begin training to be a midwife once you are cleared by the hospital." At hearing this, Naruto began to smile at hearing that his training would begin soon, but that also left him to wonder, "Yoshimaru-sama, where is Oren-sensei?" Yoshimaru looked at Naruto. "The last time I saw him he was at the bookstore reading." At hearing this, Naruto began to twitch and asked, "It wasn't an orange book that said Ika Ika on it?" Yoshimaru looked like he was in deep thought and replied, "Hi, I believe it was. Is that a problem Naruto-sama?" Naruto was really pissed off now. "Hi, the problem is that my so-called sensei is a zombie, a drunk, and a hentai as well." Meanwhile, at a Suna bookstore, Oren was nose-deep in said book, giggling like a schoolgirl and had a faint blush on his face. At hearing this, everyone looked confused and Yoshimaru asked, "I don't understand Naruto-sama, how is Oren-sama a hentai?" Naruto stood up from his bed and said, "Because I found one of those in Hokage Oji-san office and all it had in it was naked men and women doing wired stuff to each other." At hearing this, everyone but Gaara's jaw hit the floor and Kankuro was soon laying on the ground after being hit by Temari. "Temari, why did you do that?" Naruto asked. Temari looked at Naruto, "Because I found those kind of books in his bedroom under this mattress." Yoshimaru had to end this before people heard about this, or worse, Tamari would start looking around his home and finds his books. He turned to Naruto. Naruto-sama, as soon as you are cleared you will be allowed to leave and begin your training. Naruto began to pout, but I find Yoshimaru-sama, I want to go and try to summon my Eon. Yoshimaru looked at Naruto and shook his head back and forth. No, Naruto-sama, you must stay in bed and regain your strength, for if your body does not recover properly then you will suffer heavy damage to it. Yoshimaru finished his little speech expecting Naruto to understand. Do you see, Naruto-sama? Yoshimaru finished expecting some answer but looked at and saw that all the children and snuck out. Fucking hell. Said children were running through the village trying to get to an open spot to make the summon. While the others were doing this, Gaara had to voice his opinion. Naruto, Yoshimaru said you had to stay in bed, why are we running around the village? Naruto looked at Gaara and smiled. Come on Gaara, you don't always have to do what people tell you, sometimes you need to break loose and have fun. Gaara looked at Naruto confused again. Have fun? He asked. Naruto could feel the sweat drop behind his head and turned to Gaara's siblings. You two really need to get him out more. The two just blinked at hearing this. Once the kids had arrived at a clearing near the park, of Suna got ready for the summoning. Of course they weren't the only ones. As soon as the kids in the park saw the Suna siblings with some new blonde kid they were coming, they were curious as why they were there. Naruto got ready having no clue for what to do, but if it was like regular summoning like Hokage Oji-san had told him once. So Naruto started to gather chakra like the Hokage Oji-san had taught him how. Naruto began to mold chakra and began to mediate how he knew to mediate, he didn't know. Soon Naruto could feel his chakra molding along with something different like a foreign chakra in his body, but how could someone have two sets of chakra? Form what Hokage Oji-san had told him, chakra was some spirit energy, something that a person has but a person only has one, so how could he have two? Unless it was the chakra of the Eon that was inside of him as well, then maybe if he channeled both his and the Eon's chakra maybe he could summon it. Slow Naruto started to gather his as well and the Eon's chakra together. Everyone that was watching saw blue and white chakra began to surround Naruto's body, shooting left and right into the air, being felt all around the village. Some thinking that as was Shukaku being released, at least that was what the Kazekage thought, sending all his ninja to kill whatever the problem was. But upon arrival everyone was confused as to what to do, for what they saw was something completely different than what they would have expected to see. For standing in the clearing was a young boy being completely engulfed with blue and white chakra. Just before anyone could do anything to stop what was happening, Naruto opened his eyes to show that the same color as the chakra surrounding his body, and there were no pupils, just an empty void of chakra was in his eyes. Everyone was scared of this, mostly Gaara, who was afraid for his friend was dying. He was about to run in but saw stopped by Orin, who looked at Gaara. Let him finish, was all he said to the small boy. Once the chakra had begun to grow bigger and a final wave blast out, Naruto shouted, Rise Valifor. At this, not good at describing things, so if you played FFX you will know what I saying. At hearing this, Orin threw Naruto his sword, to which he caught without looking and began to summon. He first lifted his sword up while 4 green orbs with a yellow light in the center surrounded him as he moved his arm out with the sword in his left hand. Soon lights began to surround his body and a light purple seal appeared around Naruto, spinning clockwise. Soon after 4 round circles appeared moving counterclockwise with seal shooting 4 lights into the sky. At seeing this everyone looked up towards the sky at the clouds that had just appeared out of nowhere to see the lights moving in a circle pattern towards them and connected in a white light spread throughout the sky. Then in the distance something was coming from the sky, something big. As the crowd saw the massive creature coming towards them at an incredible speed, coming closer and closer towards the small crowd. Many people were getting ready for whatever was going to happen next while the creature from the sky came closer until they could finally make it out, and it looked like a giant bird. As the bird came closer and landed on the ground next to Naruto, all anyone could do was just stare at the strange creature that had appeared. It was big, that couldn't be ignored. It had thin skin, wings, a long purple tail with skinny legs and red feathers on lower body and neck, which was long with a white cover over its face. There was also the fact that that had something with 3 spikes between the body and wings and 3 golden rings on the left spikes. The strange bird looked around at the people and at Naruto, who had just gotten out his trace and was looking at the strange bird in front of him, and just stared at one another until Naruto reached up and began to brush his hand on the bird's feather. Said bird began to purr, showing that it enjoyed it. Naruto smiled this and said, Nice to finally meet you, Valifor. And at hearing this everyone was speechless to learn that they were standing in front of one of the legendary Eons. Some of the people in the crowd were scared as to what to do with such a creature that was said in legends to be able to wipe out whole armies of thousands with ease, and wanted to get Anbu. The children however didn't see that way. Instead they saw one thing, a way to have some fun, as one kid shouted out, I call it first, as he ran to Naruto in front of the other children at stop speed. Once the child had got to Naruto he asked, Summoner Naruto-sama, can I please be the first to rid your Eon? Please, Naruto looked like he was about no answer, but another kid shoved the fist kid out of the way. No, let me rid it, summoner Naruto-sama. As the kids kept crowding around Naruto begging for a rid on the Eon that it until Gaara stepped forward and one of the kids noticed this and said with a voice full of fear, "It's Gaara." The other kids turned around to see the monster of Suna. At this Naruto was confused as to why the kids would be scared of Gaara. He was just about to saying to him when one of the kids shouted out, "Get out of here you monster." Another kid said, "We don't want a filthy beast like you," and another, "Yeah, get away before the summoner kills you with his Eon." At hearing all this, Gaara looked down and began to walk away with tears in his forming in his eyes until he heard something that stopped it. "Who the fucking hell said any of you fucking bastards could go near my Eon, damn it." At hearing this, Gaara turned around as well as the other kids who were not only scared but confused as to why the summoner would help a monster like Gaara. One of the more stupid kids turned around to Naruto. "Why would you protect that thing, summoner Naruto-sama?" At that, Naruto made a fist and punched the kid. "Don't ever talk about my friend like that, fucker." While this was going on, every person that was watching was all thinking the same thing. Where does a little kid like learn to talk like that? At least that was what the adults and few of the kids were thinking. Gaara, however, was different with thinking, "Naruto, you really do consider me a friend, arigato." After saying all that, Naruto looked at his friend. "Gaara, come on, the sky's awaiting." Gaara nodded and ran to his friend. Soon Gaara and Naruto were on Valifor's back getting ready for takeoff until Gaara said something. "Naruto, hold on." Naruto looked back confused until Gaara turned to his siblings and Naruto smiled. "Hey Temari, Kankuro, come on, there's plenty of room." The two looked at each other. Temari had a huge smile while Kankuro looked like he wanted to go somewhere else and tried, but Temari dragged him to the bird. Once all three were on, Naruto looked at Valifor and asked, "Is this okay?" To which Valifor nodded his head and spread his wings, lift itself off the ground, and then Valifor stared flying through Suna, going faster and faster through air, soaring over rooftops. While this was going, the cage was doing his paperwork when he noticed some strange bird coming towards his window, and before he could close it, said bird flew through one window and out another. However, the wind tossed all the papers around the room and throughout the village. A loud "no" was heard. However, the kids were having the times of their lives with Temari laughing up a storm. Kankuro was crying a little, begging for it to stop. Gaara was giving a small smile for what was happening, and Naruto, he was shouting for Valifor to got higher and faster. But while he was doing this, he was thinking, "Hinata-chan, I can summon now. I be back soon, so please, wait for me." While back at the Hidden Leaf Village, Hinata, Ino, and Sakura were talking about what it would be like once they were in the academy until they each felt a huge gush of wind, and while this happened, Hinata heard something. "Hinata-chan, wait for me." At this, Hinata stood up and whispered, "Naruto-kun," and smiled, thinking about the boy she really wanted to see again. Well, that's the latest chapter in FSI. Have been trying to get this done for a while now, and here it is. Now I know that is most likely some grammar problems and a mistake or two, but I had this edited so that should make it better, so could you go easy on the flames. It just I never was that great in English. My best grade is a high C, so please go easy or I'll all emo and stuff and turn into a Sasuke, and nobody really wants that. Shudders. Well, anyway, tell me what you think and I try updating my other stories whenever I can. It had been many months since Naruto had gotten the ability to summon Valifor. After that, he spent most of his time training with Orin, learning wind jutsu and spending time with Gaara and becoming even better friends with another. It was because of this friendship that Naruto managed to save Gaara from losing himself to the darkness. Flashback. It was the beginning of Naruto's training to become a midwife, and he was returning to Gaara's home to rest. He soon reached his room and noticed that someone was already there, and it wasn't Orin, it was in fact Gaara. The red-haired boy looked at his friend and saw that he was green in the face. "Hey Naruto, I take it you enjoyed your training," Gaara joked. Naruto just glared at Gaara. "Shut up," he shouted, not liking Gaara's sense of humor. After Naruto had managed to get the green of his face and got over being angry at his friend who just sat on the couch with a grin on his face. Once Naruto had a few bowls of ramen, he turned to his friend. "Why are you here, Gaara?" Gaara just smiled at his friend. "I came to see how your training was going." At this, the memories of everything Naruto learned about the birth of children came back to him, and he couldn't help but make a run to the bathroom, losing the ramen he had just eaten. After he had lost his dinner, Naruto stepped out of the bathroom a bit pale but alright. Naruto could see that his friend still there, but also noticed the time and saw that it was near midnight. He looked at Gaara with a bit of an annoyed look. "Gaara, no offensive, but it's late and I want to get some sleep. You should as well." At hearing this, Gaara began to frown. "Naruto, I am not able to sleep because if I do, the demon inside me will take over and devour my soul." At this, Naruto smacked himself, for he had forgotten about Gaara's fallen Eon inside of him. "Gomen Gaara, I forgot, but it's not that late. I guess I could stay up for another hour." Hearing this, Gaara smiled, glad that his friend wanted to spend time with him. On the roof of the house, Gaara and Naruto just sat there staring up at the stars and the moon. Each of the two boys were thinking about something that made them happy. Naruto was looking at the stars. They made him think of Hinata and how much he missed her. Gaara looked at the moon and was happy to see something that was so peaceful in such a harsh world. But while both boys were enjoying the beautiful night sky, they didn't notice a masked man behind them ready to send kunai straight at them. As the man threw the kunai at the two kids, expect them to be killed by the blades he had just thrown. But that didn't work. The kunai didn't hit either one of the two since Gaara's sand had blocked the weapons. Naruto on the other hand noticed the blades coming at him at the last second and was able to create a shield of his own using the wind to block the kunai. The attacker didn't expect the two to have defenses that strong and made a move to attack again. But before he could attack, a wall of sand had gathered around him, wrapping him up and began to crush him. He could soon feel both of his legs and arm crushed and it didn't stop. Gaara was angry. All he wanted was to be with his friend, but another assassin, most likely sent by his father, was sent to kill him and Naruto. While Gaara was doing this, Shukaku noticed his container was getting bloodthirsty and so he whispered a few things to really get the ball rolling. Gaara was crushing the assassin and enjoying it and was about to make the final move when he heard something. Gaara, that enough. Hearing this, Gaara stopped what he was doing and looked at Naruto and saw a look of concern of his face. Gaara, you can stop now, he can't do anything. Gaara looked at the man and saw that his body was severely damaged and that he was wearing a Suna headband, meaning he was a ninja of the Sand Village. At seeing this, Naruto glared at the man who was from the same village and was trying to kill one of their own. It had brought back many bad memories of his home. Naruto kept glaring at the man lying on the ground. Alright dipshit, let's see whom the fuck you under that fucking mask. Naruto grabbed the mask and pulled off and gasped at what he saw while Gaara stared, not believing his eyes. There, sitting in a pool of his own blood, was Yoshimaru. Seeing this, both boys just stood there blinking, making sure that their eyes weren't messing with them or that they were in some kind of genjutsu. Sadly, neither of the two theories was true. It really was Yoshimaru who just kept staring at the two without a hint of remorse or guilt in his eyes. Naruto just kept glaring at the man, clenching his fist, saying the only thing that he could think of, why? Yoshimaru just looked at the blonde boy. It was an order from the cage. Hearing this, Naruto started to clench his teeth, never liking the man since he had first met him, or how lately he would be telling him for his own good to stay away from Gaara, but this made it worse. Gaara on the other hand had a smile on his face and had a look of hope in his eyes. So you didn't want to attack me, you were just ordered to, right? Yoshimaru just stared at the boy. No, I willing took the mission to kill you, filthy demon monster. Hearing this, whatever hope Gaara had was scattered and gone. It was also killing him on the inside as well. Yoshimaru just kept glaring at Gaara. It was because of you, Gaara, that I lost my sister, the only person I had ever truly cared about. But while I tried to look at you with love, I just couldn't help but hate you. Yoshimaru said to Gaara, who could do nothing but listen to horrible truth from his uncle. After another moment had passed, Yoshimaru coughed up blood and knew that his time was almost up and looked at Gaara. Gaara, you should know something else. Gaara looked at his uncle again. Your name was given by your mother out of her hatred for this village, the name Gaara meaning demon that only cares only for itself. After this, Yoshimaru breathing decreased. Now that I've said this, Gaara, please, just die. With that, Yoshimaru removed his vest to reveal dozens of paper bombs on his body already active. Naruto saw that Gaara was into deep state of emotional shock to do anything and without thinking jump in front of Gaara and Yoshimaru right in front of the blast. A loud explosion was heard all over Suna and many shinobi ran to the blast to see what the cause was. Upon arrival of the site of the explosion, the shinobi looked to see the charred remains of the explosion, the demon Gaara, and summoner Naruto-sama in between the two. One Junin ran to Naruto. Naruto-sama, are you alright? Once the Junin got close enough, he saw the damage. Both Naruto's hands were covered in 6th-degree burns and bits of the bone could be seen because of the damage. Seeing this, the Junin looked at Gaara and could see that there was no physical damage on his body, but his eyes clearly showed evidence of mental trauma. While seeing that both boys were in serious medical danger, the Junin called out, "Get some medical nins here now." A dozen medical nins soon arrived at the scene asking what the damage was. One Junin told them that Naruto-sama was in serious danger and the nins rushed over to him. As one doctor was checking Naruto's burns, Naruto said in pain, "Stop." The doctor looked at Naruto confused. "Naruto-sama, I must treat these burns, they could be completely fatal." Naruto just ignored him and through gasp of pain barely managed to say, injuries are not, I am, gasp, important, help, Gaara. The medical nin was confused. "Naruto-sama, I don't understand, why would that demon be more important?" At this, Naruto glared, "Don't fucking call him that, he is my friend and is a summoner. I order you to help him and give him your best treatment, understand?" The medical nin just looked at Naruto, "Hi, Naruto-sama," and ordered that Gaara be taken to a mental ward as soon as possible. As the medical nins were carrying Gaara away on a stretcher, and while they were doing this, Gaara looked at Naruto's hands. Gaara looked at Naruto with dead eyes and asked him in a monotone voice, "Naruto, why?" Gaara asked, to which Naruto gave him a warm grin, "Because, you are, my friend," and passed out right there. End flashback. Naruto had awoken in with a bright light shining in his and had to wait for his eyes to adjust before he could open them again. Not long after everything was clear, Naruto looked around the room and noticed it was a hospital room. He was dressed in a hospital gown and noticed his hands were completely covered in bandages and couldn't move at all. After he noticed his hands, he looked around the room and noticed someone was already there with him. In the chair sleeping next to Naruto's bed was his sensei Orin. Naruto got out of bed and walked to the restroom to relieve himself, but failed to notice that Orin was actually awake. After Naruto came out, he noticed Orin was still asleep and was about ready to leave the room, not really being a big fan of hospitals. "You know you shouldn't walk around with your ass hanging out." Naruto jumped at hearing the voice of his sensei. He turned around and looked at the red-dressed swordsman who was just staring at him with a smile, glad to see his apprentice was okay. Naruto just looked at his sensei with a bit of an annoyed look. "How long have you been awake, Baka swordsman?" Orin just smiled. "A little over an hour. I wanted to make sure you were okay." At this, Naruto just smiled. "It's nothing too serious for a future summoner to handle." At hearing this, Orin put on a straight face. "You realize that you could have been killed last night, right?" Hearing this, Naruto looked down. "Hi, I do realize that, but..." Naruto didn't get to finish as Orin interrupted him. "There is no excuse for your actions. I had to protect Gaara." Naruto said back, "You were reckless and could have gotten killed." Orin said with a bit of anger his voice, "But I didn't, so what's the problem?" At this, Orin grabbed Naruto by the front of his shirt and got in his face. "The problem, you little brat, is that you could have been killed and you're not taking this seriously, damn it." At hearing this, Naruto was a little scared due to the fact that Orin had never acted this way before with him before, after even all the time they had spent together. After Orin had calmed down, he let go of Naruto. He looked at the boy. "Naruto, you have to understand that completing your pilgrimage is very important. You must live and gather all the eons." Hearing this, Naruto could see that Orin was leavening out something very important out, and he could tell it. Naruto looked at Orin and asked, "Sensei, what else are you not telling me?" At hearing this, Orin just sighed. He knew he would have to tell the boy sooner, or what he preferred later. "Naruto, I wanted to tell you this later, but I guess I have no choice but to tell you everything. About Sin, the Espers, and what will happen to the other summoners if you die," Orin said in a serious tone of voice. While hearing all this, Naruto was afraid he didn't understand what Orin meant by Sin or Espers, or what would happen to everyone if he were to die. Just as he was about to ask, there was a knock at the door and a nurse walked in. "Oh, you're awake. The Kage asked me to tell him when you were awake." As she turned to leave, Naruto called out to her, "Excuse me, but is Gaara okay?" The nurse turned back to Naruto and gave him a smile. "Gaara-sama is fine, just a bit stunned about what happened, but seems fine. You can see him a little later," and she left. At hearing the news of Gaara was okay, Naruto felt a great relief. At seeing that Naruto was in good mood, Orin decided not to spoil it. He would tell them of the dangers, but later. "Naruto, if you're up to it, we can go see how Gaara is doing." Naruto smiled and put some decent clothes on. After asking around, a couple of nurses surprisingly pointed the way to Gaara's room. They soon found it and went inside and found Gaara sitting on his bed, just staring at the wall, not moving. Naruto was worried for his friend who was just sitting there not responding to anything. As he was trying to get a response from Gaara, he noticed the door to the room had opened and revealed Temari and Kankuro. Naruto looked at the two and saw the grim looks on their faces and looked at Gaara. "I'll be back right back, Gaara, okay," and walked into the hall with Temari and Kankuro. The three just stared at each other until Kankuro asked, "So what happened last night?" Naruto looked at them, trying to find the right words needed to say this. It was Yoshimaru. He tried to kill Gaara and me." Hearing this, the two were left speechless. "That's not possible. Yoshimaru loved Gaara. He took him in and raised. He loved him," Temari said while crying. Kankuro just looked at Naruto to see if he was really lying. Sadly, he could tell that he was telling the truth and asked, "Why did he do it?" Naruto rubbed his temples. He said he blamed Gaara for the death of his sister. He also said he was given a choice to take the assassin and he took it. For a moment nobody said anything until, "The most important thing here is to make sure Gaara is okay," Naruto said, and the two siblings agreed and went back inside the room to see Gaara. The three entered the room and saw that Gaara was still sitting on his bed and hadn't moved at all. Temari sat on the bed and placed Gaara in a hug. "Ododo, everything will be alright, I promise." But Gaara did nothing. He just sat there while Temari held him. An hour had come and gone and there's still no response from Gaara. Temari tired being kind to him, but that got a few blinks from everyone. Kankuro tried to help by telling lousy and pathetic jokes, which got nothing but strange looks from Naruto and a smack to the face from Temari. While the kids didn't want to give up, they could tell they weren't making any progress at all with the little redhead. While they had decided to take a break, a doctor soon came into the room with an annoyed look on his face when he saw Gaara. He wrote something on his clipboard and turned to leave. While he was doing this, Temari shouted out, "Hey, aren't you going to do little more to help him?" The doctor just scoffed, "I've done my job and it's not like that little demon is going to anything about it. Hell, that thing is better off brain dead." Hearing this, Temari wanted to kill the man as well as Naruto, but Gaara did nothing about it. But Kankuro had an evil idea. "Hey Naruto." Naruto looked at Kankuro. "It's that the same guy who tried to grab Temari's ass when we walked in here." Naruto caught on. "Hi, it was him." At this, Temari's face was bright red while the doctor just looked speechless and tired to say something in his defense. He never even got a chance as a loud "die" was heard and a wall of sand had ink as the doctor slamming him into a wall hard. At seeing what happened, Naruto looked at Kankuro. "I can't believe that worked," while Kankuro just smiled. "I had a feeling," he said, gloating. But as this was happening, the two boys failed to sense that demonic killer intent behind them that was Temari. "You damn bakas," Temari shouted and started beating the life out of the two boys without mercy. Due to the graphic nature and severe use of violence that Temari is displaying to these two, which is just too plain to fucking scary to write, will be censored. Writer looks behind censor and shudders. Man, how is it even possible to bend someone like that without breaking anything? As Temari was standing and glaring over two bloody and scared shitless boys, "Don't ever use me for something like that ever again, you little hentais, got it?" The two boys nodded. Hi, Temari-sama. While they were doing this, they failed to notice the movement behind them. Ni-chan. All three kids looked to see Gaara sitting there with a look on confusion on his face. In that instant, Gaara nearly had the life squeezed out of him by everyone, but did kind of enjoyed it. After everyone had let go of Gaara and he had gotten enough air into his lungs, he began to ask why he was in the hospital. After explaining what happened, the memories of last night came flying back to him and began to tear up, blaming himself for what had happened. Naruto saw inside and put his banged hand on Gaara's shoulder. "Look Gaara, let's get some things straight." Gaara looked at Naruto confused. "What happened to Yashimaru was not your fault. What happened to your mother was not your fault. What happened to me was not your fault, got it?" Gaara nodded, agreeing to what Naruto had said. After everything had been settled and Gaara's mental state had been put at ease, the kids began to discuss what they should do next. The main topic they had been presented was that Gaara could still be used as a weapon for the village. While hearing this, Naruto was confused. Why would they do something like that? The Sand siblings just signed. The nobles of Wind Country have turned their sights to other villages to do their work, Temari said, but left Naruto confused. But he got a straight answer from Kankuro: budget cuts and politics. At this, Naruto understood. After this, Temari coughed and got the boys' attention again. The main problem has actually been the Leaf Village. Hearing this, Naruto just looked at her with a bit of a glare. The Leaf Village has been doing really well. Even after the last war, the nobles of our land have been spending their funds on Leaf Shinobi. Naruto nodded his head, showing he had a bit of understanding, and because of this, less funds have been going to sand and cutbacks have been made, along with attempts for more powerful weapons. At hearing this, Naruto began to understand, like Gaara. After a moment of silence had gone by, Kankuro asked, "So what the plan?" Naruto answered him, "We tell them that we didn't get a look at the assassin face." Temari looked at him. "So basically we lie." Naruto nodded. "Hi, we lie. As long as we say nothing, and from what I've seen, as long as Gaara stays in control of himself, the Cage won't try and kill him anymore if he believes he's in control." The Sand siblings nodded, agreeing to the plan. But after they had agreed to the plan, the Cage had just then entered the room. The man glared at Gaara and placed on a fake smile on his face. "Naruto-sama, it's good to see that you are alright." Naruto had also put on a fake grin. "Your concern is most appreciated, Cage-sama." The two just kept staring at one another, and one could swear that the room temperature had drooped. "Naruto-sama, I must ask, why are you in Gaara's room? You should be resting in your room far away from him." Naruto wanted to kill this man but knew that wouldn't work. Keeping his fake grin on his face, Naruto continued, "I was merely checking on my friend Cage-sama and discussing things about the village." At hearing all this, the Cage looked confused. "And what were you discussing then?" Naruto put on a real smile this time. "Things like politics and budgets and other boring things, Cage-sama." Hearing this, the Cage nodded and began to leave the room. But before he left, the man turned back to Naruto and asked, "You didn't happen recognize who the assassin was, did you?" With this, Naruto went into a comical thinking pose. No, his face was covered and it was too dark to see what his headband was. Hearing this, the Cage just nodded, but also looked like he also had something that was bothering him. The case asked, Naruto-sama, there is one thing I would like to know. Hearing this, Naruto nodded, showing he understood. There are a few reports saying that you stood in front of the blast and Gaara, so how did you survive? Naruto just rubbed the back of his head and gave a fox grin. Well, when I gained the ability to summon Valfor, I noticed I could do things that involving wind with ease. While hearing this, all the people in the room just blinked, showing they didn't understand. Naruto saw this and just sighed. I can advance wind jutsu with ease and move heavy objects using wind with ease as well as flying. Everyone in the room went bug-eyed except Temari, who just grabbed Naruto by the collar of his shirt. You can't fly. Naruto just gave a nervous chuckle. Well, more like hover, but that's not the point. The point is, I think when you get a Aeon you get more than the ability to summon. Hearing this, everyone just sighed, mumbling things like troublesome blondes. Once everything was set, the cage left the room and began walking down the hospital hallway, thinking to himself, that fool has failed and nearly caused the demon to become loose. Another attack won't probably kill him, and it could make things worse. Best to make sure that Gaara is under my control. Soon the leader of Sand was back in office going through his paperwork when he noticed something different, an alliance from the Hidden Sound village. After that day, the assassinations had stopped for some reason, leaving Gaara with a chance to calm his mind. Temari and Kankuro got to spend some time with their brother and start really training in wind jutsu and puppet jutsu. Naruto, on the other hand, was able to get the most training done, being as what Kankuro says, a fucking sponge with jutsus. His midwife training really improved when he helped 5 women give birth to children. One of the women gave birth to triplets. Many months had gone by and the 4 kids had gotten really close to one another, but the time had come and it was time for Naruto to continue on his pilgrimage. Well, that's a half-truth. Oren said it was time to go. Naruto wanted to stay a little while longer and had to be tied and carried out. Entrance to Suna. At one of the few entrances to the Sand Village, we see our blonde hired hero along with his sensei and a group of people. Some members of the group were a few politicians for Suna, including the cage and his children. Gaara, Temari and Kankuro were also there to give a fond farewell to their friend, as well as a few families who Naruto had been a midwife to. He had given a blessing to the children of those families. He was considered a holy man after all. After a tearful goodbye from everyone and a joke about Gaara having a few fangirls in the nearby future which Gaara didn't really understand, he left, promising they meet again someday. With that, the blonde summoner left to begin the next stage of his journey. A few days later. It had been some time since Naruto and Oren had left Suna, traveling non-stop. It wasn't so bad at first, but after a while Naruto lost it. Hey, Baka sword, Naruto shouted, but was soon silenced with a loud whack. OWW. After did this, Oren looked at the boy. What is it, Naruto, acting like nothing happened? Naruto just glared at the man. Where are we going to anyway? Oren just looked at the boy. Rice Country, was all that he said. That wasn't good enough for Naruto, so what eon is in Rice Country then? Oren's only reply was, "Non," continued to walk, leavening a pissed off Naruto. Now Naruto was getting annoyed. Okay, so there's no eon in Rice Country and yet we're going there, why? Oren just signed and looked at a nearby shrine. Well, stop at the shrine to rest and pray and I'll explain. Naruto just nodded and went to pray. After Naruto had finished praying at the shrine, he went over to Oren, who was eating some sweets that he had gotten somewhere. The two sat in front of the shrine eating until Oren replied, "We need to go to Rice Country to gather some intel and help the people there." While hearing this, Naruto was confused and Oren kept on explaining. The villages in Rice Country were always in support of summoners in the past. They looked at them as tides of good fortune for the future, and we can all find key facts of the history of summoners. After Naruto had heard all this, he just sat there with his mouth hanging wide open and began to think, even though I'm still a child, people have looked up to me with hope. Oren looked at Naruto and was a bit concerned when he saw that Naruto was actually thinking and was also letting the information how important he really was to the people. After a few hours had gone by, the two soon passed the border of Rice Country and were heading to a small village that looked pretty busy but very peaceful. While the two were walking through the streets, they had noticed that the villagers were giving Oren strange looks and whispering things. Naruto listening to what the people were saying and could make out things like, "Is that Oren-sama? Oren-sama has reappeared along with a new summoner, Sir Oren," along with other things. As the people kept staring at the two, they also noticed that some people were bowing to them and a few of the girls were blushing at Naruto. Not long after, the two soon came across an old man wearing clothing of nobles. The old man greeted the two with a bow. "Greetings, Oren-sama, and to you as well, young summoner." Naruto and Oren bowed as well. "Greetings, noble sama." The old man smiled. "Please call me Mucho, and I must say what an honor it is to finally meet men like you in our village." As Mucho was to more ass kissing, he was soon interrupted by the sounds of villagers shouting, "Stop those two thieves." Naruto looked to where the noise was coming from and saw two girls, both older than him, running from the villagers at high speeds. They weren't looking where they were going and one of them, a girl with red hair, smack right into Naruto. At seeing this, everyone in the crowd gasped at what they had just seen. The girl just shook her head, ignoring the pain she was feeling from her head, and glared at Naruto. "Watch where the fuck you're going, you dumb fuck." At this they gasped even more and some even fainted while Naruto just glared. "You fucking bumped into me, you fucking red-haired bitch." The two just kept glaring at one another. While the two just kept glaring at each other, they were soon broke out of their glare by someone's voice, "Tayuya-sama." The two looked at the other girl who had long black hair and was holding one of her hands as though as she was in pain, and he also noticed his hand was in pain as well. At seeing this, the girl named Tayuya features just softened. "Kin, does it still hurt?" The girl named Kin just nodded her head. At seeing this, Naruto decided to act and walked over to Kin. At seeing this, Tayuya just glared. "Hey fucker, what the hell do you think you're doing?" At hearing this, Naruto just ignored her and did what he did in sand and grabbed Kin's hand, and the symbol for trust appeared in blue on her hand. Once everything was done, many of the villagers were confused as to what just happened, but Tayuya was just pissed and lunged at Naruto without a second thought. She held on the ground with her on top of him, glaring at him. "What the fuck did you do to Kin, you bastard, and you better tell me the fucking truth or you're dead, got it?" Before Naruto could answer her question, some of the noble's bodyguards grabbed her and held her down. "How dare you attack Naruto-sama like that? You shall be executed for your actions, you thief." "That will not be necessary, Mucho-sama." The noble looked at Naruto confused. "You wouldn't want any harm to come to another summoner and her guardian, would you?" At hearing this, Mucho just stared at Naruto. "Naruto-sama, if this is a joke, it's not in any way humorous." At hearing this, Naruto gave the man a cold glare. "Why would I jest as something as important as this? Do you think so little of me?" At hearing this, the man began to shake his hands in the air. "No, Naruto-sama, of course." Mucho turned to some of his bodyguards. "You two lead the two women to be dressed for dinner in my home." The two nodded and took Tayuya and Kin away after Naruto gave them reassurance. Later that night, at the home of Mucho, Naruto was dressed in a formal kimono along with Orin, who had his arm in a sash. At the dining hall, Mucho was dressed in a formal kimono of his own. Along with him were Tayuya, who looked unconformable and pissed to be in that type of clothing, and Kin, who kept looking at Orin and turning red. They soon began eating and enjoying the meal, especially Tayuya and Kin, who hadn't had a good meal in quite some time. After an hour or so had gone by, Tayuya started glaring at Naruto, who had to ask, "Is there a problem?" Tayuya slammed her hands against the table and gave him an icy glare. "What the fuck are you after?" Naruto just blinked. "After?" Tayuya just got in his face more. "Yeah, after, are you after to make me and Kin your little fuck toys, or are you after to sell me and Kin as slaves, which is it?" At this, Naruto and Kin began to blush. "I was trying to help you and the summoner over there," he pointed to Kin. At hearing this, Tayuya didn't believe him, never really being a true believer into the whole summoner thing. "Bullshit, this whole summoner thing may work on the villagers, but I don't buy a word of it." At this, Naruto just smiled. "I'm not asking you to believe, but in a few years you will have no choice but to believe." Tayuya just snorted. "And why at that?" At this, Naruto just gave the girl another one of his smile that made her want to beat him to death. "Because your friend there happens to be a summoner herself." At hearing this, Tayuya just looked at her friend, who looked at those she was seeing stars and was on cloud 9 at the same time. While Mucho was enjoying all the time that was going on, he coughed. It got all of their attention. "Naruto-sama and friends, while this night has been very entertaining night, I do really believe that it is time to discuss why you came here." At hearing this, Naruto nodded his head in agreement. Mucho cleared his throat. "Naruto-sama, it is time for you to learn about the espers, the enemies of the eons. As well as Sin, a weapon of horrific power." Naruto gulped and said he was ready. So Mucho began. At the beginning. Cliffhanger. Sorry folks. So Mucho began. At the beginning. Everyone had crowded around the old man waiting for him to tell his tale of past summoners when he just stopped. Mucho did nothing at first until, "What were we talking about again?" Everyone face faulted at this. Tayuya was the first one to react. "What the flying fuck, old man, you started this fucking story and fucking forget what you were talking about, you fucking senile bastard." Mucho looked at the girl blankly. "Did you say something?" Everyone face faulted again at this, except Tayuya, who just grabbed one of nearby knives and was aiming for Mucho. She was red in her eyes and breathing heavily. "He must die." But before the angry redhead could do anything, Kim held her. "Tayuya-sama, stop." After they had gotten Tayuya to calm down, which was not easy, they asked Mucho to start his stories. Mucho took a swig of sake, and cleared his throat and began. "In the beginning the gods were born and gave life to the entire universe. Once they had set up the order of heaven and hell for their creations, mankind, they created our world to observe the life they had created. From the beginning they could see that their creations were both intriguing and frightening at the same time, and created the espers to help watch over them. Their first creation was called Belias, the Gigas. Scion of darkness and guardian of the holy realm, made by the gods in opposition to the transcendent lawgryph, scion of light. Called the Gigas for his appearance, man and monster fused as one. Considered a mistake upon his making, and receiving not his intended role, the Gigas challenged the gods and lost. It was said his element was in fire. Next was Mateus, the corrupt. Scion of darkness ruling and protecting those who live in the underworld, in opposition to Lahabria, abyssal celebrant and scion of light. In the course of his rule, he submitted to avarice, and the darkness took his heart, transforming him until he was both evil and corrupt. Then in his cowardice did he bind a goddess of the domain of ice, and using her as a living shield, he challenged the gods. Defeated before their might, he fell screaming into the depths of hell, there to be imprisoned for eternity. After him was Shemhazai, the whisper. Scion that is both horse and woman, wielding utter control over the souls that wander the underworld. In opposition to the martyr Elgioram, scion of light. Though she once served the gods as a guardian when Ultima announced her rebellion, Shemhazai went to her, whispering of the gods' hidden weaknesses. She then descended upon the land without leave of the gods, and taught men of destruction and evil. For this was she stricken down and bound. Then there was Hashmal, bringer of order. Scion set by the gods to wield and manipulate the laws of this world, and with holy power lead mankind to order. Created in opposition to Fandaniel the protector, scion of light. Desiring to bring order to all things, he joined with Ultima in her battle against the gods. He gave his body to the 1,000 years' war, and his strength was spent, down into the burning inferno he fell. Unfortunately after that came Famfrit, the darkening cloud. The hideous, darkly clouded form of Famfrit, scion in opposition to Holy Queen Emerloth, scion of light, was anathema even to his creators. Just, after a great battle, was he broken and sealed with armor laced with wards. The confines of his armor are void of light, so he is called the darkening cloud. Men fear the rain that falls from the black clouds that ooze form the Ginat Ewar as a herald of chaos and waste. Adramelech, the Wrath was the god's next creation. Emperor among the scions, able to reduce to nothing aught he strikes with a single vengeful blow of his fist, created in opposition to Dudalafin the benevolent, scion of light. Though he was made by the gods to quell the fiends that ranged in the otherworld, his immense strength and fearsome visage drew the fiends to his side, and turned him against his creators. Adramelech rose to prominence in the otherworld, whence he led a fiendish horde against the gods, but in the end, he was defeated. Afterwards there was Cuchulainn, the impure. Scion created to rid the world of its impurities by swallowing them with himself, in opposition to Nabriels the majestic, scion of light. The world, however, was more filled with impurity and corruption than even the gods dared imagine, and having swallowed it all, the once beautiful Cuchulainn was transformed into a hideous thing, a deity of filth, and so did he turn against his creators. Wherever his feet fall, there all life withers to dust. Later the gods created Chaos, walker of the wheel, tutelary deity of the sacred crystals fashioned by the gods at the time of the great making. Created in opposition to Mitran the chastiser, scion of light. Upon entering the world of man, he was enveloped in the turmoil rampant there. Lost, he died and he was reborn countless times, a walker of life's wheel, eventually to range against the gods that had so fated him. By sitting in meditation upon the pedestal does he clear heart and mind until all that has order and reason thought is made as nothing. Perhaps the god's worst creation was Zalera, the death seraph. Heretic scion who wrapped the word in dark energies, seeking to take the souls of all living things unto himself. Created in opposition to Emmet Selch, angel of truth, and scion of light. Originally tasked with the judging of men upon their deaths, his soul was tainted by the curses of those who raged against the heavens, and seizing one of the god's servants, a shamaness, as a hostage, he rebelled against his creators. Even now, in defeat, he clutches the shamaness to him in his right arm, and with the aid of her death wall does he summon the soul of darkness to do his bidding. Zaramis, the condemner, was another creation of the gods. Honoring the law more than any other, a scion of holy order and condemner of criminals. Created in opposition to Nightstar Pashteret, scion of light. He turns his deep, abiding hatred for those who break the law into living darkness therein to plunge the guilty in fell judgment. Over time, he came to care less for upholding the law and more for condemnation, and so tainted by hate, he sought to condemn the gods themselves to death. Thus did he earn the title of the Condemner, and thus did he fall from grace. Exodus, the judge Sal, the oldest of the gods' creation. Most ancient of the scions, created in opposition to Halmarit, the arbiter, and scion of light. As he watched, unseen, unknown, his attachment to the world dwindled and faded until it was as nothing. Fitting that he would desire to make the world, too, as nothing. Yet he fell in the war against the gods, and was thwarted, imprisoned in punishment for his heresy. After all the creations were created, the gods felt they knew how to create the perfect being Ultima, the High Seraph. Masterpiece among the scions created by the gods, and mastermind of the plot to rise against them. Prior to her betrayal, she was tasked with guiding souls to heaven and aiding in their reincarnation. Called the High Seraph for her angelic wings of glimmering gold, yet it was on wings of deepest black that the tainted angel Ultima rose against the gods. Since her fall, her heart is without light, and impossible to know. After that, Mucho took a minute to catch his breath. While everyone around him was just sat there frozen, unable to believe the tale that they had just heard. If it wasn't for everything he had been through, Naruto wouldn't believe it. Naruto looked at Mucho. So is that everything, Mucho-sama? The old man just looked at Naruto. No, for there is one more Esper far more dangerous than all of them. Naruto just blinked. The final Esper that was created just before Ultima was Zodiark, keeper of precepts. Strongest of the scions created by the gods, they feared his growth, and so kept him a child. So indomitable is his strength that all things are by him twisted and pressed into oblivion. He alone fashions the laws governing all things, and administers punishment in place of the gods. So is he keeper of precepts, and his authority is absolute. After Mucho had finished his story of the Espers, everyone just sat there to go over and process everything they just heard. Naruto was taking this the hardest out of all of them after being able to see the power of an Eon when he summoned Valifor. He looked at Orin to see if any of this was really true, and as if he could read his thoughts, Orin nodded his head. It was at that moment that Naruto was really scared and didn't know what to do. Naruto just rubbed his temples due to the major headache that was caused from hearing this. He looked at Mucho, who had a look on his face that would tell you that there was more to the story he was telling. Just before Naruto was about to ask any more, Yuya spoke first. Hey, before you go on, old man, let's get something to eat first, some of us are fucking starving. Naruto just glared at the red hair. This information could be very vital towards the future of everyone, and you'd rather stuff your face than hear it. Yuya looked at the blonde with a huge amount of killer intent. Fuck ya, blondie, some of us are fucking starving here and want to fucking eat something. Naruto just sat back down and crossed his arms of her chest. Fine, go ahead and pig out. Hearing this, Tayuga gave a smirk for her victory until, just don't complain about how fat you're going to get later on. Not 1 second after that was said, Tayuga jumped across the table and proceeded to beat Naruto into a pool of his own blood. After Yuya had finished with almost killing Naruto, she proceeded to eat, and everyone else followed her example. Except for Naruto, who had no choice but to eat most of his food through a straw because Yuya broke his jaw. After they had eaten enough, Mucho took another swing of sake and cleared his throat again. Well, after the Espers fell from grace, they were of course beyond angry and turned their anger towards mankind. This point of history was known as the time of darkened skies. During this time the lands were full of blood and death and screams as the Espers tormented any and all they could find and enjoyed it. While the Espers were tormenting all they could find, many villagers would pray to the gods and even to demons to come and lend them aid. Their prayers were eventually answered, but not by the gods but by the demons of hell itself. These 9 monsters were called the Biju. When the people saw these monsters, they truly thought their prayers were answered by the gods, believing they were messengers of the Heaves come to save them. That was until they realized that while the Biju were sent to destroy the Espers, they did it without a care of who got in the way. With each fight between the demigods that took place, it would always be a draw, with many innocent bystanders who were caught up in the destruction. Many years went by and the demigods would fight each other and destroy anything in the surrounding area, and the innocents around them would always suffer. The people would pray and pray to their gods for help, but nothing would ever happen. Their prayers would always go unanswered, for the gods did nothing out of fear, for their own creations had abandoned mankind. All except for one though. Kami. Kami pleaded with the other gods to help the humans who were forced to suffer from their mistakes and pleaded them to help. But the gods would only ignore her and said she was too young to really understand the grand design. However, they were wrong, for Kami understood what was going on and decided to help mankind and even turn her back to her own kin and went to the earth to help. Kami descended upon the earth and offered to help in whatever way she could to the poor souls. She knew full well that she couldn't fight the Espers or the Biju on her own, so she searched the earth looking for people whom were special in their own way to aid her in battle. Kami came to 10 people with gifts that made them unique and pleaded with them to aid her. The 10 chosen people agreed to aid Kami, and for it they gave up their lives to become immortal beings of great power that would serve mankind. Hearing this, Naruto looked at the old man and said one thing: Eons. Mucho just nodded his head. Hi, those 10 people became the Eons. So the Eons were born. They began their war against the Espers. In the beginning, Espers honestly believed they could easily defeat the Eons since they were once humans and therefore weak. They were wrong. They failed to realize how truly strong the power of the human spirit was and were defeated with ease. Once the Espers were taken care of, the Eons then turned their sights towards the Biju, ready to fight them. However, the Biju weren't like the Espers and realized just how dangerous the Eons were and submitted to whatever they said. Seeing that the Biju didn't wish to fight them, the Eons agreed leave them be if they didn't harm the innocent any longer. The Biju agreed to this with protest. Everything was fine between the two at first, but over time the Biju became too power hungry and the Ians didn't like it and broke their vows that they had made. So Ians then declared that the Biju were far too corrupted to be allowed in their midst and declared that the Biju were to fall back into the fires of hell itself. Naruto once again looked at the old man, so that's why they're called the fallen Ians. It's because they fell into hell when the Ians banished them from our world. Mushi nodded his head but was confused. Naruto-sama, you seem to already know that, could you explain how? Naruto nodded his head. When I first meet my Eon, he told me that Kyuubi no Yoko was a fallen Eon. There's also one of them sealed into the younger brother of Tamari, the summoner of Valifor back in Suna. This was all Mucho needed to hear. Well, that makes sense, Naruto-sama. Now if you don't mind, I need a bit of rest for a moment. Mucho got up and left for a moment. Seeing this as a break, Tayuya got up and walked out of the room. Kin, not wanting her friend to be alone, went to follow after her. Outside with Tayuya. The young redhead was near one of the koi fish ponds trying to go over what happening and what was going to happen to her if she kept listening to this crap. She also kept thinking about what would happen to Kin if she did this summoner garbage, and also what happened between the two of them in the future. While the redhead was pondering this, she didn't notice Kin walking up behind her. Tayuya-sama. Said girl turned around and saw Kin standing there with a nervous smile on her face. It's nice night, isn't Tayuya-sama? Tayuya looked at the younger girl and could tell she wanted something. For some reason she was always able to read Kin like an open book. Tayuya put on a bored look and asked, what do you want, Kin? Hearing her name, Kin took in a deep breath. Tayuya-sama, are we going to go with Naruto-sama to the Leaf Village? Hearing this, Tayuya just blinked at the girl. I don't know about you, but I'm not going anywhere near that place. Kin gasped and shook, which confused Tayuya. Why aren't you going, Tayuya-sama? The redhead just snorted. For one thing, I don't believe in all of this summoner bullshit. Hearing this response, Kin looked down at the ground in disappointment. Tayuya saw this and tittered her head in confusion. Why are you asking anyway? Kin looked at Tayuya as she tried to form the words she needed. Well, if I am a summoner like Naruto-sama, I would need a guardian like all other summoners. When Tayuya heard, she just gave a glare. Why the hell would I want to be your fucking guardian? As I seem to recall, you started following me around when we first meet. Kin couldn't deny this. When she first met Tayuya, she saw how strong she was and admired her. She then started to follow the redhead around and Tayuya didn't seem to mind, and so the two just stuck together till now. Kin was soon brought out of her thoughts and realized how foolish she sounded just a moment ago and smiled. Gomen, Tayuya-sama, I don't know what I'm thinking. I'll see you inside. Kin turned around and walked away as fast as she could as tears started to fall down her face. While she was walking away, she failed to see the painful look on Tayuya's face that show only one thought was running through her mind. What should I do? Back with Naruto. Eventually Kin and Tayuya came back to the dining room with Naruto and the others. As soon as Mucho saw them, he began with the rest of his story. So after the Biju had fallen from grace along with the Espers, humans began to rebuild. With the help of Kami and the Ians, and with time they began to form what some would call a utopia. Seeing that all was well, Kami decided that she was no longer needed and returns to the heavens and let the Ians do as they please as their reward for their help. Upon her return to heaven, Kami expected to be treated with great respect from the other for her achievements. Sadly, that was not the case, as the other gods were not grateful for what Kami had done. They saw what she did as reckless and foolish and should have not interfered. As you can imagine, Kami was deeply offended and insulted for doing what she believed the right thing, and the other gods refused to see it that way. Time passed and humans lived there in peace and harmony. They expanded and established many villages and explored many of what were once unknown lands. Throughout these lands the people began to build temples and statues to honor Kami and the Ians who helped them. Mucho stopped his story and looked at Naruto. Naruto-sama, you said you already received one of the Ians, is this correct? Naruto nodded his head and Mucho smiled. The temple in which you received your Eon was built by those people. Everyone nodded, showing they understood. Anyway, back with the story. As more and more people kept worshipping Kami and her Eons, the other gods were not happy about that. They began to feel resentment towards not only the humans that had chosen to abandon them, but towards Kami and her Eons as well. Things started getting violent after that. Then it eventually became a civil war within heaven with the old gods and Kami and her Eons. The battle was long and bloody, but Kami had won and ruled over the heavens and allowed the Eons to live along with humanity without fear from her former family. It seemed perfect for a while, but while the Eons were battling with the old gods, they failed to notice what happened to them after they died. When the old gods were killed, their essence was meant to be absorbed into the cosmos. That didn't happen. Instead, the Espers somehow managed to gather the essence of their former creators to make sin. When Mucho said that, a cold wind suddenly appeared out of nowhere and a deep eerie chill filled the room. When everyone felt this, they all had the exact same thought, that's just creepy. Sin, I think I heard the Ians talking about that, just what is it anyway? Naruto asked. He had been wondering about it ever since he first heard the Ians talk about it and filled him with an unnatural fear. Naruto looked at Mucho and saw that he seemed a bit uneasy as well when he started talking about it like he had seen it himself. He also noticed Oren seemed tense as well on the subject, and Naruto knew he had seen being dead and all. Mucho looked down at the table with a sad look on his face as if he was being forced to remember a horrible moment in his life. When Mucho finally lifted his head and took a deep breath and began, "Sin is death." Everyone raised an eyebrow at hearing this. He began to explain, every eon has an element like the espers, may it be fire or ice or lighting or even earth, they all have an element to their power, Mucho explained. Yuya heard and asked out loud what everyone was thinking, so what the fucking hell made this fucker so fucking special? Mucho ignoring Yuya's vulgar language and went on, as I was saying, each eons and espers was meant to represent a certain element. But Sin was created to represent death and nothing else. When it existed, no one was safe, it would destroy entire countries with one attack and move on like it was nothing. People would cower in fear in the sight of Sin's shadow, and for good reason as well, for it spared no one in its path. Everyone who heard this felt a sudden chill in the air as if the cold fingers of death were open. Naruto looked at Mucho with concern, is this thing still around? There was a long silent moment before, no, Sin was destroyed by the most powerful summoners of the time. They gave their lives to stop it and the espers causing any more harm to anyone. They were heroes and this village will never forget them. While Mucho said this, one could easily tell by the sound of this voice is that something happened in his past that brought regret and pain to him. While hearing this, Yuya felt the need to give off an opinion of her own. Hey old man, how the fucking hell do you know so much about this shit any fucking way, huh? Everyone looked at her with a weird look, which annoyed Yuya. What the fuck are all you looking at? To which everyone replied, nothing. Mucho just shrugged off Yuya's profanity and looked at her. I have just been around a long time, Yuya-sama. Yuya just blinked and stared at him, trying to figure out exactly how old Mucho was. Dinner had went on farther into the night. Everyone would listen to Mucho's stories of past summoners and great deeds they had done. Some of Mucho's stories were exiting full of great deeds and horrible people. Some stories were sad and brought a few tears to their eyes, other filled the room with laughter. It was truly a good night. Mucho told them about some of the greatest summoners that ever lived, including Lady Yuna, a summoner who was able to reach new levels of power with her eons that allowed her to put up a decent fight against Kami herself in a spar. After Mucho finally ran out of stories to tell the young summoners and guardians and simply asked, so why don't you tell me about yourselves? Hearing this, the kids suddenly became nervous and Mucho could sense that. Kin decided to go first. There isn't much to tell. I'm an orphan who lived on the streets until I saw Yuya fighting some of the local thugs and winning, and that where I started to follow her. Next it was Yuya who just said there was nothing interesting and that was it. Naruto took a deep breath and put on a grin. Well, I guess I'll go next. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I'm from the village of Konoha. I like to eat ramen, spend time with the old man, learning about the Ians, training, and Hinata-chan. My dislikes are vegetables, people who hurt others for no reason, and drunk swordsmen. He glared at Oren. The others gave Naruto strange looks and Yuya asked, hey Naruto, who this old man you were talking about anyway? Naruto just looked at the red. He's the Hokage of my village. Yuya blinked. You call the leader of a shinobi village an old man? Naruto just nodded his head and Yuya just gave an evil smile. You must really have some balls, kid. Naruto just gave a nervous laugh. Thanks. I think. While Naruto and Yuya were talking, Kin tried to make conversation, but not being as outspoken as Yuya was, went ignored until Naruto noticed her. He turned his fellow summoner. Is there something you would like to ask me, Kin? Hearing her name made Kin blush. Well, Naruto-sama, I was Woner. Naruto interrupted. Call me Naruto. Naruto-sama makes me sound old. Kim nodded. Okay Naruto, I was just wondering, why, you, wear those bandages on your hands? Yuya decided to listen in as well, figuring it might be good for a laugh. Hearing this, Naruto looked down at his hands. Remember the night that he was almost killed? Naruto looked at everyone. I got them because I wanted to protect a friend and I would do it again if given the choice. Hearing this, everyone just stared as he explained what happened with Gaara and his uncle, and to say they were surprised would be a lie. Each person that was looking at him was either staring at him with a newfound respect like Yuya, or more respect like Kin, or just pride like Oren and Mucho. Kim looked at Naruto with a look that said she wasn't done asking questions. Naruto-sama, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but why would you want to protect someone like this Gaara? Naruto looked down at the table, which made Kin somewhat nervous, believing that she had done something to anger him. Eventually Naruto put on a grin on his face and replied, I did it because Gaara and me were similar in a way. Kin just blinked, clearly not understanding. Naruto just sighed. When I was born, the Kyuubi no Yoko attacked my home village and nearly destroyed it. But thanks to the Yondaime Hokage, it was defeated, but at the cost of his life. Everyone who was there believed the Yondaime sealed it within young baby, and that baby was me. Everyone, even Tayuya, gasped at this, not believing that someone could sew such a thing to an infant. But that's not what really happened, Naruto said, confusing everyone. In truth, the Kyuubi was one of the fallen Eon and was actually killed by the Yondaime. However, since no one knew that the Kyuubi was dead, they all assumed that it was still sealed in me and saw as the reincarnation of the Kyuubi, and they took their anger out on me. Naruto grew silent. Everyone could tell that he didn't want to talk about this past. Everyone grew silent except for Tayuya, who showed how she felt and what was normal to her. What kind of fucking bullshit is that? Damn it, I mean, who the fuck beats a young fucking kid because he may have a fucking demon sealed? I mean, how much of a fucking shithead do you have to tell the fucking difference between goddamn fucking demons and goddamn fucking babies? I mean, fuck jeez. At the end of Tayuya's little rant, many were just staring at the young redhead whose face matched her hair. While Tayuya was catching her breath, Naruto noticed Kin writing in a small book. What are you doing, Kin? Naruto asked. She simply replied, I keep track of how many times Tayuya-sama swears. She almost broke her record. Naruto just blinked. What's her record then? Kin flipped through a couple of pages and gave the book to Naruto. Right here. Seeing this, Naruto's eyes became dinner plates. When Naruto finally got his eyes back to normal, he looked at Tayuya and said without thinking, was one of your parents a sailor or something? I mean, your Kase-san must have. Naruto didn't finish his sentence as Tayuya punched him in the face, hard. This had sent Naruto flying in the wall with blood pouring out of his nose and mouth. He was about to yell at her and ask why she did that, but when he looked into her eyes, he saw nothing but anger, hatred, sorrow, and mostly betrayal. Tayuya grabbed Naruto by the front of the shirt and held him in mid-air and glared at him. You keep your fucking mouth shut, asshole. You don't know a fucking thing about me or my family, got it? Naruto listened to her words and he could hear nothing but pain in each word, especially when she mentioned family, leaving Naruto to think something must have happened in her past, something horrible. After Tayuya gave Naruto one more punch to the face and walked out of the room. Outside, Mucho shook his head, clearly seeing that this would cause problems in the future, and decided to help out and walked out of the room and followed Tayuya. Mucho went outside and found Tayuya sitting by one of the koi fish pond and appeared to be crying. He took a deep breath and walked up behind her, yet she didn't even notice him due to being caught up in her satins. He sat down next to her, placed a hand on her shoulder, which caused her to flinch as she formed at a fist and was about to punch whoever it was, hopefully Naruto, but stopped when she saw it was Mucho and stopped herself. Tayuya put her usual glare on and focused it on him with her usual attitude. What do you want, you damn geezer? Mucho ignored the geezer comment and sat down next to her. You act very mature for your age, but those tears show that you're still a child. Tayuya blushed at that comment. I'm not some little brat, and I haven't been one in a long time, and you don't know shit about me, so go and leave me the fuck alone, alright? Seeing that this wasn't going to be easy, Mucho decided to use a low blow. Naruto-sama was right, one of your parents must have a sailor or something, most likely your Otusan. Tayuya felt her blood began to boil and she did her best to restrain herself from pouching the old fuck in the face. Mucho could see that his words were getting to the young redhead, and as much as he hated to do this, he knew it was necessary to get such emotions out before they took control of her life and destroyed her. Or maybe you picked it up from your Kase-san. That was all that was needed to set Tayuya off. Fuck off, you bastard, don't bring those fucker into this. She made a dash towards him, ready to punch his lights out like she did with Naruto, but as she was about to punch, Mucho grabbed her fist with ease and held onto it. Tayuya saw this and tried with her arm fist. Mucho caught it as well. Tayuya tried to get her hands free, but she couldn't break free of Mucho's grip. She glared at the old with as much killer intent as she could produce. Let me go, damn it. Mucho just stared at her with a blank expression on his face. Who would care what some little brat like you wants? It's not like anyone cares about you, that's why you were alone before you meet with Kin. Tayuya's eyes widened in surprise when he said that as Mucho gave a smirk. I'm right, aren't I? I bet you were all alone before you found Kin. No one cared about you and put a don't give a shit attitude to convince others that's who you really are. But I can see the truth, you're just a little who wants to cry out for her Kase-san but knows that she will never come. Hearing all this, Tayuya tried her best to block out what she was hearing but couldn't. She managed to somehow get her hands free and covered her ears, trying to block out everything Mucho was saying. After what seemed to many hours, Tayuya couldn't take it anymore, the mental barriers, and broke down. She had fallen to her knee and stared at the ground, refusing to make any form of eye contact with Mucho. After a few minutes had gone by, Mucho crouched down to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Tayuya felt this and looked up to the old man to see his smiling face. Tayuya-sama, believe me when I say that you don't have to be alone. There are people who do care for you, and trust me when I say this. Tayuya just kept staring at him, wondering what he was going to say, until at last he answered, "You are not alone." Hearing these words, Tayuya for some reason, for some strange warmth inside her and whatever it was, she enjoyed up and smiled at the old man. "Arigato ji-san." Mucho just smiled. "No problem, but if you come with me I think I can really help you with something." Tayuya just nodded and followed the old man. Bushes near Tayuya and Mucho. "Ouch, damn twigs," Naruto said as he came out of the bushes and brushed himself off. After him came Kin and surprisingly Oren. "So what do you think we should do next? Go after Tayuya-sama or head back to the dining room?" Naruto just looked at her. "This was all your idea and you're asking what we should do next?" Kin just blinked. "Oh yeah, Gomen," Kin replied with a nervous laugh. Naruto just sighed and looked at Oren. "Why are you here?" Oren just looked at student. "I thought there would be sake if I came along." Naruto just sweat dropped at this and turned back to Kin. "Why are we doing this again? I mean, I know you wanted to check up on Tayuya, but she seemed like she can take care of herself." Kin looked at Naruto. "I know Tayuya-sama is strong, but she has had a rough past, and if it wasn't for her I don't think I would be here now. I just want to make sure everything is okay with the one person who saved my life." Hearing these words, Naruto just smiled at hearing at what type of person Tayuya really was. Back with Tayuya and Mucho. Tayuya and Mucho were walking down a long corridor when they reached what looked like a dead end until Mucho touched a panel, causing the wall to open to reveal a hidden passage. Tayuya had a scowl. "Okay, what the hell?" Mucho looked at her confused. "Nani?" Tayuya just glared at him. "That's the third hidden passage we have gone though. So far we went through 2 hidden tunnels, 5 passages behind a bookcase, 6 hidden stairways, 2 trapdoors and 3 hidden elevators. How the hell do you fit all this stuff in here anyway?" Mucho just rubbed his chin in thought. "That's a good question." Tayuya just stood there blinking. When the two finally arrived at their destination, Mucho walked over to an old chest covered in dust, but he didn't open. Instead he looked over at Tayuya again as if he was trying to make a decision about something. He soon stopped it and opened the chest, pulling out what looked like an old war flute. Tayuya just looked at the old man. "What am I supposed to do with this fucking thing?" Mucho just gave her a smirk. "That flute has a history behind it. It once belonged to a kunoichi of great skill as a ninja and a musician of unbelievable talent, not to mention she was also a guardian for a summoner as well." Tayuya was taken back at this and looked at him curiously. "Why would you give something like this to me anyway?" Mucho just smiled at the young girl. "I believe that you will have a key role in the future, whether you have a choose to be a guardian or not, and if you don't, well, that flute has been waiting for a new master for a long time, some like you." Hearing all this, Tayuya looked down at the flute. "Someone, like me." Back at the dining hall. Everyone had gone back to the dining hall to wait for Tayuya and Mucho. They didn't have to wait long as the two entered the room both smiling. Kin noticed Tayuya's smile was that of true happiness and she enjoyed it, not remembering the last time she saw her that happy. Naruto saw that Tayuya was carrying what looked like a war flute and had to ask, "Hey Tayuya, what's with the flute?" The red-haired girl just looked at the blonde boy. "It a war flute that was used by a previous guardian. Mucho thinks I could use it." Hearing this, Naruto gave a simple reply of, "Cool," while Kin just looked at the girl thinking, "Will you be my guardian, Tayuya-sama?" The rest of the night was spent talking about the future of the young guardians and hearing stories from Mucho and Oren. After all that, it was time to call it a night with Tayuya and Kin sharing a room, much to Kin's delight and Tayuya's dismay. While Oren and Naruto also shared a room which would reek of sake for Naruto. In the morning, Oren and Naruto were packing everything they needed for their long trip home. As they walked out of the door into the hallway, they saw Kin standing there wearing a pack. She looked at both swordsmen and calmly said, "I've decided to go with you, Naruto-sama." Naruto smiled at this. "Great, but where's Tayuya anyway?" Hearing this, Kin looked down at the ground and it was clear what was happening. Naruto just sighed. "Well, let's get going." As they were leaving the grounds and nearing the front gate, they noticed someone was already there, someone with red hair and a scowl on her face. "Well, it's about damn time. What the hell took all of you so long?" Everyone just stared at Tayuya, confused as to why she was there and surprised that she had not taken off when she had the chance. Kin looked at Tayuya with a worried look on her face. "Tayuya, does this mean you're coming with us?" Tayuya just rolled her eyes. "Of course I'm going with you. Hell, I know for a fact that you wouldn't last a day without me, so I have to go to keep you out of trouble." Kin just smiled at the older girl and hugged as hard as she could, but while she was doing this, Tayuya was trying to pry her off. "Hey, let go. Damn it." The group was nearing the edge of the village when a huge crowd of people including Mucho stood there with wanting to say goodbye to the young summoners. Mucho stepped forward with a kind look. "Naruto-sama, if you will grant an old man a favor." Naruto looked at the man. "What would that be, Mucho-sama?" Mucho just smiled. "Could you summon your Eon for me?" Not expecting this, Naruto just nodded and walked ahead of them. He did the same thing when he was at Suna and called for Valifor. Everyone looked at the sky to see a giant bird-like creature come from it and landing near Naruto. Everyone stared at the being in front of them in wonder at seeing something many of them had only heard from stories as to when they were children. Mucho however had a different response. He walked up to Valifor as if he had nothing to fear from the creature. Once he was face to face with the Eon, he simply brushed his hand over the red feathers covering its neck. He smiled and simply said, "Hello old friend." While he was doing this, Naruto took at Mucho's hand and saw it glowing in a dim light. The word wind printed on his hand and Naruto's jaw dropped to the ground as he pointed to the old man. You were a summoner." Mucho just gave a grin. How else would I know so much about the summoners of the past? Naruto just fainted at this point. Mucho on the other hand just looked at Valifor with a smile. "He reminds me of when I was young. Please take care of him Valifor," said Eon just purred as Mucho kept rubbing its feathers. After an hour had gone by, Naruto was finally awake and the group had settled off towards their destination. Last time with our blonde summoner, he along with his guardian Orin had managed to obtain Valifor the Eon of the Wind. They had also come across another summoner along their travels. The summoner's name was Kin, a long-haired girl who seemed eager to be a summoner. Along with them was Tayuga, a red-haired girl that wasn't afraid to speak her mind and cursed like a sailor. The group had left the last village had obtaining information that was very vital to the future. The group had determined that their destination was the Eon of Fire in Fire Country near Konoha to Naruto's delight. Once he found out where the temple was, he wanted to summon Valifor and fly straight there, but Orin stopped him. Naruto protested about this as well as Kin and Tayuya, who wanted to fly as well. Their reasons were, how often do you get to fly across a country on a giant bird instead of walking? However, Orin claimed that traveling across country would build stamina and help them become familiar with the landscape. They group followed a daily routine. They would travel during the morning, training in the afternoon, and resting in the evening. While they were resting, Orin would tell stories of past summoners and guardians and their accomplishments. When morning came, the group stopped in a small village close to their destination before making their final stop at Konoha. The group looked around and saw people running, laughing and enjoying themselves, along with many decorations, games, and fireworks. Seeing all this, everyone thought the same thing, but Naruto voiced it with enthusiasm: a festival. As he tried to make a break for the many games and food, he felt something grab the back of his shirt and looked back to see Orin holding him. Naruto glared at his guardian. "Hey Baka swordsman, what's the deal? I want to go to the festival." Orin didn't say anything. He just stared the young boy for several minutes until, "No." Naruto just glared at him. "Well, why not, asshole?" Orin didn't say anything and just pointed to a large temple. "You have to there first, then you can go to festival." Hearing this, Naruto smiled. "Well, why the hell didn't you say so?" and ran off. After he was out of sight, Orin sighed and looked at the ground as though something was bothering him. Kim noticed this and just had to ask, "Orin-sama, is something wrong?" Oruan just looked at the girl. "Did you two see the name of this village?" Kim just stood there trying to think, but Tayuya answered first. "Farplain village, so what's the big fucking deal?" Orin didn't answer and the two could tell that something big was going to happen. With Naruto at the temple. Naruto ran straight to the temple, knocking into people and carts and ignoring the angry shouts from the local villagers. He eventually arrived at temple. Naruto saw many monks and Mikos wandering around the temple as if preparing for someone's arrival. He walked over to one of the Mikos who was dusting off a large statue, Sumimasen ga. The young priestess looked at the small boy and smiled. "Can I help you, young man?" Naruto just smiled. "Hi, could you tell me what's going on here at the temple?" The Miko looked at the blonde confused as to not knowing, then figured that he wasn't from around him and agreed to show him around. The Miko took Naruto on a tour of the temple, of showing the various images and statues, explaining their meaning. Some of the things were images of various summoners. He even saw one that looked like a young Mucho. He kept looking around and saw many weapons that were used by past guardians to defend summoners within the past. As Naruto was looking around, he saw something that really caught his eye, for in the painting stood a man wearing all red with black hair and a huge sword on his back, Orin. The Miko heard this and saw the painting and smiled. "Hi, Orin-sama, or Sir Orin, so many names for that man. He was said to be the greatest guardian of all time and by far the most powerful swordsman to ever live." The Miko explained this with a sing-song voice and a blush on her face. However, she didn't expect Naruto's reaction, so that's what the drunken Baka swordsman looks like, young. Hearing this, the Miko looked at Naruto with a glare. "How you dare say such things about Orin-sama? He was the greatest guardian of all time and even guarded the great high summoner Yuna-san. You have no right to speak that way." Naruto just looked at the young Miko with a bored look. "Well, he's still nothing but a drunk. Even if he is a powerful swordsman, he's still a drunk." The Miko kept glaring at Naruto, ready to beat him to an inch of his life. What a little brat like you know about Oren-sama, you don't even the importance of gates of the farplane. Hearing this, Naruto looked at the Miko, gates of the farplane. The Miko smiled. No, she had outsmarted the little brat. Hi, the gates of the farplane is a very spiritual place and very important to summoners who come to learn the art of the sending. Naruto just looked at the Miko, the sending. The Miko nodded. Hi, the sending is a very important part of the duties of a summoner, for it is the art of sending the souls of the dead to the other side to find peace. Hearing this, Naruto couldn't help but gasp at what he was hearing. Is that the reason Oren sent me here? The Miko looked at Naruto and noticed something different about the boy and was about to ask what was wrong and tell, hey, just what is the farplane anyway? The Miko didn't expect this and began to explain. The farplane is a gift left to mankind by the Aeons. It is a small piece of physical land placed between our world and the world of the dead. When the Aeons were still around, people used the farplane to say goodbye to the ones they lost. Hearing this, a chill ran up Naruto's spine, suddenly figuring out exactly why Oren had sent him to the temple. Naruto was so lost in thought he didn't hear the Miko trying to get his attention. Nani, what do you say? The Miko just looked at with an annoyed look on her face. I asked you if you like to see the actual gates of the farplane. Hearing this, Naruto nodded his head, not entirely sure why he agreed. The Miko lead Naruto to two large down a hallway, passing by many people who looked at Naruto strangely. However, it honestly didn't bother him since he became a summoner. He had been given strange looks at nearly every village that had heard of him. Naruto and the Miko kept walking and Naruto looked at the Miko and asked, Gomen, but why are you taking me to the gates of farplane, anyway? The Miko looked at Naruto and just stared at the young boy, thinking to herself, why I am doing this, but she answered, everyone should see the gates at least once. Naruto accepted, not even thinking of questioning the answer. The two had gone deeper into the temple and now stood in front of a large iron door. There were two sets of chains surrounding the door, on the bottom half of the door and the top half of the door. The chains glowed with a powerful aura around them. At least the top half was glowing, the bottom one looked like it was severed in half. Naruto saw this and looked at the Miko. Hey Miko-sama, what's with chains in the wired door? The Miko just looked at Naruto and sighed. The chains were placed on the door by the last summoners. They are a spiritual and physical lock. Naruto looked at clearly confused. The Miko sighed. Okay, it like this, before the Aeons left our world they placed two types of locks to ensure nothing could enter and disrupt the farplane. Naruto nodded, showing he understood. Now to ensure the safety of those in the farplane would not be disturbed. The Aeons decreed that gates were to be locked until they thought it was right to allow mankind to harness their power again. As a final safety measure, the Aeons placed locks that would keep out both spiritual and physical beings to enter. Naruto nodded his head, understanding most of what she was saying. So if the locks kept people and spirits out, how did the dead enter the farplane after it was sealed? The Miko didn't answer at first. She just looked down at the ground. They couldn't, once the gates were sealed shut and nothing could get in. The dead have since then had no choice but to find other ways to enter the realm of the dead. Hearing this, Naruto opened his eyes in shock at what he was hearing. He then began to wonder what it would be like to be trapped away from your family and friends, never allowed to rest or rejoin with the ones you love. He then began to remember his life before he became a summoner, how he was always alone and unwanted and never allowed to be with the ones called family, and always denied the very existence of happiness, like he was. Naruto brought himself out of his thoughts and looked at the Miko. So how do you open the last lock anyway? The Miko stared at the young boy, wondering why he would ask something like that before answering. I honestly don't know, only the chosen summoner of the Aeons will be able to break the lock and open the door and enter the farplane. The lock you see now is the physical lock of the farplane, meant to keep mortals out, and for some reason it just broke without warning. When this happened, we knew it was a sign, and many took this a sign of great things to come. But I personally pity the person who has to do it. Naruto just looked at her, asking for an expiation. See, when the summoner opens the gates to the farplane, they must learn the sending. In a way, it's like dance to tell the spirits of dead where to go so that they may enter the farplane and find peace. However, when they perform the dance, the summoner will unfortunately feel the pain, sorrow, and regret of every soul that they send. Naruto began to get nervous. Just how many souls are we taking about? The Miko just sighed. That I do not know, for the last sending was performed many years ago, and not long after that, the farplane was sealed off. So the number of souls that haven't been able to cross over must be uncountable. Everything was silent as Naruto took a moment for himself and began to walk towards the door. The Miko saw this and tried to stop Naruto. Boy, what are you doing? Get away from there this instant. Naruto stood in front of the door doing nothing until, it is the job of a summoner to protect the world and help the dead. I understand that responsibility. I also understand it is also my responsibility. The Miko looked at him confused. What are you talking about? I thought I made clear the only one who can open that door is the new summoner, not some kid. Naruto didn't answer, he just placed his hand that was marked with the symbol of destruction on the door. When he did this, the spiritual chain that kept the door sealed began to glow brightly and suddenly scattered, allowing the door to open. The Miko stood there not understanding what was going with this boy until she saw it. The symbol of destruction on Naruto's hand began to glow brightly, and when the Miko saw this, she couldn't help but gasp in surprise. He is the one, the summoner we have been waiting for. While the Miko was so engrossed in her discovery, the heavy iron doors that had kept the farplane that had been kept closed for so long began to slowly open. As soon as the doors were far enough, a blinding white light began to pierce through the narrow opening that was formed. As the light began to fill the room, the Miko was forced to cover her eyes as the white light began to glow brighter and a strong gust of wind blew from the door. The light and wind became so strong that the Miko had no choice but to take a step backwards. She even began to consider running away in order to escape the violent elements that were being displayed right now. However, she stopped herself and remembered the boy. She turned around and tired looking for him. Unfortunately, the light had gotten brighter, something that should have been impossible, and wind had somehow gotten stronger as well. She found it impossible to get any closer. She had no choice but to try and talk him out. He was too young for this responsibility. Boy, listen to me, I understand why you're doing, but believe me, you are still a child and not ready for the hardship this will bring. Please come with me before it's too late. The Miko listened for any kind of sound that would be close to a response but heard nothing. Since shouting wasn't going to work, she had no choice but try to move as close to the opening as she could. She moved inch by inch, nearing the once closed gates of the farplane, and ignored the pain she was receiving from the burning light and strong wind. Once she was mere inches from the gates, she could make out a figure staring into the light. The Miko figured it was Naruto and reached out her hand to grab him. Boy, take my hand please. The Miko expected him, like most children who didn't understand what was happening, to listen and react out of fear. However, that was not the case with Naruto, for instead of taking the Miko's hand, he just turned to her with an emotionless look on his face, but not in his eyes. In his eyes, there was signs determination, pride and a sense of obligation. It was like despite his youth he knew what he was doing and had no regrets if anything went wrong. It was those blue eyes that the Miko felt some kind of relief and pulled her hand back and watched as the boy, no, the young summoner in front of her, put on a fox-like grin and began to disappear into the light. After Naruto had completely disappeared into the light, the Miko just stood there watching the spot where Naruto had stood a second ago. The Miko just kept standing there, not even realizing that the light was no longer bothering her eyes as she kept staring into farplane. Eventually the light started to dim down enough that Miko blinked and began to rub her eyes, waiting for her eyes to adjust so that she could see. When she regained the ability to see, she stared at the opening that led into the farplane and gasped in surprise. As a child, she was told many stories of the farplane, but to see it with her own eyes, the Miko couldn't help stare at the sight in front of her as tears began to fall down her face. She never thought that in her life she would look upon something so beautiful that she didn't realize the ground was shaking beneath her. With Oren, Kim, and Tayuya back with the rest of the group, Oren was explaining why Naruto needed to go to the temple and what he had to do. Kin decided to pay close attention to everything that Oren was saying, making sure that she memorized everything, knowing that one day she would need to do the very same thing. While Kin was taken everything in with much enthusiasm, Tayuya just sat there eyeing Oren with a suspicious look. Oren noticed this and stared at Tayuya. Do you have something you wish to say, Tayuya? Kin heard this and looked at Tayuya, recognizing the look on the redhead face. This is not going to turn out well. Tayuya just stared at Oren with a grin on her face. Yeah, I got a fucking thing to say, jackass. Kin heard the tone in Tayuya's voice and began to panic. Here it comes. Oren just looked clammed like always. And what is it you would like to say to me? Please speak your mind. Tayuya just put on an evil smile on her lips. What I have to say is, you expect us to fucking believe this bullshit about dead people and farplane and all this other fucking garabe you're saying out your fucking mouth. Oren just stared at the foul-mouthed girl with no emotion on his face. What exactly do you find so fucking unbelievable, Tayuya-san? Both girls did a double take on this, never heard or expecting Oren to swear, but Tayuya got over it quickly. You expect us to believe that Naruto going become some kind of messenger of the dead? Oren just nodded. That is one way of looking at for some people who called summoners shepherd of dead because of their abilities to send the dead to the other side. Tayuya just scoffed. So what are you going to be telling now, that we're going to be running into the walking dead or something? Oren just gave her a dark smile. You don't seem to have a problem with me even though I am dead. Tayuya and Kin looked in front them and blinked, unable to find the right words needed. At least until Tayuya spoke. Bullshit. Oren just looked at her. It's true, he said in a serious tone of voice. Tayuya gave him a look of disbelief. Why don't you fucking prove it then, asshole? Oren did nothing at first but just reached into his coat. The two girls just looked at each other silently, asking each other what he was doing. They so got their answers when Oren pulled out a kunai, then placed it above his wrist and looked at the two girls. You still don't believe me, do you? Tayuya nodded her head, believing he was bluffing, while Kin was shacking, believing he would do it. After a minute or two, Oren still held the kunai over his wrist while Tayuya was getting impatient. Well, fucker, if you're going to do it, then fucking do it already. With those words, Oren without any warning rammed the kunai right through his wrist, piercing the skin and the vein. The two girls just sat there watching with their mouth wide open at the bloody sight in front of them. Kin turned green and covered her eyes so she wouldn't have to look at the sight in front of her. Tayuya on the other hand had a different reaction. While she was queasy at the sight of Oren blood, she had tougher stomach and had seen somewhat worse. She still had to voice her opinion. What the fuck is wrong with you, asshole? I wasn't fucking serious when I fucking said that, dumbass. Oren just stared at her with a blank and emotionless look on his face. You asked for proof and you got it, or do you need more? Oren said with a sick grin on his face as he brought the blade up to his throat, holding it inches away from his skin. Tayuya and Kin already knew what he was going to do and wanted to stop him before it was too late. Unfortunately, it didn't matter, for Oren had already pierced the flesh and began to cut from one side to the other, making a long clean cut across his throat. The sight in front of them was worse than before, as Kin couldn't help but lose the lunch she had earlier while Tayuya just covered her eyes. The two girls didn't look at the now dead warrior, afraid of the sight in front of them, but still could hear the gurgling noise of the blood clogging his throat. Once the noise of choking was gone, both girls looked forward to see if Oren was finally dead. The girls looked at the man that was supposed to be Naruto's guardian and saw him looking at the ground while large drops of blood were falling to the ground and pouring down his clothes. The two girls just stared at the sight in front of them, not believing that someone would do something like that. The girls began to move closer towards Oren's dead body, to see if he had really died, was faking it, or was using some kind of genjutsu. Tayuya tried to cancel the genjutsu using the tricks she had learned in the past when she was younger. After she had done this and seen that it wasn't a genjutsu, Tayuya began to get as close as she wanted to the body. Tayuya had gotten as close as she wanted to get to the dead man and began to poke at him with a stick. She began to poke at the body, seeing if she could get any kind of reaction out of him to prove he was faking it. After 5 pokes at least, Tayuya gave up and concluded that Oren was dead. Seeing the corpse of their supposed guardian in front of her, Tayuya for a brief moment almost felt like prying for his soul if he wasn't such an idiot to do something so stupid that he got himself killed. While Tayuya was staring at the corpse, Kin was in a different state of mind. She was visibly shacking at the sight in front of her. She had come to respect and admire Oren, and now seeing him dead in front of him was very upsetting. She did her best, but the tears kept falling from her eyes. While the two girls were lost in their grief, they had failed to notice Oren had risen his head back up and looked at the two girls and smiled. Never thought you two cared about me that much. Both girls blinked at the voice they had heard and looked up to see Oren still sitting there with the cut on his throat still fresh and leaking blood. Both girls saw this, and while a little happy to see him alive, they both turned white as a ghost, then screamed out, "Holy fucking shit, zombie." Oren I began to twitch at being called a zombie again, but could still understand their reaction, and it was still better than Naruto. They didn't try running. After Tayuya had swallowed most of her fear and stood her ground, but was still shacking in fear. The fear that was brought up by standing in front of some who was dead and alive at the same time, something most sane people were afraid of. With one last deep breath, Tayuya found the words she needed to say. So you really are dead, aren't you? Oren nodded his head, showing he was telling the truth, but put on a sick smile as he brought the kunai that he still had up to his chest. Do you want more proof? Oren asked, but before the girls could answer, he plunged the kunai through his chest right to where his heart was and left it in place. Both girls kept staring at the sight in front of him, not bothered as much as the first 2 acts, since they somewhat knew what to expect. Kin kept staring at Oren, relived that he would live even after all that had just happened to him. However, she also shivered at the upcoming nightmares of Oren holding her head in his hand, taking small amounts of her brain out, and eating it like a snack. Tayuya just looked at Oren with a smile at the use of a living target that couldn't die. Her mind was full of images of Oren being used as a practice dummy for kunai throwing, torture techniques, maybe lighting him on fire, so many possibilities for this drunk fucking bastard. It wasn't long before both girls were dropped out of their thoughts when the earth beneath them began to shake beneath them. Kin, fearing for her life, grabbed Tayuya's arm, shouting, "We're going to die." Tayuya was more calm than that as she tried to keep her balance. What the fuck is going on? The moment Tayuya thought this, a large bright light shoot up from where the temple was straight into the sky, annoying Tayuya. Fucking Naruto, can't he keep things simple? Lake in center of village. Many of the villagers who had felt the tremor began rushing towards the center of their village in a panic. They were all setting up last-minute decorations around the area as well as setting up a stage and having men and women singers preparing for some kind of event. Tayuya, Kin, and Oren began to follow the crowds of people wondering what was going on since everyone was too busy to give them a straight answer. Giving up, they each decided to get a good spot in front of the lake to watch for whatever show was about to happen. It soon began to grow quiet as many of the monks lit the last of the candles and began to pray. With one long sigh, the monks and the village elders began to sing together into a moving and sad song, Hymn of the Faith, and with them each member of the village began to sing with them. Once everyone was singing, all at once in complete sync with one another, three people were trying to figure out what was going on. Oren stood there being more than familiar with how the hymn went, feeling somewhat relieved that the song would not fade away with time, long many things he had lost. However, Oren was also felt regret while hearing it brought back memories of old friends. Tayuya stood there listening to each of the words that were said with the hymn. While she listened to it, she felt a strange sensation run across her skin. It felt good to hear this song and she wanted to keep listening without interruptions. For what seemed like many years, Tayuya had finally felt at peace with herself. Kin listened to the hymn, letting the words flow through her. They were calm and soothing and brought out a peace Kin didn't know existed. While this calm washed over her, Kin began to unconsciously rub the symbol on her hand. Is this one of positives of being a summoner? The small group attention was eventually brought out of their thoughts as they looked at the lake, which was now glowing brightly. Before anyone could ask what was happening, flashes of light began to shoot out of the lake into the sky. One of the lights was a bright sliver and the symbol for wind appeared beneath it. After that, more lights began to shoot out of the lake following the sliver light. The next one was red, then yellow, followed by blue, black, gray, purple, and finally green. Each light formed around into a circular pattern surrounding a white light at the center of it all. The villagers looked towards the center, trying seeing a figure standing there holding a large sword in his hands but was wearing to be some kind of silk kimono. Once the people could make this person out, some began to whisper, the summoner. Fortunately, Tayuya, Kin and Oren heard this and looked towards the lake trying to see their idiot blonde, but this was not the case. When they looked at the figure on the lake, they didn't see the blonde they were familiar with. What they did see was someone was completely different. This person had the face of Naruto, the body, even the same whisker marks. The difference was his eyes that were different. One had been so full of life and excitement one would normally see in a child were gone, and in their place was something cold and sad found only in hardened warriors. To simply put it, Naruto had taken on the persona of the warrior who was about to charge into battle, the leader who was going to make a great sacrifice, and the father who had no choice but to condemn their own child. In short, Naruto was about to something that, while it would help many people but leave many scars, he would be forced to wear. Center of lake. Naruto stood there not really understanding what he had seen. He remembered walking into the far plane, and after that, it was all just flashes of bright lights and images passed before his eyes, leaving him to wonder what he was seeing. The next thing he knew, he was standing in a field of flowers he had never seen before. They were deep red and alien at the same time. He looked around at the landscape to try to get his bearings but gasped at what he saw. The sky was a deep orange mixed with red. It looked like a sunset, but the sun, or rather suns, were high in the sky. The fields went on for miles and miles with scenery of mountains, waterfalls and grass fields all around. However, the air is what caught Naruto's attention the most. There was something peaceful about it. Naruto stood onto a ledge overlooking a valley. Naruto looked down and saw something at the bottom. It appeared to be a lake, but there were thousands of bright lights surrounding it. Naruto moved closer to see if he could get a better look at what was going, but didn't notice the small rock under his foot until he knocked it over the edge. When this happened, the lights, as if reacting to a threat, and scattered into every direction. Naruto realized his mistake and did what he always did in this type of situation, fuck. Cursed like that foul-mouthed little brat that he was. However, something different happened this time. He felt a smack to the back of his head. Watch your mouth, Gaki. Naruto, holding his head in pain, turned around to see what asshole decided to fuck with him. To his surprise, said asshole with a beautiful-looking woman with long red, Anbu gear, a Konoha headband and an orange swirl on her vest. Naruto looked at the woman at a loss for words. She seemed somehow familiar. But he didn't have time to let something like that bother him right now. Hey lady, where the hell I am and why the hell did you it, damn it. The red-haired woman didn't respond with words, but instead with another punch to the back of Naruto's head and a kick to Naruto's ribs. I said watch your mouth, Gaki. Naruto glared at the women and responded, why should I listen to you, you're not my Ka-san. After Naruto said that, there was a strange feeling in his stomach that he couldn't identify. Naruto also noticed something in the woman's eyes, as well as certain coldness that showed hurt as well as regret. He was about to ask, but the woman beat him to his question. Okay, let's make this quick, I got better things to do. Naruto nodded and sat in front of the woman willing to listen as Orin had taught him to always grasp the surrounding knowledge, especially after your 18th or so bottle of sake. Damn baka swordsman can't even teach a good lesson without some kind of alcohol, damn zombie booze hound. The redhead noticed that Naruto was lost in thought and decided to wake up with what she had available, a rock to which she threw right at the side of his head. Naruto felt this and glared at the woman. Now that you're paying attention, I began to explain why you're here. Well, at least from others told me personally, I don't believe a word of it. Naruto eyed her with an evil glare while the woman had an evil smirk on her face. Then in a calm and sick kind of voice began to speak. I mean, when they mentioned that a new summoner was coming, nearly everyone here in the far plane went nuts. It was hilarious seeing everyone running around like a bout of chickens with their heads cut off. Then I'm called up saying that I have to explain everything to the supposed newest summoner. The woman gave a chuckle. Naruto just glared at her. The woman kept chuckling at the blonde's anger for her, and when I get me so-called new and great summoner, I find. There was silence between the two as the women just kept giving a smile, but why I find is a loudmouth, baka-looking midget who not only is just playing pretend when it comes to being a summoner. Naruto clenched his fist, and a second-rate swordsman at least. That did as Naruto grabbed the first thing he could and without realizing, it swung his sword at the woman who dodged it easily. Naruto swore at this but didn't stop as he got up and got into stance for another attack, but the woman he was going to attack was gone. Naruto looked around trying to figure out where she went. She heard until he heard, to slow Gaki. Naruto heard, and before he could even turn or block he felt a strike to his back and he hit the ground. The woman stood over Naruto holding a standard Anbu sword in her hand. The blade was on the other side so she couldn't actually cut Naruto. The red-haired woman stood over the small boy examining him. He has some skill with a blade from the speed it took him to get into the stance, but he lacks experience with it. The woman gave a smile at the boy who was getting up and getting back into fighting position, but before he could attack, the woman put her blade away. Naruto looked at the woman, seeing putting her bald away, feeling somewhat insulted that the woman in front of him was not taking him seriously and that she was putting her sword away. Naruto glared at the woman. Hey, I'm not done yet, bring out your sword, lady. The woman sighed. First thing, kid, stop calling me lady. I have a name, it Kushina, got it? Naruto just gave her an annoyed look. Like, I care what your name is, lady, can we just get to why I here already? You've already wasted enough of my time as it is. The woman now named Kushina just rolled her eyes. Fine Gaki, the reason I'm here is to teach you the sending and maybe a few other things about past summoners. Naruto looked Kushina with a disbelieving, what would you know about summoners, lady? Hearing his, Kushina gave an evil smirk that was strangely similar to Naruto's. I'll have you know that I grew up in a village where the temple of the Eon of Destruction was. Hearing this, Naruto stared at Kushina wide-eyed. Your village housed Bahamut-sama. Kushina gave a grin of pride. Yep, why do you ask? Naruto rose up his hand and showed the symbol of destruction on his bandage hand. Kushina saw this, smiled with pride. Figures. Naruto was so excited about hearing where his Eon was that he forgot if anger and frustration at Kushina, but then noticed the leaf headband around her neck. Naruto, wanting answers, asked, if you're from a different village, why to have a Konoha headband? Kushina just sighed. I was born in Whirlpool country where the temple of Bahamut was. I moved towards during the Shinobi War and I also died there as well, I'm afraid. Kushina looked down at the ground. Naruto heard this and couldn't help but feel sorry for the woman in front of him. Gomen, I didn't know. Kushina just shrugged her shoulders. It's okay, I died almost 6 years ago, so I'm over it now. She said, but tone of voice betrayed how she was really feeling. Hearing the hurt in Kushina's voice for some reason affected Naruto as well, and he wanted to comfort her for some reason. He never got the chance to ask as Kushina got up and beat him to any questions. Alright kid, all this chit-chat had gone on long enough, we have to work to do. Naruto nodded and began to listen to everything Kushina said about past summoners and her life as a shinobi. The two talked for many hours like two friends who hadn't seen each other for years. While he was training, Naruto felt some kind of strange peace with being around Kushina. He enjoyed his training with her and learning not only swordsmanship from her but history as well, something that usually bored him easily. However, something was bugging him about the way Kushina looked at him. In her eyes, she showed a great sadness that he just couldn't figure out. So after they had just finished practicing the moves for the sending, when Naruto decided to ask, hey Kushina-san, did you leave anyone behind when you died? Kushina looked at the blonde-haired summoner and sighed, hi, I did, now drop it. Naruto was about to ask more but Kushina glared at him. I said drop it. Naruto took a step back but nodded. Some time later. Naruto was resting in one of the many fields staring at the orange sky and enjoying the view. He wasn't too concerned about doing anything since Kushina told that time here and time in the living world flowed in a different sort of way. Naruto had gotten nearly all of his stances for the sending right and his swordsmanship had greatly improved, but he knew he couldn't stay here. He had things to do and people to get back, namely Hinata. Naruto was so lost in thought he didn't even notice Kushina walking towards him, thinking of someone. Naruto just looked at the red-haired woman and nodded his head. Kushina smiled. What her name? Naruto, without thinking about what she said, Hyuga Hinata. Once he realized what he said, he covered his mouth. Kushina snickered at her little stunt and decided to have some fun. Hinata, huh? Good name, and a Hyuga no less. You're in for a treat when you get older. Naruto looked at the woman, afraid to ask what she was talking about, but he did. What do you mean? Kushina gave an evil grin. Well, I knew a few Hyuga from my time in Konoha, and let's just say when they come of age they're perfect to look at from the neck down. Naruto looked at the woman with a questioning look, not understanding what she was talking. Kushina saw this and remembered that he was still a boy after all. What I'm talking about, Naruto-kun, is when your little Hinata-chan grows up she won't be so little, especially when it comes to her chest. Hearing this, Naruto now understood what she was talking about and could feel blood pouring from his nose. Kushina saw this and smiled. That's right, Gaki, and we're talking about melon-sized tits, flat stomach, long legs, cute face, long slick hair, and of course a nice firm ass. Naruto did his best to block out everything Kushina was saying, but failed as the image of an older Hinata that looked exactly like Kushina said appeared in his mind. After this, Naruto was literally shot into due to large amount of blood shooting out of his nose. After he hit the ground, which took quite a while, Naruto eventually hit the ground and was unconscious. Kushina looked at the blonde and began to laugh loudly while holding her ribs. He's got then more than a crush on the girl. I wonder if she related to Hashi and Aki, if the little pansy finally grew a pair and asked her to marry him. Naruto was now entering the last of his training with Kushina. He knew he had to leave soon and get back to everyone else, but he was also saddened by the fact that he would be leaving her and probably never seeing this woman again. He didn't know why this bothered, but in their short time together, Kushina had become something like a mother towards Naruto, and he liked it and never wanted it to end. Sadly, he knew it had to. Naruto had just performed the entire ritual that was the sending, with Kushina standing over him checking him for any flaws. After he finished, he looked at his instructor to see if she approved. Kushina stood over Naruto, her arms crossed and a serious look on her face that was unlike her. She said nothing at first as she just kept glaring at the boy before she broke the stare and grinned, giving him thumbs up. Nice work, Gaki, not a single flaw. Naruto broke his open grin and stared, jumping for joy much like any kid his age would as he looked at Kushina. So what now, Kushina-sensei? Kushina just nodded her head. Now we have to get an approval from the previous high summoners and you can be on your way. Hearing this, Naruto felt a pain in his gut at hearing previous high summoners, and on his way. He looked down at the ground and began to dread. Kushina sensed this and looked at the boy. What up, kid? Naruto didn't answer, but Kushina could tell what was wrong. Look, Gaki, I'll admit I enjoyed our little time together, but this is the realm of the dead. You don't belong here. You have friends to get back to, and I can certainly tell you it's not polite to keep a girl waiting. Hearing this, Naruto suddenly remembered all his friends and Hinata most of all. Naruto sighed and nodded his head. I understand, but could you do something for me if I do this right? Kushina blinked, not expecting this. Sure, what do you want, and only if you pass on your first try. Naruto nodded. I want you tell me about your life. Kushina heard but didn't respond until she finally said, deal. Center of Farplane. Naruto and Kushina walked towards a round stone area with symbols of carved in it. Behind the symbol was a stone that glowed with a bright light and also had the symbol as well but was glowing. While Naruto was looking at the scenery, Kushina was standing by him as if waiting for someone. After waiting for about 2 minutes or so, Kushina got tired of waiting as she shouted, hey, where the hell is everyone? Not getting the response she wanted, Kushina, she crossed her arms childishly. Figure, as they say, don't be late but they're never on time, is so stupid. Kushina just sighed and looked at Naruto to see him glaring at her. Kushina was surprised. Nani? Naruto just kept his look. We're supposed to be doing something important. Could you please act with a little professionalism and not be so childish? Kushina looked at the blonde boy with her mouth hanging opening and her eyes nearly popping out of their sockets. After a few moments, Kushina said the only thing she could think of, what the fuck did you say, you? Naruto just shrugged his shoulders. You heard me. After that, Naruto found himself in a chokehold compliments of Kushina. While the two were trying to kill each other, they both failed to notice that they had a guest watching them and was enjoying the show but had to end it. If you two are done, we have a ritual to perform. Both blonde and redhead looked towards where the voice had come from to see whom it was standing there. What they saw was a small boy in purple outfit and brown skin. The two recognized him immediately. Bahamut-sama, the two said. Bahamut stood there with a childish smile on his as he looked at the two in front of him. It is good to see two again, especially you, Naruto. Naruto managed to worm his way out of Kushina grip and walk over Bahmut taking about all the things he had learned since they had last met. However, he was mostly exaggerating and boosting, which annoyed Kushina, who was still mad about being told she was childish by him. I see most of us are here. Everyone heard yet another voice and looked to see an older woman smiling at all of them. Before anyone could react, Naruto had already bottled towards the woman, Anima-sama. Hearing this, Kushina was a bit taken back, not expecting Naruto to have already met Lady Anima. As far as she knew, only summoners who were nearing the end of their pilgrimage were allowed to meet Anima. Since Kushina didn't like to be kept in the dark, she had to ask, "Hey Naruto, how do you know Anima-sama?" Naruto just looked at Kushina with a smile. "Anima-sama is going to be Hinata-chan's summon." Kushina gasped and smiled, "So that how their relationship is going to work, he. After they had everything set up, Naruto stood in the center of the stone ring with everyone looking at him. He could see Kushina in front of him holding a strange smile Naruto had often seen off mothers whose kids had graduated the academy. Next to her was a brunette with a beautiful face but strange eyes, one being blue and the other being green. Around the area stood Bahamut watching over him along with Anima also. Valifor had decided to join in and watch. However, most of the area was empty. When Naruto asked, he was told that the other Ians were busy or didn't like him for being a male. Naruto stood there and listened for the hymn of the faith to begin and he could start. It was important to him that he get this right on his first try, and he also needed to listen to the advice Bahamut had given him. Before he started, he remembered Bahamut telling him that the best way to avoid the pain of the sending was to think about someone that clam his and cancel the pain he felt. He was told that it was supposed to be either a strong memory of either something or someone. Naruto couldn't think of a memory strong enough to help him now, but he was told that this was just a practice before the real thing. Once the hymn began, Naruto with his sword in hand began to move in a pattern that Kushina had drilled into his head. He moved as if he no control but knew he did, and before he knew it, it was over. With Kushina, she looked over towards the brunette and silently asked if he passed. The woman just smiled. "He's not bad for a beginner." Hearing this, Kushina let out a loud sigh of relief. "Arigato, Lady Yuna." Entrance of the Farplane. Naruto stood at was called the Door of the Living. Naruto stood there, his sword on his back, a fresh set of clothes on him. Everyone who had watched the ritual was there wanting to give in their last goodbye to the young summoner. When all was said and done, everyone was expecting him to jump right through the portal and get home, but he didn't. Naruto just stood there with a scowl on his face and directly at Kushina. He said nothing at first until, "We had deal, Kushina-san." Hearing this, everyone looked at Kushina as an uneasy chill ran through the wind. Kushina just sighed. "I was born in Whirlpool Country. I trained my whole life to being the best shinobi, and I was." Everyone just rolled their eyes at Kushina's boosting. "I took part in the last shinobi war. I meet a man unlike any other." At this, Kushina's eyes began to water as tears were freely pouring down her face. "Then the war was over and this man and I married." Kushina stopped and smiled at the next set of memories. "Those moments were the happiest days of my life. For a short time there was no killing, no war, just me and that man and the life that was growing inside of me." Hearing this, Naruto's eyes opened wide. He looked at the woman in front of him, not even thinking that the woman in front of him was once a mother. Naruto wanted to say something, but Kushina started talking. "Not long after that I found out I was pregnant. I went to tell this man in person." Kushina smiled. "The moment I told him, he fainted right there." Everyone that was listening began to laugh, even Naruto, but he didn't know why. Not long after, Kushina continued, "So after he finally woke up, the first thing he did was grab me and get on one knee and ask me to marry him, and I accepted." Naruto smiled, thinking that was it, until Kushina said something that stopped him in his tracks. After that he took the role as Yondaime Hokage. Hearing this, Naruto looked at the woman in front, trying to see if she was lying, but he could tell that she was being truthful. Kushina then for some reason began to walk towards Naruto. Soon months went by and my child was to be born on October 10th. Naruto gulped, almost afraid to hear what was next, as Kushina was now eye level to Naruto. "On that night the Kyuubi attacked and I gave birth to my son, a blonde-haired boy with blue eyes and looked just like his father. However, I had lost a lot of blood during the birth and wouldn't last long, but I did get to hold my son for the first time." Naruto was listening to every word Kushina was saying as she drew her arms around him. "As I held my baby boy for the first time, I got to see him smile and imagined what kind of man he would and how proud I was of him. Then, I died. I soon came here and adjusted to the way of the Farplane, helping the few people who managed to find this place on their own." Naruto kept hearing this, tears falling from his eyes as he listened. "Then nearly 6 years later I hear about a blonde boy from Living World was coming and I had to see him myself, and I'm glad I did. I was so happy to see my boy, my little baby boy Naruto." Hearing these words, Naruto without any real control hugged Kushina, crying, "Ka-san. As he did this, held as tight as he could, not wanting to let go of the woman for many nights he cried out for. Kushina did the same thing, not wanting to let her baby go even though she had no choice. Kushina swallowed the spit that had built up in her throat as she spoke. Naruto, I know this is going to be hard, but you have to return to the living world. Naruto was about to argue, but Kushina stopped him. Listen, you have to go back, you're needed there, not here, and I thought I already told you. Kushina smiled. You shouldn't keep a lady waiting, Naruto-kun. Hearing this, Naruto remembered Hinata and nodded his head in agreement. Okay, Ka-san. With one last final goodbye, the mother and son were to part yet again, but at least this time they could a proper goodbye. As Naruto walking towards the exit, he heard Kushina shout out, "Don't forget, Naruto-kun, I expect a lot of grandchildren when I get the chance to visit." Hearing this, Naruto blushed. Ka-san were just friends, and with that Naruto left. Kushina still a smirk on her face. Me and Minato-kun were just friends, and 1 Naruto-kun. Farplain village center of Lac. So now, Naruto now found himself standing in the center of a lake floating there, but he knew what he had to do as soon as the hymn began. As he did in his training, Naruto began the dance of the sending with one thing on his mind, the image of Hinata, and that kept him going. Lakeshore side. Everyone at the lake was prying as they watched the young summoner perform the sending. Halfway through the dance is what really started to get interesting, as the torches began to glow in a deep blue color, surprising many of the children and young adults. With Orin and the others, Kin was impressed so far with what was going on. Tayuya just gave a bored look at what she's seeing, believing it to be just a fancy light show. However, those soon changed as a small sphere light began floating by, freaking the redhead out. Soon millions of lights began floating around the area, mostly around Naruto, spinning in a clockwise pattern, shooting upwards into the sky. Soon more and more lights began pouring from every direction in the sky. This was also happening in everyone in every village looking towards the sky, as the small lights all began to fly towards the village. After what seemed like many hours, the last of the lights had faded into the night sky. Naruto walked towards the shore with the many monks and Miko waiting for him. The temple leader was the first to approach, but before he could say anything, Naruto called, "Valifor." Many backed up when the white charca flowed around him and the bird Eon fell from the sky and landed right next to him. Many of the villagers backed awake in fear. The head monk looked at Naruto asking, "Naruto-sama, what?" Naruto's face didn't change as he looked at the man. "Forgive me, but I have something to do." Naruto said this, then got on Valifor's back and looked at Orin, who just nodded. Naruto just smiled and turned to his friend. "Valifor, take me to Konoha." The bird-like creature just grunted and took off, soaring off into the air. Many of the onlookers were confused. One decided to express herself out loud. "What the fuck was that about?" shouted Tayuya. Konoha village. Two chunin stood in front of the gate, being forced to do guard duty, the worst job of a ninja. The two ninjas just sighed as they were about to get on their knees and pray for something to happen. They got their wishes. The next they knew, they saw a Genet bird-like creature flying towards the village. The guards, at seeing the demon bird, looked at each other. Sound the alarm before. The guard didn't get to finish as the demon flew past them. The two chunin sounded the alarm and began to prepare for battle. While they were doing this, many of the civilians who saw the giant bird began to run in fear, afraid of what happened with the Kyuubi would be happening again. In front of academy, 3 girls were running as fast as they could, try to get to class before they were late. However, one girl just suddenly stopped and began to look up into the sky. One of the girls noticed this and had to stop. "Hey Sakura, hold it." Sakura turned around and looked to see what Ino was doing and then noticed Hinata. The 2 girls ran back to their friend. "Hey Hinata, come on, we have to go." Hinata didn't respond at first, but she did smile. She turned towards her friends and gave a smile. "The wind, it's nice today, isn't?" Both Sakura and Ino sweat dropped. "Yeah, it's nice Hinata, but we have to get to class." Hinata nodded her head and began to follow, but then felt something coming from behind, but before she could turn around, a giant bird-like creature already flew past her, Ino and Sakura. All 3 girls were stunned at what they were seeing, especially since the demon bird was coming back towards them. The 3 girls were about to run, but the demon bird was too fast as it drew closer and landed right in front of them. The girls didn't know what to do as the demon just stood there looking at them. After a moment they heard something jump off the back of the giant bird's back and began to walk towards them. What they saw made them gasp, especially Hinata, as the figure stood in front of her with a fox-like grin. "Hey Hinata-kan." Hinata just smiled back. "Welcome back, Naruto-kun," as she ran towards and hugged him tightly. "Okay, my latest work. Tell me what you think and leave behind many reviews. Also, I would like apologize that this took so long to write this up, but I had things to do. Anyway, enjoy reading this chapter. Also, I got 2 ways this story can go through all of Naruto's pilgrimage, or do a time skip to where Naruto returns as a high summoner and becomes a guardian in a high summoner. Naruto had returned to Konoha ridding Valifor a few months ago. Upon his return to the village, Naruto did get into some trouble with the villagers and the council. However, despite the major headache that was caused by these people, Naruto would still rather deal with council than where he was now. As of right now, Naruto was standing in between the legs of Hyuga Aki as she was giving birth to her second child. Even now, Naruto was doing everything he was taught to make sure the birth was successful for both the mother and the baby. However, there were some problems with the delivery and this was making things difficult for Naruto. Aki had gone into labor ahead of schedule, but most of the medicine that was supposed to be used to help the pain was in short supply and Aki was losing a lot of blood. If that wasn't enough, the baby was giving to be corruptive either. The birth was breached, meaning that the baby enters the birth canal with the buttocks or feet first as opposed to the normal head first presentation. As Naruto worked with the other medical experts, he couldn't help but wish he was back to dealing with the bastards on the council. Last time. All three girls were stunned at what they were seeing, especially since the demon bird was coming back towards them. The three girls were about to run, but the demon bird was too fast as it drew closer and landed right in front of them. The girls didn't know what to do as the demon just stood there looking at them. After a moment they heard something jump off the back of the giant bird's back and began to walk towards them. What they saw made them gasp, especially Hinata, as the figure stood in front of her with a fox-like grin. "Hey Hinata-kan." Hinata just smiled back. "Welcome back Naruto-kun," as she ran towards and hugged him tightly. Naruto was being hugged by Hinata while Valifor was standing next to the two making a pouring-like noise as it was enjoying the cute scene in front of her. While Hinata held onto her friend listening to his heartbeat with a small blush on her face. Naruto simply stood there with a goofy grin on his face and a small blush while being held by his friend. While this was going on with them, Ino and Sakura on the other had own interest as they were staring at Valifor, admiring her beauty. After a while both Naruto and Hinata returned to earth and broke apart from their hug with a deep blush on their faces. It didn't help with both Sakura and Ino to giggle at their blushing friends. Eventually, Naruto had gotten over his embarrassment. "It's good to see you three again, I've missed all of you." The girls smiled at this, especially Hinata, while Valifor gave Naruto a nudge showing that she didn't like to be ignored. The blonde chuckled out of embarrassment at this, at forgetting his feathered friend, and introduced everyone. "Hinata-chan, Ino-chan, Sakura-chan, this is Valifor, the Eon of the Wind." "Valifor, these are my friends and they're very pleased to meet you." Valifor looked at the young girls in front of her and bowed her head to show respect. As she did this, the girls took a good look at the creature in front of them. Hinata had no problem with the giant bird since she had seen weirder things in her dreams ever since she had learned she was a summoner herself. Sakura stood far away from the giant bird in front of her. While she was intimidated by it, she trusted Naruto. Ino on the other hand loved what she was seeing and wanted to get as close as she could, maybe even get a chance to rid it. While the children were busy with their little reunion, they failed to notice the large group of villagers starting to gather around them. Looking into their eyes, Naruto could still see the hate and anger they had for him when he left the village. He assumed that after enough time had gone by in his status as a summoner and been announced, that they would at least try to reconsider their feelings about him. Sadly, that wasn't the case, as one asshole of a villager shouted, "The demon has returned and has brought a demon bird with him." Hearing this, many of the other villagers started shouting similar things as they began to close in on Naruto and the girls. Now thanks to his training with Orin, Naruto had gotten pretty good with his sword and could defend himself if need be, but if he fought, the girls would be caught in the middle and that was something he couldn't allow. Therefore, after weighing his options, Naruto decided to fall to his least favorite tactic, retreat. He turned around to Valifor, who could tell what he was planning as she lowered her back and allowed Naruto to hop on. Looking at the girls, Naruto made a motion to get on and they did. As the three girls held on to the giant bird, they started to get second thoughts as Valifor spread her wings and got off the ground just as a villager was about to stab her. As Valifor began to fly away the angry mob, she noticed that some of her passengers weren't so grateful to be in the air. Both Ino and Sakura were holding on to her feathers rather tightly and it was a bit annoying. Naruto didn't seem to have a problem with being in the air and was even laughing along with the young girl next to him, seemed to also enjoy it. Hokage Tower. At the tower of the Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage was working in his office doing unusually large amount of paperwork. He had everything sorted out and organized, and if he worked non-stop he could have his paperwork done by sunset and actually sleep at night. He began to read the first of many papers and enjoying the light breeze. Until the breeze suddenly picked up in what looked like a large bird, as if creature flew one window and out the other, scattering the papers everywhere. Seeing the mess around him, Sarutobi couldn't help but start to cry at all the other work he had to do. With Naruto and the others. After spending a few minutes in the air and having the times of their young lives, they eventually returned to the ground and landed right on top of the Yondaime head. Each of the children slid off the back of the flying Eon. Naruto and Hinata each had a huge smile of their face while Ino looked a bit nervous and Sakura looked a little green. Naruto stood by Valifor rubbing the feathers on her neck showing his appreciation for what she had done for him and his friends. While he was doing this the girls just looked at their blonde-haired friend with a new look of awe and amazement at what he had managed to accomplish. When he left a few months ago, they expected him to return a little stronger than he was and maybe pick up a trick or two on his travels. Never did they expect him to return on the back of a giant bird. Wanting answers, both Sakura and Ino looked at each other and then at Hinata with an evil look in their eyes that made the young Hyuga flinch out of fear. The two dragged Hinata away from Naruto and began to whisper something to her which caused her to turn red. When it looked like Hinata was about to object, Ino and Sakura said something that made Hinata turn redder as she walked back to Naruto. Very nervously Hinata looked to her blonde friend while pocking her fingers in her cute way and asked, Naruto-kun, could you tell us about your training and your adventures while you were away? To be honest, this isn't what Hinata wanted. While she wanted to know the things that happened with her friend, it felt wrong to her to just pry in what would be considered private, and forcing Naruto to tell about it wasn't right. Too bad her friends, too bad for her, her friends thought differently. Flashback. While Ino and Sakura were discussing their plan with Hinata, the young Hyuga wanted to object to until she saw the evil grin on their lips. You want to know just as badly as we do, Hinata-chan, and you're a lot closer to him than us, so he will talk to you. Hearing this, Hinata blushed at the implication that Ino was applying when she said closer strangely and would have told her off, but Sakura spoke next. And if you're still not connived, then you should know that you need a better place to hide your diary, Hinata-chan, you perv. Hinata's mouth hung open at hearing this as she turned a deeper shade of red. Seeing she had no choice, she went to her blonde friend and hoped he wouldn't be mad at her for intruding. With Naruto, he was gently brushing his hands against the soft feathers of his Eon blade that she was enjoying all the attention she was getting until he noticed Hinata walking back towards him looking nervous. Looking back at Ino and Sakura, he was a bit creeped out by the evil grins and began to wonder what they said that made Hinata turn red and just shook his, thinking that girls were weird. While this was going on, Ino and Sakura were watching the show in front of them, slightly enjoying themselves. While Ino would chuckle at how cute the two in front of her were at times. Sakura on the other hand looked a little concerned about what she just did. Do you think we went too far? Ino looked at her pink-haired friend and gave a reassuring smile. Not a chance, the only thing wrong here is that we don't have any popcorn for the show. Hearing this, Sakura's sweat dropped. Back with the young couple, Hinata stood in front of Naruto doing her finger thing and staring at the blonde, unable to find the right words to say. Naruto on the other hand just kept waiting for Hinata to say or do something while thinking about how cute the finger thing she did was cute. When Hinata finally found the words she needed to say, she noticed the bandages that were covered Naruto's hands. Seeing the injuries to Naruto's hands, Hinata again lost what she was about to say and gasped at the bandages covering her friend's hands. Hearing her gasp and seeing that she was staring right at his injury, Naruto tired hiding both his hands behind his back in a vain attempt to him them and not be asked about them. Too bad for Naruto that he was friends with a girl that just couldn't ignore as serious injuries as his without asking questions. Naruto-kun, what happened to your hands? Naruto didn't answer at first, he even refused to look at her in the eye. Hinata could see that he didn't want to talk about, and she knew she had to right to get into what would very personal, and as much as she wanted to respect that, she had to know what happened. Taking a deep, Hinata grabbed both hands and placed both of them with her own and asked with as much muster as she could, Naruto, please, tell me what happened to your hands, please. Hearing the pleading tone in Hinata's voice, Naruto didn't have the heart to lie to his friend and knew she expected a real answer as to what happened. He also didn't want to lie and ruin the friendship he had with Hinata, but he also didn't want her to worry about his well-being all the time. Going over his choices, Naruto decided to tell her what happened in Suna and hoped she would take it well. So, he sat on the ground and told everyone to gather around to hear what happened. Council chambers. The village of Konoha, like any other sociality, was run by a system of government to keep it running properly. There were three major powers in charge of the village of Konoha that made sure the village ran successfully and effectively. The first power was the Civilian Council. The Civilian Council was meant to keep order for non-shinobi members of the village. They were given the job of keeping order with merchants, owners of major industrial companies and finances, etc. The members of the Civilian Council were people whose skills laid in keeping track of finances, people who were well respected and elected into a position. There were even people who were formerly shinobi but forced to retire for one reason or another but still wanted to contribute to their home. The second power was the Shinobi Council. The Shinobi Council was meant to keep order for shinobi-related activities. They were given the job of deciding how the shinobi operated, what countries to trade with, who to keep tabs on, and even when to attack in case of war between them. The members of the Shinobi Council were made up of the Shinobi clan heads, both major clans and lesser clans. However, some members were made up of full-fledged shinobi with experience and large amounts of time in the field and survived. The third and final power was with the Hokage as leader of the village. Out of the three powers, the Hokage had the most. No real major decisions could be made without the approval of the Hokage behind it. Sure, while the other two council members could do things like organizing trade with village on the outskirts of Fire Country or sending a small band of shinobi to a disturbance in the local towns. They couldn't, however, order a squad of Anbu to spy on a hostile village or the assassination of a powerful daimyo. Such things were meant to be beyond the two groups to keep them from gaining too much power. Too bad, the civilians didn't seem to agree with that, as lately they did what they could to ensure they had a hand with everything that went on within the village. They started reducing large amounts of much for their own projects, saying that should not be wasted on petty and unimportant things like the orphanage and the remodeling of the village walls, as well as increase the prices on all shinobi gear. They also took an approach onto how the academy graduation system worked and who should be passing and when. By bribing the teachers to let certain children pass and believing that with many numbers they would still be considered the strongest village even with weak shinobi. There was also the amount of illegal products that were allowed into the village due to the civilians' hunger for profit and failure to see the poison it was spreading towards the rest of the village. Since the death of the Yondaime, the more power-hungry civilians were able to get their hands on nearly everything, and before anything could really be done to stop them, and by the time something could be done they had already made it so that if anything happened they could easily put the village in great danger. So since the shinobi couldn't do much of anything to stop the tyrants on the council, they decided to play with their arrogant nature until they slipped up and could be taken down permanently, and village could start truly prospering again. That chance might be presenting itself soon, as lately the civilians' council had been biting off more than they could chew and had been barely able to cover their tracks. It was only a matter of time before they did something stupid and Sarutobi would be forced to remove them as a true threat to the village. As Sarutobi took on his place in the council room, the meeting had officially began. Seeing the Hokage was in place, the civilians began the meeting with what they considered the utmost impertinence as to regards of the sightings of the demon child returning riding a demon bird of some sorts. Seeing the little monster return had proven without a doubt that it revenge for its defeat from several years ago when it caused the death of the Yondaime. To them the demon had obviously left the village, regained its evil power, and had now returned with a demon bird and possibly an army to start wreaking havoc upon the innocent civilians that got in its path. Now with the Hokage, the council could show him his mistake of letting the monster live and get someone more capable to lead the village. The speaker of the civilian, a fat and pompous man named Masao Koji, who had lived the life of a pampered child and never even seen a battlefield or been into a fight in life, and yet he believed he fully understood the ways of a shinobi, and thus was the reason he was allowed to be the official spokesman. They believed with Koji that the civilians could finally get rid of the demon and finally have all they needed run Konoha as they saw fit. Koji stood in front the entire council dressed in finest and most expensive kimono and jewelry, courtesy of the increased taxes upon the common folk. To him it was unthinkable that he should have to spend his own hard-earned money when he could just get from the lowly commoners. After clearing his throat, Koji began his speech. Hokage-sama, my fellow council members, it has come to my attention that a great threat has returned to our beloved village and action must be taken. Hearing this, many members of the shinobi all had similar thoughts. What is that fat fuck bitching about now? While the shinobi was thinking this, the civilians were whispering to each other in mock surprised, acting as if they didn't know what Koji was saying. With Koji, it has been brought to my and a few others' attention that Uzumaki Naruto has been seen in the village. Hearing this, Sarutobi and the shinobi members started to actually pay attention to the fat ass windbag as he went on. The boy known as Naruto dispersed without a trace a few months ago to unknown location without informing anyone where he was going and not waiting to be granted cleared from the council to be allowed to leave, and was not marked as a missing nin. Many of the non-civilian members looked at each other wondering, since when did someone who wasn't a shinobi need permission to leave the village, and since when did the civilian council need to be informed of such things at all? Koji keeps speaking. It has been brought to the attention of this council that we believe that the boy has most likely gone towards an enemy village to divulge secrets and point out weakness that could lead to an invasion by our enemies. Hearing this, all of civilian members started nodded their heads in agreement, while the shinobi members and Sarutobi just looked at them as if they were joking about a child know a real secret test about the village. However, to their disbelief, the man was actually serious. Koji, looking around, seeing his fellow civilians were following his every word like puppets, and that the shinobi just sat there looking at him and not saying anything, until Inuzuka Sume opened her mouth and bluntly responded, "Are you fucking joking, or are you really fucking stupid?" Hearing this response from the Inuzuka bitch angered Koji, but he kept his cool. He needed to remain calm if he were to get the rest of the council on his side. He turned to the Inuzuka clan head and smiled. Soon-san, I assure that this no joking matter. The demon child has returned to our village and has even brought a demonic bird with him. The first of perhaps many. We must take action before it's too late to stop that monster before it's too late. At the words, demon, and monster, Sarutobi glared at the man in front of him. Koji-san, I would advise you to watch what you say. Koji heard the Hokage threat and scoffed at it, surprising both Sarutobi and the shinobi council at the man's boldness. Koji looked straight into Sarutobi's eye without any sign of fear or nervousness and simply spoke, "Shut up, you old fuck." With these words the entire council room went dead in silence at what they had just heard out of the head of the civilian council say to the strongest man in the village. No one, not even the arrogant Uchiha, were stupid enough to something like that. Sarutobi, however, didn't show any looks of being surprised or even flinch at Koji's words. He simply asked, "What did you say, Masao-san?" Koji gave an arrogant smile. "I said, shut up, you old fuck," Koji said with clear annoying now showing in his voice. "What are you going deaf, you pathetic worthless old monkey? I thought I told you to keep your mouth shut, damn it." For the longest time no one spoke or made any type of sound. Almost everyone was too stunned to do anything and didn't know what to think. Koji believed he already knew everything that was going on. "You listen here, you damn old fart. I, like many others, are sick of you ordering us around like you actually have the right to do so or the power to do it. We, the civilians, are the true owners of this village, not you or the damn shinobi. All you are nothing but dogs whom we're trained to bit when we order you to. Also, as far as that little demon brat goes, we aren't as pathetic as you are naive fools to actually believe that demons is a boy. Hell, it's not even human. It is obvious that thing is pretending to be human to blend in. Hell, I almost believed it was human when I took a couple of shoots at it during one of its birthdays." Many gasps at this. Even some of the civilians who believed Koji was revealing a little too much information and should stop now before he did something truly regrettable. But before anyone could step in, Sum in her rage slammed his fist on the table and spoke out of anger. "You bastard, you to tell us you actually took part in those beating that nearly led to his death." Despite the look of outrage that was clearly on her face, Sum couldn't miss the guilt she was feeling for being somewhat like this fool when it came to Naruto and not wanting to get involved. Before her son became friends with the boy, she wouldn't have thought twice about the blonde-haired child or even bat an eye towards him unless ordered to. But after hearing about the kid of person he was from Kiba, she saw that he was just a normal child who had no one to turn to. It also helped to show her that she was acting no better than the bastard civilians in front of her when they beat the kid to an inch of his life. Koji was not happy, and he leased at the Inuzuka outburst. He hadn't respected the woman at all, believing she, out of all the miserable dogs that the shinobi were, she should have easily know her place in the grand scheme of things, and she, like the rest bastardized clan, went obedient. So, Koji put on his best glare and used as much killer intent as he could, which no one really noticed, it being so weak and barely detectable. Walked up to the Inuzuka woman and grabbed her by the chest and put on lecherous smile. "Why don't you keep your mouth shut, bitch? A dog like shouldn't do anything but bark on their master's order. Now be a good little girl and I'll give you a special treat later. Hell, I even let that daughter of yours join in on the fun." After Koji made this little comment, Sarutobi decided enough was enough and took a deep breath, catching Koji's attention and his annoyance. So Koji went right back to Sarutobi's face, still of arrogance, as he got right into the face of the god of the shinobi. "Did I say you could speak, you worthless worm?" And with that he spites in Sarutobi's face. Seeing Sarutobi did nothing, as the saliva fall down on his face, which only added to arrogance, continued, "I didn't think so, you pathetic fool. It's like you have finally come to terms with your proper place in this world." Koji turns his head to the rest of the shinobi in the room. "You call I'll learn a thing or two from this old fool." To make his final sign of superiority, or to put the final nail on his coffin, as Koji made his last statement with his index finger right at Sarutobi to mock at his weakest. How wrong Koji was, for Sarutobi had enough. All the bullshit the civilian council had been given him over the years had reached his breaking point. He was going to show the arrogant the sack of shit who really ran the village. The moment Koji's index finger was in Sarutobi's face, he made a grab for it, and before anyone saw anything, a loud cracking noise was heard. Everyone turned their attention and gasped at what they saw, especially Koji, as his finger was now broken in half, and before he even got a chance to scream, Sarutobi gave a hard pull on the broken finger and tore it clear off the hand. After Sarutobi did this, Koji let out a loud and pained scream for the loss of his torn finger. As he held it tightly, trying to stop the bleeding, as he glared at Sarutobi, trying to get as much killer intent as he could muster. "You bastard, look what you, old fuck." Sarutobi did nothing but toss the severed finger back at the screaming man, who never stopped glaring at him despite his injury. "You're senile fool, this is just the proof that we need to show that you can no longer be the Hokage, and that said position cannot be held by a worthless shinobi." Many in the room gasped, trying to decide whether this guy had gone insane with the pain or he was trying badly to stage a coup and had just failed everything. Sarutobi decided to play with this mon's stupidity, but he could use this to weed out anyone else that was cooperating with him. Seeing this opportunity to finally have a reason to dismiss the civilians from the council for good, now this is why Sarutobi was considered a professor among the shinobi. Koji-san, I'm afraid my hearing isn't what it used to be with my old age, could you repeat yourself? Hearing this, every member of the council looked at the Hokage as if he was joking and thinking that someone would actually be stupid enough to incriminate themselves in a room full of people. Koji, however, in his moment of brilliance decided that this would be something rub the old bastard's face in. I said that you are longer what we need for a Hokage and need to be replaced with someone of our choosing, not some shinobi dog who follow that will of fire trash. Hearing this, Sarutobi began to clench his fingers at this man mocking his late sensei's philosophy. That's right, we the civilians feel that a shinobi, who is nothing more but a tool of war, has no place as the leader of the village. So therefore, as leader of the civilian council, we order you to stand down immediately. Everyone looked at the man as if he was crazy. Even his own council members that were behind him were now having his second thoughts about siding with lunatic. Sarutobi could see that was at his breaking point, and the blood he was suffering was also helping, so he asked one thing that would seal the deal. Koji-san, I have one more thing to ask. Are all the members of the civilian council behind you in this? Before anyone could respond and try to stop him, Koji spoke. That's right, we are all in this, and we already have someone who would make a greater Hokage than any shinobi possibly could. Sarutobi smiled. This was all he needed. All right then, Anbu. At this, several shinobi dressed in black wearing different animal masks suddenly appeared behind each member of the civilian council. The leader of the group, Akunoichi, wearing a cat mask, spoke. Fist, your orders, Hokage-sama. Sarutobi spoke in a tone that many hadn't heard since the last shinobi war. Take each former member of the civilian council to integration on the crimes of treason and attempting a coup. The cat mask Anbu simply nodded. By your order, Hokage-sama. Too bad some members of the council couldn't take the hint, as Koji decided to make things worse for himself. This is an outrage. You can't do this to us. We are the rulers of Konoha. We own this village. We own you. You can't do to us. We are your masters. Tired of hearing this loudmouth idiot, another Anbu member with purple hair and wearing a mask of a snake gave Koji a punch to the jaw, knocking him and silencing him for good. Sarutobi looked at the young Kunoichi and smiled. Glad he made the decision to make some shinobi Anbu behind the council backs. The Kunoichi in front of him, for example, was officially only a special Junin due to past connections towards to her nuke nin sensei, but unofficially she was a full Anbu member whose loyalties were to the Hokage first and the village second. With this, Sarutobi thought it best to give the girl an early charisma's gift. Hubby-san, I'm also allowing the use of the black files for as long as you like. Hearing this, the snake Anbu looked at the Hokage to if he was joking, but when she noticed he was serious, she squealed like a little schoolgirl and gave a huge grin behind her mask. Arigato, Hokage-sama, she said before using Shunshin no Jutsu to leave. Everyone looked at the Hokage confused. The black files are integration techniques that have been labeled forbidden in every shinobi village and are to be used only for the highest of crimes. To anyone working in the interrogation department that is allowed to use such techniques would be a dream come true for those who enjoy their work. Everyone shivered at this, knowing how much the snake Anbu loved her work. With all this was settled, Sarutobi began to walk out the room, leaving some members to ask, where are you going, Hokage-sama? The ancient leader of the village just smiled. To pay a grandson of mine a visit. With Naruto and the others. Back with Naruto and the girls, our blonde-haired summoner had just finished telling everyone what had happened to him in Suna, and each of the reactions were unique. Sakura was horrified that someone like Yoshimaru would try to kill his own nephew for something that wasn't his fault, and a bit skeptical about the FAR plan. Ino was amazed at learning the history of the past summoners and was a little concerned with these fallen eons and this sin thing, and also wanted to meet these new friends of Naruto. Hinata, on the other hand, didn't know whether to be proud of Naruto of all Naruto had done or be angry for his recklessness or happy that Naruto got to meet his mother. Before she could say anything, a sound of two hands clapping was heard in the background. The children looked at who had joined them to see the Sarutobi standing there with a smile on his face. Good to see you, Naruto-kun, how have you been? Seeing the leader of their village, each of the girls bowed to him as a sign of respect. Naruto, on the other hand, did no such thing. In fact, he had a look of what appeared to be anger on his face. Seeing this look confused Sarutobi and for some reason and made him a bit nervous as the blonde walked up to slowly. When Naruto finally reached the old Hokage but didn't make any eye contact. Heiji-san, I learned something important on my pilgrimage, would you like to hear it? Hearing the eerily sweet voice Naruto was doing frightened Sarutobi somewhat as the blonde continued. On my pilgrimage I went to a very special place called the Farplane. Ever hear of it? Hearing the name Farplane, Sarutobi had to think since it had been so long since he had heard that in a while. The Farplane is the land of the dead. Ji-san, and while I was there I meet a very nice lady with red hair and who was really good with a sword. Suddenly it all fit together, and before Sarutobi could come up with an answer, Naruto looked him dead in the eye. The woman name was Uzumaki Kushina. My ka-san, why didn't you ever tell me, damn it? Sarutobi sighed. He knew he couldn't deny it, it would only cause more problems between the boy. Naruto, if you know who your parents are, then you know that they both had many enemies both inside and outside the village. Naruto nodded at his knowing he couldn't deny it. Also, if said enemies realized who you were and your connections towards your parents, your life would have been a lot worse. As much as Naruto wanted to scream bullshit, he knew he couldn't. Still, you could have least giving me something, at least a name would have been nice, of at least no one of their names would have been nice. Sarutobi knew the boy had a point. I'm sorry Naruto, do you think you could ever forgive an old fool? Naruto stood there in thought, considering if he should really forgive the old man in front of him. While he knew that the old man only acted out of what he thought were his best interest, it still pissed him off that he was kept in the dark. However, the man in front of him was the closest thing to family he ever had, and he really didn't want to lose any kind of connection with him. While Naruto was thinking, Valifor was kinda tired of the boy's stubbornness and decided to nudge Naruto roughly to force him to make a decision. Naruto, seeing that Valifor was trying to make a point as she nudges him rather hard, and forced his hand. Sighing, Naruto made his decision, as if I could stay mad at Yuji-san. The Hokage smiled at hearing Blonde's response and was relieved that the boy in front of him didn't hate him, and bent down to give him a hug. As he looked at the Genet bird and gave a silent thank you to the bird, to which it resounded with a nod to its head. Too bad for Sarutobi that while he was doing this he failed to notice Naruto's hands going off his robes and grabbing his wallet, the young blonde determined to get his revenge by eating as much ramen as possible with the Hokage's own money. Streets of the village. The group had left the Hokage monument and began walking through the village after Naruto had dismissed Valifor and suggesting grabbing some ramen. While they were heading to Naruto's favorite ramen stand, Sarutobi noticed something was missing with Naruto. Naruto, where is your guardian? Naruto looked at Sarutobi, then turned pure white and started shaking a bit, scaring the others around him into believing he was a ghost. This was followed by a loud, "Oh crap, I left them behind." Seeing his nervousness, Hinata tried to comfort the blonde. "It's okay Naruto, I'm sure they will understand." Naruto looked at his friend, still scared for his life. "Not with Tayuya, nothing I say or do will get me off the hook, and when she finds me she's going to kill." Bad choice of words for Naruto. Damn fucking right, I going to fucking kill, you fucking little shit. Naruto turned to where the voice had come from, and to his horror stood a red-faced Tayuya with a look of murder seen only in the eyes of a predator before they made their kill. Naruto backed away slowly from the redhead in front of him, whom was creaking her knuckles loudly. "Any last words, fucker?" Naruto asked the only thing he could in a squeaky voice. "Mercy." His answer was a rather painful pouch to the face. "No fucking way asshole," Tayuya shouted. As the blonde was taking his beating, everyone else watched this, clearly wanting to help the blonde but too afraid of Tayuya to do anything about it. So they just sat back and watched the show as Oren and Kim walked up behind and saw beating his student and side-hopping Tayuya didn't kill him. Kim just wanted to approach her friend but knew that was the best way to let Tayuya vent. Since this could take a while, Kin decided to introduce herself to Naruto's other friends and see if they would like her. So walking up the friendliest looking member of the group, Kin decided to make her introduction. "Hello, my name is Kin, the summoner of trust, it's nice to meet you," and bowed to be polite. The person who she was talking to also smiled as well. "Nice to meet you, I'm Hyuga Hinata, the summoner of death," she so bowed as well. Kin knew that this was going to like this girl, gave a polite smile until a loud scream was heard and a bit of blood hit the ground. Hinata looked at Kin with a worried expression. Your friend isn't going to kill Naruto-kun, is she?" Kin looked back the puddle that was once Naruto and gave a reassuring smile. "Of course not, Naruto will be just fine, but thought, I hope so anyway." Hearing this, Hinata worried faded a little, was still a little concerned for her friend. After a while, Tayuya eventually stopped beating Naruto, walked over to Hinata and the others, and introduced herself to everyone. "Tayuya, now who the fuck are you?" Hinata and the other girls gasped, never really hearing language like that before, but decided not to commit on it seeing the puddle Naruto had become. "I'm Hyuga Hinata, this is Sakura and Ino," the two just waved, not interested in going near the strange redhead. Tayuya looked at the Hyuga and gave a smirk. "So you're the little white-eyed girl this blonde dipshit is always having wet dreams about." Hearing this, everyone in that had her the girl blushed, including Naruto, who denied everything. Hinata on the other hand just blushed at this, which caused Tayuya to laugh and swing her arm around Hinata. "I think you are going to get along just fine, Hinata-chan." Hinata just nodded her head. "So why don't you show me and Kin around this village?" With that they all began to walk off while a anime tear crying Naruto just laid on the ground. "No fair, so was supposed to be my homecoming.